The moment he opened his eyes, the first thing he heard was the sound of a woman's heavy breathing nearby. The sound was soft and intermittent, carrying a distinct, unmistakable tremble. He turned his head, using the faint light filtering through the window, to finally see her clearly. Even in the shadows, her face was as beautiful as fine porcelain, though the bruises on her collarbone were a jarring sight. He found himself wondering what on earth was going on here. Flashes of a belt snapping, breaking glass, and a woman's sobbing filled his mind as he looked at those scars. He realized with a shock that he had done this. He had been reborn into the body of a man with his same name. This man, Chun Zuisheng, was a hopeless alcoholic and a domestic abuser who spent his days doing absolutely nothing. In his past life, our Zuisheng had been a multi-billionaire, a true legend in the world of business. Now, he had woken up as the master of this dilapidated house, a pathetic, violent addict who beat his wife. The woman whispered, asking if he was awake and if he was having trouble sleeping. She offered to get up and pour him a cup of tea, her voice filled with a quiet, lingering fear. He told her there was no need and that she should just stay in bed and sleep. He tried to keep his voice as gentle as possible, yet she still reacted like a startled rabbit. He watched her walk barefoot across the cold concrete floor, and as she reached the door, she instinctively looked back. She wasn't looking at him, but at their daughter in the corner. The look in Su Ming's eyes as she watched the girl made this man, who was used to the cutthroat world of business, feel as though his heart was being crushed. In his previous life, he had negotiated billion-dollar deals and met with powerful world leaders. He had been with countless women and honestly thought he had seen everything the world had to offer. But he had never seen a woman like this, someone so badly hurt, whose first instinct upon waking was still to be careful. She was terrified of waking the man who beat her, and her second instinct, naturally, was to check if their daughter was sleeping soundly. We see Zuisheng sit up and rub his temples as a flood of dark, fragmented memories continues to pour into his mind. The original owner of this body was a degenerate gambler who took his losses out on his wife, often shouting for her to shut up. He would call her a worthless woman, blaming her for his own bad luck, with the beatings only getting worse the more he drank. Once, Su Ming was bedridden for 3 days, yet she still had to crawl up to cook for this man, who lived in total idleness. The entire household relied on Su Ming's fruit stall at the market, where she earned a pittance that he would immediately gamble away. When he lost, he returned to demand more. He didn't even care when their daughter, Qianqian, had a fever of 39 degrees. At that time, he had simply answered the phone at the gambling table with a cold, indifferent remark. He told them he was busy playing cards and to only call him back once the girl was actually dead. And then we come to yesterday, where after losing yet again, he told his creditors they could take Su Ming as collateral. He asked how much she was worth, dismissively questioning her value even as he prepared to sell her off like an object. He boasted of her beauty, telling the debt collectors to come by the next day so they could see the merchandise for themselves. Which brings us to today, the very day those men are scheduled to arrive at the house to inspect what they are buying. Zuisheng closed his eyes and took a deep breath just as Su Ming approached, quietly bringing him a cup of tea. Little Qianqian let out a restless whimper in her sleep, prompting him to lift the mosquito net and take the cup from his wife. He told her to come inside the net, noting that it would be bad if the mosquitoes bit the child, causing Su Ming to look up in shock. To be honest, she could hardly believe that the man who usually offered only blows and insults was capable of saying such a thing. She climbed into bed to soothe Qianqian, lying with her back to him, her entire body tense and ready for a sudden strike. After a long silence, she finally whispered with a trembling voice, asking him if he was still unable to fall asleep. He gave a low grunt of affirmation, and it seemed as though she was simply waiting for any signal at all from him. Her fingers trembled as she began to undo the buttons of her pajamas, whispering for him to be quiet so the bed wouldn't creak. Her voice held a hollow, resigned numbness, and in that moment, the realization hit Zuisheng like a physical blow. The original owner of this body had actually forced his wife to submit to him right there beside their daughter, just to appease his temper. A wave of intense nausea and fury surged through him, followed quickly by an even sharper, more overwhelming sense of heartache. He reached out and firmly caught her hand before she could undo another button, looking Su Ming directly in the eyes. For the first time, he spoke her name with genuine care, telling her she never had to do that again, causing her to tremble violently. Her eyes widened in total shock and confusion, containing a tiny, flickering spark of hope that she didn't yet dare to show. He told her to just sleep, promising to give her and Qianqian a decent life, and as the words left his lips, a plan began to form. We see him wake up just as the sun begins to rise. It wasn't out of habit, but rather a new sense of purpose. The urgent impulse to change their lives was burning in his chest, making it impossible for him to stay asleep any longer. Su Ming was carefully lifting Qianqian from the bed when she saw him open his eyes, jumping back in sudden fright. She immediately began to apologize, but he cut her off gently, explaining that he had simply woken up on his own. He sat up and told her that he would take Qianqian to school today before joining her at her market stall. Business had been poor lately, and he knew she assumed he was only coming along to demand more of her hard-earned money. Fear had become her natural instinct, but he offered no further explanation as he stood up and walked toward the kitchen. The refrigerator held nothing but a few eggs and a bowl of cold rice, a sight so empty it was truly heart-wrenching. When he eventually placed 2 plates of golden, fragrant egg-fried rice on the table, Su Ming and Qian stood frozen. They watched him as if they were witnessing a miracle that their minds simply couldn't comprehend. Little Qian looked up with a face full of wonder, amazed to discover that her father actually knew how to cook. Su Ming didn't say a word. She only stared at him with a gaze that was heavy with 1,000 complicated emotions. The market was a chaotic, noisy reality, and as we see Zuisheng standing before Su Ming's fruit stall, he couldn't help but frown. It was far too simple, just one type of apple, piled up in a messy heap with a cardboard sign that was barely legible. The sign read $3.80, while the woman at the neighboring vegetable stall began shouting at the top of her lungs. She mocked him, noting that the sun must have risen in the west today, since Zuisheng had actually shown up to help. He didn't even give her a glance. His mind was racing, realizing that this single-product stall had absolutely no competitive edge. The pricing was rigid, the profit margins were razor-thin, and the sparse flow of customers showed no interest whatsoever. Su Ming needed to go pay the management fee, but before leaving, she gave him an uneasy look and whispered a final instruction. She reminded him the apples cost $3 wholesale. He simply nodded, watching her walk away while looking back every 3 steps. He crouched down, weighing one of the thin red plastic bags in his hand while observing the crowd of people hurrying past. As they ignored the small stall, a plan to instantly ignite demand began to form clearly in his mind. He grabbed a piece of hard cardboard from an electrical box, picked up a marker from the ground, and wrote 2 bold lines. Without a moment's hesitation, he tore down the old price tag and placed his new sign in the most prominent position possible. The neighbor leaned over to look and nearly choked in surprise. The sign now read, $20 a bag, fill it yourself. She laughed, telling Chen Zuisheng that his brain must have finally been pickled in alcohol to come up with such a thing. She warned him he'd lose everything, but he only stood up slowly and gave her a calm, knowing smile. He told her that business isn't just about counting pennies, and that his goal wasn't the profit from a single bag of apples. What he needed was to clear the inventory in the shortest time possible to recover his capital. He intended to breathe life back into this dying stall, and to be honest, the new sign started working almost immediately. An older man approached, asking with genuine disbelief if it really was only $20 for a bag he could fill himself. The man worried they might be sour, so Zuisheng picked one up and deftly sliced it open to offer him a taste. Zuisheng told him the sweetness was for him to judge, and after one taste, the man didn't say another word. He grabbed a bag and started stuffing it, so full it looked ready to burst, while Zuisheng simply watched with a smile. He told the man that as long as he could carry the bag, the apples were his, a statement that opened the floodgates. Suddenly, the crowd surged forward. $20 wasn't much, but the idea of an unlimited fill was irresistible. Those words instantly ignited the most primal human impulses, leaving the neighbor with a frozen, stunned expression on her face. Her mouth hung open as she watched the frantic crowd and the apples disappearing at an incredible speed. She didn't even notice the scales slipping from her hand as Su Ming returned, her heart heavy with worry. From a distance, she saw her stall being swallowed by a sea of people, and her face turned pale with fear. Assuming Zuisheng had caused some new disaster, she desperately squeezed through the crowd, only to be frozen by what she saw. She saw him standing behind the stall, neither humble nor angry, but perfectly steady and composed. He was simply collecting money and handing out bags while the people around him were practically fighting over her apples. The very apples that usually took all day to sell were now vanishing right before her eyes. When she finally saw the sign for $20 a bag, her face went white and she hissed that he must be crazy. She was certain they would lose everything, but he calmly pointed to the plastic bags and told her not to worry. He explained that even a full bag had its limits and they were still profiting. The customers simply felt they were winning. They were rushing to give him their money, and as she looked at the long line, she asked how much they had sold. He told her they were nearing $500, and her eyes widened as she stared at him in disbelief. It was as if she were looking at a complete stranger. With the apples nearly gone and the line still growing, he asked her a question. He asked if she wanted to restock, and the people in line immediately began shouting for the boss to get more inventory. Su Ming quickly made the call, following his lead to order an entire truckload from their supplier, Oldly. Watching the scene unfold, Zuisheng took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. As the time to collect the debt approached, more than half the truckload had vanished, and Oldly sat there counting on his fingers. He was utterly shocked, realizing that they must have sold over 1,000 pounds of apples already. Su Ming couldn't believe her ears, asking for the total, and Zuisheng noted the revenue was roughly 4,300. To some, this might seem like a small sum, but for this family, it was the first step towards standing tall again. Su Ming felt dazed, remembering how he used to struggle to earn that much in a month. Soon, they began packing up the stall. Zuisheng then took Su Ming to buy groceries, spending nearly $300 on fish, meat, and ribs. Her lips moved as if to protest the cost, but she stayed silent. He knew she was worried, yet today, they simply had to celebrate. When they went to pick up little Qian, the girl saw her father's hands full of groceries and cheered with pure joy. She asked if they were having a feast, and he promised her sweet and sour fish along with braised ribs. He leaned down to nuzzle her cheek, and she shouted that she loved her daddy more than anything. She jumped and danced around him while Su Ming watched, her gaze finally softening as she looked at them. There was a time when this home held only silence and fear, but now, we see it finally gaining a bit of warmth. The three of them walked home laughing and talking, with little Qian chattering away like a happy bird. Su Ming wore a faint smile, and for Zuixing, this simple picture was everything he had hoped for in his new life. As they passed the corner grocery store, Qian suddenly tugged on his sleeve, her eyes sparkling with excitement. She pointed at a glass jar inside the shop, calling out for her father to look at the bright red goldfish. They were just ordinary fish worth a few dollars, but in Qian's eyes, they were the most precious treasures in the world. Zuixing agreed to buy them immediately, and Su Ming turned back to them with a nod of approval. She told them she would head back first to wash the vegetables, hurrying toward their home just a few yards away. In front of that dilapidated apartment building, we see Zuixing holding little Qian as they pick out a fishbowl at the grocery store. Out of the corner of his eye, he notices several figures drifting toward his door, blocking Su Ming just as she reaches for her keys. His heart sinks as a voice calls out, "Sister-in-law, we've been waiting for you," causing Su Ming to jump in terror. She takes a wary step back, asking what they want, while a man with dyed yellow hair approaches her with a mocking grin. He claims he's just there to remind her that her husband, Zuixing, lost her as a stake at the gambling table last night. He suggests she should take his place to keep the boys entertained, and at those words, Su Ming's entire body begins to tremble. The groceries she was carrying slipped from her hands and crashed to the ground as her face turns a deathly, sickly pale. She looks as if all the strength has been drained from her soul, prompting Zuixing to drop everything and rush toward her. Su Ming has already turned her back on the thugs, facing the direction where Zuixing is approaching with their daughter. Every drop of color has vanished from her face, leaving only silent tears to stream down as she stares at him. She watches him holding their daughter in a goldfish bowl, looking for all the world like a good father, and her lips begin to quiver. It seems as though she wants to say something, and then he hears her scream his name, Chen Zuixing. She asks if he spent a whole day and night putting on this elaborate performance just to trick her into jumping into this fire herself. Suddenly, she stoops down to grab the fallen bag of vegetables from the ground, her movements frantic and desperate. With every ounce of her strength, she hurls them at him, screaming that she hates him and never wants to see him again. She declares she is divorcing him as the vegetables scatter across his clothes. Little Qian, meanwhile, is absolutely terrified. The little girl bursts into tears, sobbing for her mother not to hit her father, but Zuixing doesn't even have time to speak. Su Ming turns to bolt into the house, but she doesn't make it. A man named Sanjiao reaches out and grabs her wrist firmly. He tells her not to be in such a hurry to leave, his hand creeping up her arm with a disgusting, leering smile. He reminds her that her husband put it all in writing, and tonight, she has to go with them. Su Ming freezes in place, the terror on her face far more intense than before as the gravity of the moment sinks in. Deep down, something inside Zuixing snaps. His voice turns ice cold as he demands they let her go, sensing the pain he's caused. He possesses a lethal edge honed by 10 years of hardship, something these thugs haven't seen, and he delivers a sharp slap across Sanjiao's face. The man staggers back several steps, blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Everyone present is momentarily stunned into silence. Sanjiao snaps and orders his men to kill him, lunging forward like a madman with his fists flying toward Zuixing. Zuixing sidesteps the attack and delivers a powerful kick to the man's stomach, sending him flying back to writhe on the ground in agony. The remaining 3 thugs rush in with curses, but Zuixing moves with blinding speed, landing elbows and driving his knees into them. He utilizes the combat techniques learned in his past life, striking with precision. In less than a minute, the fight is over. As the 4 men lie defeated on the ground, we hear little Qian behind him, raising her tiny fists and cheering for her father. She shouts for him to beat the bad guys while Su Ming remains silent. Meanwhile, Zuixing walks calmly over to the fallen Sanjiao. He places a foot firmly on the man's chest and looks down at him, making it clear that he needs to listen very carefully. He declares that all past debts are wiped clean, warning that if they ever return, he will beat them every single time. The thug tries to act tough, stuttering that Zuixing owes them money and threatening to call the police to report him. Zuixing lets out a short, dry laugh at the mention of the police, noting the irony of gamblers wanting to involve the law. He asks if they need a reminder of the penalty for organized gambling, mentioning he has evidence on his phone and offering to call for them. Their faces turn pale instantly as they stammer out an apology to Brother Chung, begging for forgiveness before scrambling to leave. He stops them with a word, glancing back at Su Ming, who is still trembling, and demands that they apologize to his wife first. Though they look utterly humiliated, the thugs bow their heads to apologize to her before Zuixing finally tells them to get out. He kicks Sanjiao aside, watching as they scramble away in a panic. Finally, the world is quiet as he turns back to his family. He looks at Su Ming, whose face is still stained with tears and whose body continues to shake as she stares back at him. In her eyes, we see a mixture of fear, doubt, and a deep, lingering hurt that pierces Zuixing's heart like a needle. He walks toward her and looks directly into her eyes, speaking every word with heavy sincerity as he calls out her name, Su Ming. He admits that the Zuixing she once knew was nothing but a scoundrel, and that the things he did in the past were unforgivable. Dying 10,000 times wouldn't be enough to pay for his mistakes. He doesn't ask for her immediate forgiveness, only for a chance. He begs her to give him one more opportunity, swearing on his very life that from this day forward, things will be different. He vows that if he ever lets her or little Qianqian suffer even a moment of grievance again, he deserves a miserable end. Su Ming gazes at him as large tears begin to fall. Her lips tremble, and finally, with eyes reddened by emotion, she lets it out. She shouts that he is an absolute bastard, her voice cracking under the weight of years of disappointment. She tells him she won't believe him again before grabbing Qianqian's hand and rushing inside the house. The door slams shut, but notably, she doesn't mention the divorce again, which, for now, is enough, so he heads into the kitchen. Soon, the aroma of sweet and sour fish and braised ribs fills the air, and he carries the meal to the bedroom door. He knocks gently, telling her dinner is ready and not to let the child go hungry. He adds that he'll be sleeping on the sofa. After setting the tray down, he turns to leave, just as Qianqian's tiny voice drifts from behind the door, whispering how good it smells. A little later, the faint sound of chopsticks hitting bowls can be heard. It seems his cooking has done its job. Lying on the hard sofa and staring at the ceiling, he knows the road ahead is long, but his direction has never been clearer. He is determined to protect them and fix this home. As he ponders this, the bedroom door creaks open just a tiny crack. He quickly closes his eyes and pretends to be asleep. A few seconds later, he senses the door opening just a bit wider. The door is pulled shut again, but this time, he notices she hasn't turned the lock, a small victory that brings a smile to his face. Over the next few days, we see him accompanying Su Ming to her stall every day, selling bags of apples for 20 yuan each. They become a fixture of the vegetable market, steadily selling over 1,000 pounds of apples a day in less than a week. Su Ming's bank account grew by a solid 10,000 yuan, yet at night, Zuixing often found himself unable to sleep. Over the next few days, sales began to dip, so he decided to try a new tactic involving premium cherries and blueberries. She frowned, remembering they had tried this before and failed, but he assured her that this time would be different. We see him divide the stall into two tiers, a low-end section at 15 yuan per pound featuring apples and peaches. The high-end tier was 25 yuan for premium cherries and blueberries, with all fruit washed, sliced, and neatly boxed. For 1 extra yuan, customers got unlimited yogurt. For another, a pound of apples, all at a stall that was remarkably clean. In the middle of the chaotic vegetable market, it stood out like a sore thumb, and daily turnover quickly surpassed 3,000. What pleased him even more was the fact that more people were buying the high-end fruit than the cheap options. As they packed up, she couldn't help but ask why, and he simply smiled, explaining that it was because the expensive items actually made the customers feel like they were getting a better deal by spending just 10 yuan more for premium goods. After all, who wouldn't be tempted? In business, the real game being played is with the human heart. Later, Suhai gestures toward a car worth over 200,000 yuan and asks Zuixing what he thinks of it. He pulls out a bank card and slaps it into Zuixing's hand, revealing there are 200,000 yuan inside. He offers the car too, demanding that Zuixing divorce Su Ming tomorrow. She keeps the child, while he takes the riches. Everything would be settled, but hearing Suhai's words, Zuixing simply shakes his head and addresses him as Big Brother. He claims he has changed, but Suhai's face turns cold, retorting that a dog can never stop itself from eating filth. He reminds him that Su Ming was the pearl of their family, yet she lived a miserable life of his drinking and gambling. He asks if Zuixing truly thinks he's worthy of her, and as his anger flares, he tells Zuixing to just name a price. Zuixing knows the insults are meant for his past self, but they still sting. He asks for just a few more months. Suhai interrupts him, calling him a country bumpkin who couldn't possibly understand the value of what he's being offered. Suhai sneers, asking if Zuixing truly thinks a college degree makes him a city dweller, or if Su Ming was simply blind back then. He demands to know what Zuixing thinks he is, accusing people like him of only wanting to climb the social ladder for money. He asks if Zuixing just wanted a beautiful wife for show. Meanwhile, Zuixing clenches his fists tightly before slowly letting them go. Zuixing acknowledges his humble roots as a farmer and the shame it brought, but he looks Suhai in the eye and speaks clearly. He tells him not to throw money at him, because it won't work. He claims he can earn 1,000,000 yuan in just 3 months. He suggests they talk again then, leaving Suhai momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of the claim. Suhai lets out a mocking laugh as if he's heard the world's biggest joke, but Zuixing simply ignores him and turns away. As we follow him back home, we see Su Ming rushing to meet him, her face etched with worry. She asks if everything is all right, and he reassures her, claiming that her big brother was actually giving him some encouragement. He tells this lie with a smile, which she clearly doesn't believe, but she chooses not to press him as Suhai stays for dinner. At the table, Suhai scans the room, frowning deeply at the sight of the old, worn-out furniture surrounding them. He asks why they still keep this junk, mocking the embarrassment of it. Zuixing starts to speak, but Su Ming stops him. She gently pulls his sleeve under the table and whispers to her brother, trying to keep the peace. She insists that Zuixing has truly changed lately, coming up with brilliant ideas and actually making some decent money. Suhai merely gives a cold snort and remains silent, but right at that moment, his phone begins to ring loudly. He answers it, and we see his expression shift instantly to one of pure shock as he gasps out a confused response. It seems a certain Mr. Liu is unhappy with the marketing plan, despite the fact that the deal was supposed to be finalized today. The voice on the other end sounds frantic, so loud, in fact, that Zuixing can overhear the conversation from where he sits. Mr. Liu apparently found the plan too old-fashioned, dismissing the classic approach as something modern customers simply won't buy into. The client has demanded a personal meeting in 3 hours, leaving Suhai with a very narrow window to save the deal. The voice on the phone warns that if he can't fix it, the entire project fee will be docked and his very position will be at risk. Suhai immediately pulls out his laptop, beginning to communicate with the client in a tone that is, to be honest, quite pathetic. The client demands a plan that highlights a high-end status without appearing aloof, all while maintaining a deep sense of cultural heritage. It also needs to appeal to a younger demographic. Zuixing listens for a moment and glances at the draft, realizing the entire approach is wrong. He knows that high-end real estate isn't about selling houses, it's about selling social circles, resources, and a vision of the future. Without saying a word, he turns back to the kitchen, and by the time he returns with more food, the scene has changed. Suhai is gone, likely to pace while he talks, but his laptop is still open with the half-finished marketing plan staring back at us. Su Ming explains with a worried look that her brother went outside to make a call, fearing that if this deal falls through, he might actually lose his job, especially since this particular real estate development is the company's most vital project of the year. Suddenly, little Chanshan looks up with an innocent face and asks her father if he is actually more capable than her uncle. She challenges him to prove it, and with a small smile, Zuixing decides it is time to do exactly that. He sits down, moves the mouse, and in a move of pure audacity, selects Suhai's entire unfinished plan and hits delete. Su Ming gasps in horror, asking if he's lost his mind, and if he saved the work. He simply notes that saving it would have been useless. His logic was fundamentally flawed, so without further explanation, Zuixing lets his fingers fall onto the keyboard and begins to type. He quickly becomes immersed in the work, and under his hands, a brand new marketing strategy begins to take shape, focusing on social circle operations. He builds it piece by piece, resource integration, identity verification systems, and just as it's coming together, Suhai returns to the room. Seeing Zuixing sitting at his computer, Suhai instantly explodes, demanding to know who gave him permission to touch his things. Su Ming tries to explain that he was only trying to help, but Suhai snaps back that Zuixing doesn't know the first thing about real estate marketing. He rushes over, ready to vent his fury, but then he suddenly freezes as he stares at what is now displayed on the screen. It is a perfectly organized, professional marketing plan, but a second later, his eyes turn red as he realizes his original work is gone. You deleted it? Suhai's entire body begins to tremble with rage as he asks if Zuixing has any idea how many all-nighters he pulled for that work. But just at that moment, his phone rings. The deadline has arrived. He looks at the screen, seeing the nearly finished new proposal staring back at him. His expression shifts through a dozen emotions before he finally grits his teeth and, in a moment of desperation, hits send. He then glares at Zuixing with pure venom, warning him that if this deal falls through, their conflict will be far from over. While waiting for the result, Zuixing simply picks up his glass and takes a calm sip of water. Not even 10 minutes pass before the phone rings again. Suhai answers, listening to the voice on the other end for a few moments as the corner of his mouth twitches in disbelief. After hanging up, he gives Zuixing a deeply complicated look, grabs his laptop, and immediately heads for the door. He mutters that he's going to the office and will settle the score later, while Zuixing just smiles, knowing exactly what awaits him. The concepts in that plan are far beyond what a planner of Suhai's level could ever explain. And sure enough, we see the consequences soon after. Not long after, Zuixing's phone rings. It's Suhai, and the voice on the other end of the line sounds noticeably distressed. Zuixing, can you come to my office right now? He asks, his voice thick with embarrassment and a sudden, desperate need for help. It turns out Mr. Liu insists on meeting the actual creator of the plan. Suhai offers to drive over and pick him up immediately. Once there, Zuixing has the assistant flip to the operations page, where he begins to explain the identity verification system he designed. The first rule is that owners must be vetted by a committee. Having money isn't enough. They must bring actual value and resources to the social circle. Whether it's connections, skills, or influence, everyone must contribute. Secondly, he suggests reserving 30% of the units as flexible spaces. These would be used to invite top entrepreneurs, artists, and scholars for short-term stays, giving the community an inherent, prestigious aura. Thirdly, he proposes monthly high-level dialogues where top industry figures are invited and non-owners can't even buy a ticket to get in. Mr. Lu's eyes light up as he realizes the brilliance of the strategy, turning a house from a mere commodity into a literal membership qualification. He follows up with several detailed questions, and as Zuashing answers fluently, the senior planners nearby can't help but nod in silent agreement. Excellent, Mr. Lu says, standing up and looking at Zuashing with a sharp, burning intensity, noting that the position of marketing director is currently vacant. A salary of 500,000 a year. Are you interested? Mr. Lu asks, and we can practically feel Su Hai's breath hitch in shock. Zuashing simply smiles and shakes his head, explaining that he needs to help his wife with her business and isn't looking for a job. Mr. Lu is momentarily stunned, but Zuashing continues, asking if he might offer one more piece of advice. Please, go ahead, Lu replies. Zuashing looks him in the eye and tells him quite bluntly that the pricing for this real estate project is far too conservative. The atmosphere in the room shifts instantly. Su Hai frantically tugs at Zuashing's sleeve, while Mr. Lu narrows his eyes in thought. What do you mean, Mr. Chun, he asks. Given the current market, our pricing is already the highest in the entire region. Zuashing pauses for a moment before noting that if he isn't mistaken, the planned opening price is 85,000 per unit. He then suggests raising it to over 120,000, causing a wave of skeptical murmurs to ripple through the room. Some people are already shaking their heads in disbelief as Mr. Lu speaks up in a heavy, serious tone. Mr. Chun, you might not fully understand the market here. In this area, anything over 90,000 becomes nearly impossible to sell. Zuashing walks over to the window, pointing toward the vacant land on the east side of the project to explain his reasoning. First, he mentions last week's Development and Reform Commission meeting, which discussed densifying the rail transit network in the eastern new town. Secondly, he points to the new mayor's speech at last month's construction system symposium, which most people likely overlooked. The mayor emphasized shortening the commute time between the main city and new development zones. To be honest, the clues were all there. Thirdly, the Planning Bureau's website recently updated the land use map for the eastern sector, changing that nearby plot to transportation facility land. The meeting room falls into a heavy silence as the weight of his observations begins to sink in for everyone present. All eyes are fixed on Zuashing as he connects these scattered pieces of information with the new mayor's professional history. During the mayor's previous tenure in the Nanqingnu district, his very first major initiative was the expansion of the subway lines. Based on this, Zuashing concludes that within 6 months, the official plans for a subway extension will be publicly announced. He predicts that the new station will, in all probability, be located right on the eastern side of their very own project. Mr. Lu stands up abruptly, his eyes searching Zuashing's as he asks exactly how certain he is about this. 70%, Zuashing replies calmly, adding that even if it were only 50, it would still be a gamble worth taking. He explains that once the news is officially announced, property prices will immediately surge by more than 30%. Raising the price to 120,000 now might seem expensive, but compared to the value 6 months from now, it is still a bargain. Zuashing notes that once the subway news breaks, the market will be flooded with basic housing. If Mr. Lu sticks to the price of 85,000, he will completely lose the project's status as an elite development. Wealthy buyers, after all, rarely want to share a neighborhood with the morning rush of subway commuters. The room is thick with tension as Mr. Lu stares at Zuashing for a full minute before finally picking up his phone. He instructs his secretary to contact Director Li at the Planning Bureau immediately to investigate the subway plans. They wait in silence for 10 minutes, a wait that, to be honest, feels more like 10 long years. Finally, the phone rings. Mr. Lu listens intently, his expression shifting as the information comes through. His face grows increasingly serious until he utters just a few words. Confirmed? Good, I understand. He hangs up and looks directly at Zuashing, seeing him in an entirely new light. He offers him the position of Vice President of Marketing with a salary of $1 million a year. Will you join us? $1 million salary. We see Su Hai's face turn bright red, looking as though he's been frozen in place by the shock. Yet Zuashing shakes his head again, explaining he has no interest in a desk job and prefers to spend time with his family. Mr. Lu gives a bitter smile, acknowledging that everyone has their own path, but insists on hiring him as a consultant. Zuashing glances at Su Hai and suggests that since the man already has solid fundamentals, he should lead the project. He tells Mr. Lu that Su Hai has already mastered the core concepts of the plan. Su Hai stands there, utterly stunned. He looks at Zuashing with eyes full of disbelief until Mr. Lu finally gives a slow, thoughtful nod of agreement. Very well, Mr. Lu says. I will leave this project in the hands of you two. As Zuashing drives away, he sees Su Hai in the rearview mirror, standing still and watching him leave for a long time. At dinner that evening, Su Hai visits again, and Zuashing proactively raises a cup of tea to toast him as an older brother. He offers a solemn apology for all the foolish things he did in the past, leaving Su Meng completely stunned. Her chopsticks freeze in midair, as we can guess what she is thinking. The old Zuashing would never have apologized. He would have just stayed a scoundrel to the end. Su Hai looks away, feeling a bit uncomfortable with the gesture. Su Ming looks from one to the other before suddenly asking her brother if he said something to Zuisheng again. Zuisheng simply smiles and explains that her brother was only reminding him to be more ambitious. Su Ming sets her chopsticks down and looks at Su Hai seriously, telling him that she chose this man herself. She insists that she will walk her own path and swallow any bitter results, so they should stop making things difficult for her. Under the warm light, there is a look of absolute determination in her eyes, a sense that she will never look back. Su Hai raises his glass, drains it in one gulp, and lets out a heavy sigh without saying another word. He finishes his meal quickly and leaves. After seeing him out, Zuisheng turns to find Su Ming watching him intently. She tells him that he seems very different today, and when he asks how, she can't quite put it into words. She tilts her head, searching for the right description, but simply feels that something fundamental has shifted. It feels as though a very long nightmare has finally ended. Late that night, Zuisheng prepares to sleep on the sofa as usual. Su Ming comes out of the bedroom carrying a quilt, but she stops right at the doorway and pauses. She looks back at him and asks if he's addicted to sleeping on the sofa, giving a playful smile before heading back inside. She leaves the door open. The next morning, we see Su Ming taking little Qianqian to see a new kindergarten. Zuisheng stays home to calculate his next move, but near noon, his phone suddenly rings, and he answers it. It is Su Ming's voice on the line, trembling and tearful against a noisy background, telling Zuisheng to come to the People's Hospital immediately. Little Qianqian suddenly couldn't breathe and is now in the emergency room. Hearing this, Zuisheng feels his mind go completely blank. He drops everything and rushes out the door, arriving at the hospital to find that the Su family has already gathered there. His father-in-law, Su Jingqi, spots him and walks over in a fit of rage, calling out Zuisheng's name with pure venom. He blames Zuisheng for neglecting the child, shouting that the doctor said this condition should have been detected a long time ago. A nurse steps in to ask the family to keep quiet, while his mother-in-law, Gumanru, approaches with eyes red from crying. Her voice shakes as she explains the diagnosis. The doctor says it is idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension. It is a rare disease, and the medication they are using now is only a temporary measure to keep her stable. She tells him that the child needs a specific targeted medication, an imported one that is incredibly expensive. It costs over 30,000 a month, and to make matters worse, it requires long-term use. Zuisheng feels a sharp pain in his heart, wondering how this could happen, as Su Ming throws herself into his arms. She is shaking as she sobs, explaining that the doctor believes the symptoms were likely there, but simply weren't obvious. She blames herself for not noticing, admitting that when the girl said she was tired, she just assumed it was from playing. Su Jingqi snaps that talking is useless now, as his voice drops low to remind them that treatment requires money. He asks them bluntly if they can even afford 30,000 a month, while Gumanru looks at her daughter with pity. She begs Su Ming to listen to her and get a divorce, promising that if she leaves him, the Su family will cover the medical bills. Su Ming looks up sharply, stunned by her mother's suggestion in such a desperate moment. Her mother asks if she really wants to keep suffering with him, which, to be honest, is a question she's asked many times before. Gumanru begins to cry as well, pointing out that the child cannot stop the medication or her condition will deteriorate rapidly. Su Ming says nothing, her gaze fixed solely on the tightly closed doors of the emergency room. The tears continue to flow uncontrollably, but she wipes her face with a sudden, fierce determination and stands up straight. She tells her mother firmly that she made her own choice in a husband, and she will walk this path to the end. No matter how difficult it gets, they will carry the burden themselves, though Su Jingqi angrily asks if they are even capable of that. He reminds them it costs over 30,000 a month for an unknown duration, as Zuisheng steps forward to shield Su Ming. Zuisheng looks at Su Jingqi and states calmly that they will find a way to get the money without troubling him. Su Hai can't help but chime in, mockingly asking what possible way a man like him could ever find that kind of cash. He reminds Zuisheng that he already rejected a high-paying job from Mr. Liu, but Zuisheng simply insists he has his own methods. He cuts the conversation short, stating that Qianqian is their daughter and they will take full responsibility, earning a long, cold stare from Su Jingqi. After a long silence, the older man lets out a cold laugh, telling them that if they want to be so proud, they can suffer alone. And so, the Su family departs, leaving Su Ming to lean against Zuisheng's shoulder, sobbing quietly as the tension breaks. Her shoulders won't stop shaking, so he gently pats her back, whispering for her not to be afraid because he is there. She looks up at him with tearful eyes, wondering how they will ever manage 30,000 every single month. He gazes out the window and tells her that the money isn't an issue. She only needs to focus on taking care of Qianqian. We see him standing before the hospital's payment window, staring at the bank card in his hand with a heavy heart. Inside that account is every penny they saved by working from dawn until dusk, yet he knows it is nowhere near enough. In his past life, he built $1 billion empire from nothing, and for the sake of this family, he knows he must do it again. He needs to earn a massive amount of money immediately, and he begins pacing the sterile hospital corridors in deep thought. He searches his memory frantically for any information that could lead to quick wealth, considering the futures market first. But futures are too slow, antiques are too risky, and gambling requires connections he doesn't have until a memory surfaces. A very specific, hidden detail from the past becomes clear, a virtual horse racing segment in an underground betting ring. He recalls a specific loophole in a prize payout system, one that someone once used to drain over 2 million in just 3 days. The site didn't even notice the anomaly until the final battle. The logic behind the flaw was actually quite simple. However, it required perfect timing. To encourage more betting, this website ran virtual races where something strange happened. When a race reached its final 30 seconds, the system would calculate the current odds and make a bold move. It would display the potential winnings as a usable balance for the user, and that, as it turns out, was the fatal mistake. During those final 30 seconds, if a user took that virtual balance and placed a bet on another race that was also ending, the system would actually allow the transaction to pass. With the right timing, one could create a chain of bets using phantom money. By the time all the races were settled and the dust had cleared, the results were undeniable. If that final bet won, the profit became real cash. To put it simply, imagine being at a casino table, where you bet 100 and seeing you're about to win, the house hands you 1,000 in chips as a courtesy. You immediately take those chips to another table, bet them, and win, leaving the house with no choice but to pay up. The casino has to honor the debt. Zuashing knows the exact window for this operation, and more importantly, how to avoid detection. He understands the triggers and the security bypasses. At this specific moment in time, the loophole is still a complete secret. We see him glance at the hospital corridor clock. It's 2:20 p.m. There is no time to waste. He turns and walks briskly out of the inpatient ward, heading toward an old, cramped internet cafe nearby. Inside the smoke-filled room, he picks a machine in the furthest corner and logs onto what looks like a standard sports news site. To any casual observer, it's just a news portal, but he knows exactly where the hidden entrance is buried. After 3 layers of redirects, he finally reaches a crude interface, a page consisting of nothing but text and simple animations. The title reads, Lucky Horse Racing. It is a world of virtual betting where each race lasts only 3 minutes. He takes a deep breath, focusing his mind. It is time for the first step. First, he registers a new account using a randomly generated username. Step 2, the deposit. The site supports several discrete third-party payment channels, so he chooses a method of small, scattered deposits. 5 minutes later, the 5,000 yuan principal arrives, bringing the balance to exactly 5,000. It was time. At 2:40 p.m., the first virtual horse race begins. He bets 1,000 on horse number 3 to win. With odds at 2.5, the simulation reaches the final 40 seconds. Horse number 3 surges from 5th place to 2nd. At that moment, in the bottom right corner of the interface, his available balance suddenly flickers. It jumps from 4,000 to 5,500. The system had added it early, but he doesn't touch it yet. This is just a display, not the loophole. The race ends. Horse number 3 wins by a narrow margin. The real settlement follows, a profit of 1,500, making the balance 6,500. For the second race, at 2:45 p.m., he bets 2,000 on a combination. He predicts the top 2 horses at odds of 3.2. In the final 30 seconds, the system again displays the profit early. His balance jumps from 4,500 to 11,400. The math, at least, was consistent. Now comes the critical moment. With 25 seconds left, he quickly switches to another event nearing its end. It's a virtual soccer match with a small market. He stakes the entire 11,400 balance. He bets on a goal being scored in the final 5 minutes at odds of 1.8. The system accepts the transaction. The bet is successful. The loophole truly exists. The system is treating pre-calculated profits as actual, usable capital. His heart begins to race as the horse race finally concludes. The combination bet wins, yielding a profit of 4,400. Then, the soccer match reaches the 89th minute. A virtual player scores with a long shot. With a profit of over 20,000, the account balance suddenly becomes 26,920. In just a few minutes, he had more than quintupled his money. In less than 10 minutes, 5,000 had become over 20,000, but he didn't stop there. He knew this loophole allowed for continuous operations, provided he timed the 30-second window of each race perfectly. He could snowball the virtual capital exponentially, and even if he lost, it was only the system's money at stake. Through the 3rd and 4th rounds, his hands flew across the keyboard and mouse with frantic precision. His eyes darted between 3 different countdown windows, monitoring every race simultaneously. Every move had to be accurate to the second. By 3:21 p.m., he had completed the final round of operations. The final account balance glowing on the screen was staggering, 726,800. Using only 5,000, he had leveraged his initial stake into over 140 times its value in an hour. He leaned back, staring at the digits with palms slick with sweat, and clicked the withdrawal button. A notification appeared. Large withdrawals required manual review and would arrive within 2 hours. He cleared his browsing history, shut down the computer, and stood up to leave the internet cafe. The sunlight outside was blinding, and as he shielded his eyes, he took a deep, steadying breath. 700,000. For Qianqian's illness, it was still barely enough. A full recovery would require much more. But he wasn't worried. He knew that soon enough, someone would be coming to deliver more money to him. He pushed open the ward door. Inside, a nurse was speaking in a cold, clinical tone, telling Su Ming there was only 5,000 left in the account. The deposit had to be paid today, or the tests and medication would stop. Su Ming was on the verge of tears. She insisted it was impossible, claiming her husband had just gone to pay 10,000 an hour ago. Then, she saw him enter. Her voice caught in her throat as she demanded to know where the rest of the money was. He admitted he only paid 5,000. He looked her straight in the eye and told her the truth. He had taken the other 5,000 to bet on horses. Horse racing? Su Ming's expression shattered instantly, and she stumbled back in utter disbelief. It was as if all the strength had been drained from her body. Shen Junxing, that was Qianqian's life-saving money. She lunged at him, her fists pounding against his chest as she sobbed with a heart-wrenching, desperate intensity. "Are you even human?" she cried out, while the nurse standing nearby simply shook her head and sighed. Her eyes were filled with pure disdain. He caught her wrists, lowering his voice as he urged her to listen. He told her he had won with that 5,000, and the money would arrive within 2 hours to cover the medical bills. She stopped moving and looked up at him with eyes that seemed to have completely given up on hope. "You're starting again, aren't you? You're lying to me again," she said, her finger pointing directly at him. She was shaking violently, reminding him how much she hated his gambling and the broken promises of the past. He remained silent, knowing that anything he said now would sound like a poor excuse. "Just give me 2 hours," he said. He looked at their pale daughter on the hospital bed and promised to return with the money in 2 hours' time. He turned and left, leaving behind the sound of her stifled, hopeless crying. Later, we see him return with hot porridge. Su Ming was leaning over the bed as if asleep, but her trembling shoulders gave away her true state. Qianqian was awake. Her small body was covered in tubes, yet when she saw her father, she managed to force a weak, fragile smile. "Daddy, I'll be good," she whispered. He leaned down, gently touching her small, pale face with his hand. He promised her they would defeat the illness and go to the amusement park for cotton candy bigger than the clouds. Qianqian's eyes brightened for a fleeting moment as she whispered that she wanted to be with her mommy and daddy. She wanted them to be together forever. Su Ming looked up then, her eyes bloodshot and weary from the strain. She looked at her daughter's pleading eyes and then at him, appearing utterly exhausted by the weight of it all. She let out a long, heavy sigh and told him to go take care of his business for now. Her voice was raspy as she told him she would stay there. She had reached her limit, and he knew it. This was the last bit of grace she was willing to grant him. He glanced at the time. As he stepped out of the hospital ward, he didn't look back, not even once. He left the hospital and was heading for the bank when a black Mercedes suddenly cut him off. The doors slid open, and 2 expressionless men in black suits stepped out, addressing him as Mr. Chun. "Bosco would like to have a word," they said. They were certainly fast. He nodded and got in. The interior was spacious, where a well-dressed man in his 40s sat waiting across from him. His features weren't fierce. In fact, he looked quite refined. This was Gu Weidong. In his past life, Shen Junxing had dealt with him many times, even collaborating. "Junxing," the man said, looking up. He noted that Junxing had quite the skilled hand. His supposedly secure system, which 7 or 8 programmers had guarded for 3 years without a single glitch, had been punctured the moment Junxing arrived. He asked how he found the flaw. Junxing leaned back, meeting his gaze. If Boss Gu runs a gambling ring, he shouldn't be afraid of people winning. The system's loopholes were their own problem. He had won that money fairly, so what now? Did he want it back? Gu Weidong's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of the 700,000. He laughed, saying he wasn't so petty that he couldn't afford to lose. He could take the money, but not without paying some kind of price. Junxing knew he was being tested. In his past life, he knew this man intimately, but for now, he couldn't show all his cards. He smiled and agreed. He wouldn't take the money for nothing. He offered a piece of information in exchange. Gu agreed. Gu Weidong raised an eyebrow, curious to hear what he had to say about his father, Gu Changing. Gu Weidong's hand froze on his ring. Had the old man been feeling chest tightness and left arm numbness lately? With a calm tone, Junxing suggested that his father undergo a coronary CTA immediately. He emphasized checking for a blockage in the left anterior descending artery, as routine exams often miss non-calcified plaques. Gu Weidong's pupils contracted as he stared at Junxing for a few seconds before dialing a number for Director Wang. He requested an emergency heart exam for his father, specifically a coronary CTA, without delay. He told them to focus on the left anterior descending artery. After that, the car fell into a heavy silence. 40 minutes later, the phone rang. As Gu Weidong listened, his expression shifted dramatically. After hanging up, the way he looked at Junxing changed completely, confirming a severe stenosis in that exact artery. It was over 85% blocked. Any later, and he would have been gone. He asked Junxing who he really was. Junxing met his gaze and noted that his identity didn't matter. He only cared about his money and his safety. Gu Weidong stared back, promising that on his turf, no one would touch him, but he sensed there was more. He suspected a man like Junxing wouldn't take such risks for a mere 700,000. He was right, of course. There was indeed one more piece of information, Junxing said, looking him straight in the eye. It concerned a woman Gu had been searching for over a decade, and someone by her side. Specifically, a child Gu likely didn't even know existed. Suddenly, Gu Weidong sat bolt upright, his refined composure vanishing. His eyes were filled with pure shock as he demanded to know more. She was in Sucheng, married to a teacher. Her life was quiet now, Junxing said in a low voice, and she had a 7-year-old daughter. When he mentioned the birthday was June 17th, Gu Weidong turned pale, his fingers trembling slightly. That date and that age told him everything he needed to know. In a raspy voice, he asked what Junxing wanted. 5 million for the information, Junxing replied. Gu immediately ordered his man, Chong, to transfer the funds. 10 minutes later, the phone vibrated with a text message confirming the bank deposit. He sent the detailed information he had prepared to Gu Weidong, and with the transaction complete, he opened the car door. He reminded Gu that his daughter was in the hospital and needed absolute peace, so no trouble should follow him there. Gu Weidong nodded solemnly, promising to arrange the best possible resources for the hospital stay. The heavy door clicked shut, and as the Mercedes sped away, Junxing found himself standing alone at the hospital entrance. With 5.7 million now in his account, Qianqian's medical fees were finally covered. He gripped his phone tightly. He hurried into the building and rushed to the ward, but when he pushed the door open, Su Ming was nowhere to be seen. His father-in-law, Su Jingqi, sat by the bed with a grim expression, clearly furious that his daughter was so ill. The older man scolded him for running around the streets, but Junxing ignored him, gently touching Qianqian's forehead. When he asked where the mother was, Jingqi coldly replied that she had left to handle some business, leaving him to watch the child. He complained that the couple was equally unreliable, both disappearing for hours at a time when they were needed most. Junxing's heart sank. He knew Su Ming would never leave Qianqian's side for hours under normal circumstances. He immediately tried to call her, but there was no answer, which only deepened the growing sense of unease. Even Jingqi began to realize something was wrong when she didn't pick up. Just then, a voice drifted in from the hallway. It was the cleaning lady, cursing about people who kept sticking illegal advertisements inside the restrooms. She grumbled about agencies looking for surrogate mothers, a dangerous way to make quick money, to be sure. A terrifying thought suddenly gripped Junxing's mind. He told himself she wouldn't be that foolish. She couldn't be. But a moment later, he remembered her red-rimmed eyes and her desperate, stubborn nature. She would. She really would. He turned and bolted from the room. Jingqi shouted after him, asking where he was going while the hospital was still demanding payment. Junxing yelled back that the fees were already paid, leaving the old man stunned as he sprinted down the corridor. He burst into the women's restroom, ignoring the startled screams as he began kicking open the stall doors one by one. On the wall, we see a crookedly pasted phone number advertising high pay for surrogate mothers, with a 300,000 yuan advance. Junxing dialed the number immediately, lowering his voice to a cold, businesslike tone as he claimed to be looking for a surrogate. He told them he needed a child urgently and that money was no object, though the woman on the other end remained cautious. When she claimed he had the wrong number, he gave a cold laugh, insisting his wife couldn't conceive and he wanted a boy. After a few seconds of silence, the woman's tone suddenly warmed up, complimenting him on how well-informed he was. She confirmed they could do it, but before she could discuss the price, Junxing interrupted, stating he wanted to handpick the person. He demanded someone who had never done this before, someone new, young, and without a previous history of surrogacy. He insisted on good health and strong genes, but the woman sounded hesitant, saying they didn't have anyone new available right now. He raised his voice, questioning if she was sure, which clearly startled her as she wondered how he could possibly know otherwise. He coldly claimed to have his own sources and demanded the address so he could come and see for himself immediately. He promised to double the price if he was satisfied, a prospect that made the woman's voice tremble with greed as she asked if he was serious. Checking his watch, he told her he was in a hurry and would be there in 20 minutes, telling her to hold the new arrival for him. He warned that if a contract was already signed or the process had started, the deal was off. She quickly assured him nothing was signed yet. She mentioned the woman had just finished her checkup and urged him to come quickly, promising they would be waiting for him. After hanging up, he sprinted out of the hospital and flagged down a taxi, urging the driver to get to the location as fast as possible. At the same time, he called the police, whispering the address and reporting a case of suspected illegal surrogacy. 20 minutes later, we find him in a dilapidated urban village, standing before an old building with a sign for domestic services. He headed straight to the 3rd floor, where a middle-aged woman opened the door just a crack to eye him suspiciously. She asked if he was the boss from the phone, and Junxing walked straight past her, demanding to know where the woman was kept. The woman followed him with a fawning smile, boasting that this candidate was 28 and had already successfully birthed a daughter. The woman boasted about a natural birth, perfect health, and a desperate need for money, all making for an easy negotiation as Junxing pushed the door open. We see Su Ming sitting on an old sofa, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were white. When she saw him enter, her eyes widened in shock. She froze completely. It's her, Junxing thought, though he simply looked her over with a cold, expressionless gaze, as if inspecting a piece of merchandise. He commanded her to stand up and turn around, and as she obeyed, her face was filled with a visible sense of dread and confusion. The middle-aged woman offered a fawning smile, noting that Su Ming had a good figure and even held a bachelor's degree, a premium candidate, in her eyes. Junxing walked right up to Su Ming, staring directly into her face before remarking coldly that she looked far too thin to bear a son. The woman quickly explained that while they couldn't give a 100% guarantee on the gender, they could certainly perform a screening process. He cut her off, stating firmly that he had to be certain it was a boy, his voice remaining icy and demanding. He told her he could increase the payment, but if the child turned out to be a girl, they would have to take full responsibility for the failure. When the woman hesitated at the risk, he stared her down, reminding her that a higher risk naturally came with a much higher reward. He declared he would take her and told them to name their price, insisting on signing the contract and taking her with him right this second. The woman was stunned by the suddenness, stammering that this wasn't the usual process, but Junxing simply insisted that he was in a hurry. He pulled a bank card from his pocket, making it clear that money was no object as long as he could take the woman away immediately. The middle-aged woman's eyes darted back and forth greedily, yet she worried that letting her go so soon was against their usual rules. Junxing stared her down, asking if she was actually the one in charge, or if he needed to speak to someone who could actually make a decision. Her expression shifted instantly. She asked him to wait a moment before stepping out of the room and pulling the door shut behind her. The moment the door closed, Su Ming lunged forward and grabbed his arm, whispering frantically that he was crazy and needed to leave at once. He gripped her hand firmly, telling her they were leaving together, just as the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway and the door swung open. The woman returned, but this time she was flanked by two burly men and a middle-aged man dressed in a sharp suit. The man wore gold-rimmed glasses and carried an air of quiet authority as the woman introduced him as their manager, Mr. Chun. Manager Chen looked Junxing up and down, asking with a cold curiosity if it was true that he was in such a hurry to take the woman away. Junxing didn't blink, telling him to name a price, 800,000 for everything, provided they could guarantee the child would be a boy. He offered a deposit of 500,000 to be transferred immediately, on the condition that he could take Su Ming with him right then and there. The balance would be paid once the pregnancy was confirmed, but Manager Chen simply laughed, noting that this wasn't how they did things. He insisted that the full amount be paid up front, and only then would they deliver the person to a location of Junxing's choosing. As he adjusted his glasses, a predatory smile crept across his face, revealing a hidden layer of malice beneath his professional exterior. He warned that otherwise, Junxing might find it quite difficult to leave, causing Junxing to narrow his eyes in a silent challenge. Junxing remarked that his money wasn't so easily taken, to which Chen replied that it all depended on whether he had the strength to walk out the door. With a subtle nod from Chun, the two burly men stepped forward aggressively, but it was at that exact moment that the atmosphere shifted. The faint sound of police sirens drifted up from below, causing Chen's expression to twist as he demanded to know if Junxing had called the authorities. Junxing gave a cold laugh, denying he had called anyone while suggesting that perhaps Chen's business simply wasn't as clean as he pretended. As the sirens grew louder and chaos erupted downstairs, Chen cursed under his breath, his composure finally shattering into panic. He ordered his men to finish Junxing off and escape through the back door, prompting the two thugs to lunge from both sides at once. Junxing shoved Su Ming into the corner for safety, grabbing a wooden chair and swinging it with everything he had at the man on his left. The wood splintered against the man's shoulder, forcing a grunt of pain, but the thug on the right was already swinging a heavy fist toward his head. The punch whistled through the air, and though Junxing ducked just in time, the knuckles grazed his temple with a jarring force. A stinging pain flared up, and before he could even regain his balance, a flash of cold steel appeared as the man pulled out a switchblade. Su Ming's scream echoed in the small room, and in that split second, Junxing didn't think. He simply lunged forward to shield her. He threw himself in front of Su Ming, ignoring the terrifying sensation of the blade sinking into his flesh as a sharp, white-hot pain exploded through him. His left shoulder went cold before the burning sensation took over. Even the attacker seemed stunned that Junxing would intentionally throw himself onto the blade. The attacker froze for a split second, and in that moment, Junxing's hand shot out to seize the man's knife-wielding wrist. He slammed his forehead into the man's nose with a sickening crack, sending the knife clattering to the floor amidst a pained scream. Suddenly, the room was flooded with shouts as the police burst in, ordering everyone to get on the ground immediately. As the officers swarmed the room, Junxing ignored his bleeding shoulder, keeping himself firmly between the danger and Su Ming. He raised his hand, identifying them as the victims, while Manager Chun was forced onto the floor by the arriving officers. Chun tried to struggle, unsuccessfully, of course, while a young officer noticed the sheer amount of blood soaking through Junxing's shirt. The officer immediately radioed for an ambulance, and Su Ming rushed to Junxing's side, her eyes wide with terror. Her hands trembled as she tried to press down on the wound, tears streaming down her face as her voice broke. She could barely speak, terrified by the sight of so much blood, while Junxing leaned heavily against the cold wall. He managed a small, reassuring smile for her, reaching out with his good hand to gently brush her cheek. He told her it was just a scratch, relieved that she was safe, and eventually, we see them leaving the police station. The night had turned pitch black, and Su Ming clung to his arm, her fingertips still icy and shivering from the ordeal. When they finally reached a quiet spot, she stopped and looked up at him, her face still stained with tears. She wanted to know how he had found her, and more importantly, why he had dared to come all alone. Junxing reached out to wipe away her tears, reminding her that she was his wife and they were a family. He promised her that as long as he was there, she wouldn't have to face the world alone ever again. After telling her that Qianqian's hospital fees were already settled, Su Ming finally collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. It was as if she were finally letting go of all the fear she had carried, while Junsheng held her trembling body tight. He let her tears soak his shirt, knowing that while the night was indifferent, their darkest hour had finally passed. Back at the hospital, the nurses tended to his wounds, eventually stitching the deep cut on his shoulder with over a dozen stitches. The doctor noted that any deeper would have caused nerve damage, and once bandaged, Junxing urged Su Ming to return to their daughter's room. She hesitated for a moment, but the unease of being away from her child for so long won out, and she finally nodded. We see him sitting alone in the treatment room, catching his breath, but just as he prepares to stand, his phone buzzes. It was a notification from the bank. It seemed Gu Weidong had transferred another sum of money into his account. The message explained it was medical aid for Qianqian, and a quick glance at the balance told him it would be enough. As he pushed open the ward door later, he spotted Su Hai standing at the end of the hallway finishing a phone call. His father-in-law's expression darkened instantly as he hung up and marched over, calling out Junxing's name with clear disdain. Lowering his voice, Su Hai demanded to know where the 500,000 for the medication deposit had come from. Junxing remained quiet, but Su Hai stared him down and let out a cold, mocking laugh at the man's silence. He reminded Junxing that in all his years of gambling, he had never brought home a single cent for the family. Su Hai was convinced this sudden windfall was a loan from Lu Xingrong, and Junxing didn't bother to correct him. He mocked Junxing for acting noble before, only to go begging for money now, which, to be honest, was a bit rich coming from him. He warned that this debt must never involve the Su family, and with that final cold remark, he turned and walked away. Junxing simply watched him leave, and for the next month, the hospital became their permanent home as Qianqian remained hospitalized. Her condition, idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, was incredibly rare, requiring expensive imported medications just to keep her stable. Despite their efforts, the child's health continued to slide downward, leaving Junxing and Su Ming to keep a constant, rotating watch. She took the day shift while he took the nights, catching brief moments of sleep on the hard chairs in the hallway. They survived on the cheapest meals from the hospital cafeteria, while the rest of the Su family was nowhere to be seen. He knew Su Ming was hurting deeply, though she never said a word, choosing instead to suffer in a quiet, dignified silence. Sometimes, waking in the middle of the night, he would see her leaning over the bed, staring blankly while holding Qianqian's tiny hand. The rest of the Su family finally arrived just as the doctor was finishing Qianqian's examination. The news wasn't good. The doctor explained that the current medication could only delay the disease, not reverse it. Over time, the burden on the child's heart and lungs would only increase, a fact that Su Jingqi seemed to ignore. Instead, the first thing he asked about was the money, noting that the initial 500,000 must be nearly gone. Su Hai added with a cold tone, demanding to know if Junxing had even thought about how he would pay them back. He sneered that Junxing wasn't even worthy of showing respect to his father, but right then, the ward door swung open. We see the doctor returning with a team of specialists, announcing that he had some significant news for the family. A team of experts from a top international center was about to launch a cutting-edge treatment program right here in the country. The plan involved a combined gene-targeted therapy designed to rebuild the microcirculation within the pulmonary arteries. With precise targeted regulation, there was a real chance to fundamentally reverse the course of the disease. The doctor paused for a moment, noting that Qianqian's various health indicators happened to meet the criteria perfectly. Su Ming's eyes reddened as she gripped Junxing's hand, but the doctor warned that the treatment had to start immediately. The initial cost would be 1 million yuan. Hearing this, Junxing turned and walked toward the end of the hallway. He dialed Gu Weidong, who immediately told him not to worry about the money, explaining that Professor Robert was the key. Gu had personally invited the professor from Zurich, and after reviewing the case, the expert was quite optimistic. The results of the surgery were expected to be ideal, and Junxing offered a quiet, sincere word of thanks. Gu insisted he was the one who should be grateful, mentioning that his own wife and daughter had finally been found. He promised to never forget this favor, and after hanging up, Junxing headed straight to the payment window. As he returned to the ward, he overheard Su Jingqi's voice from inside, pointing out Junxing's absence. He told Su Ming that Junxing had run away the moment money was mentioned, urging her once again to get a divorce. The Su family will provide the money, Su Ming said, her voice soft but remarkably steady. Dad, Mom, brother, thank you for your kindness, but it really isn't necessary. 2 days ago, Junxing added another million to the deposit, leaving the ward in a heavy silence. The nurse entered to prepare the paperwork and mentioned something quite casually as she worked. The child's father just paid another $1 million for the follow-up treatment and imported medications. We see Junxing standing at the door, watching as Su Zhengqi and Gu Manru freeze in place. Su Hai joined them in their stunned silence. While outside the operating room, the scene changed. The red light flickered on. Su Ming leaned on Junxing's shoulder, her body trembling as he held her hand. Professor Robert was a true authority in pulmonary hypertension, having handled many cases like this before. He had performed 27 of these surgeries, all successful, yet Su Hai approached with a dark expression. He demanded to know how much Junxing had borrowed from Mr. Liu, but Junxing simply looked up. He told them his affairs weren't their concern, even as Su Hai claimed $2 million would bankrupt the family. He turned to Su Ming, begging her for the truth, and just as she was about to speak, Su Zhengqi rushed over, pointing a finger and accusing Junxing of lying and gambling the money away. He told Su Ming that he had $1 million in savings ready for her right now. If she agreed to the divorce, the money was hers, but there was a catch, as there usually is. By tomorrow morning, he intended to invest that sum into a high-end state-sponsored retirement project. Gu Manru chimed in to explain that the annual return was at least 30%. Apparently, it was an exclusive opportunity within elite circles, requiring a 10-year contract commitment. In 10 years, the company would return the principal, or so the State Bureau supposedly claimed. This is a national pilot project with very few spots available, and we were thinking, this money will grow and eventually be left to you. Junxing looked at Su Zhengqi and called him Dad. The model you're describing involves mortgaging your property to a third-party company in exchange for a pension. Am I right? Su Zhengqi froze for a moment, his face twisting into a look of pure disdain. My old boss personally guaranteed it. It's a legitimate company, and we even had a lawyer review the contract. What could you possibly know? This is actually a new scam that's emerged in the last 2 years. These so-called professional companies are usually just empty shells. Their registered capital is only a few $1,000s, and while they do pay out a pension for a few months, by the time you realize what's happening, both the house and the money are gone. The State Bureau was either also deceived, or, well, Junxing didn't even get to finish his sentence before Su Zhengqi exploded in a fit of rage. He shouted that their lifelong connections were none of a gambler's business, especially with a contract in black and white. Do you think the state wouldn't step in? You're just jealous. But then, Su Ming suddenly stood up. Her voice was trembling as she told them to take their project and leave immediately. He told them he didn't want their money. Whether Qianqian lived or died, he would carry that burden alone. Su Zhengqi's face turned a sickly shade of green as he pointed at his daughter, unable to find words, before finally storming off. Fine, don't regret this. Gu Manru sighed with reddened eyes, while Su Hai hesitated, wanting to speak but staying silent. The family turned and left together, and suddenly, a heavy silence returned to the area outside the operating room. Su Ming sank onto the bench as tears fell silently, and Junxing gently pulled her against his shoulder to comfort her. For hours later, the surgical light finally flickered off, and the lead physician walked out with a faint smile on his face. The surgery, he informed them, had been a complete success. The child would simply need to remain under observation in the ICU for the next 48 hours. The prognosis was incredibly optimistic, and as Su Ming's legs gave out from relief, Junxing was there to catch her. She covered her face as tears flowed through her fingers, joyful tears this time, and we fast-forward 2 months later. Qianqian had finally met the criteria for discharge, and the little girl's face looked much healthier and more radiant. Though she still needed regular medication and checkups, she was already jumping for joy, celebrating her new lease on life. We see the family at a high-end steakhouse. Junxing had promised his daughter this treat once she recovered. He wanted to take her for the best steak possible, and the atmosphere in the restaurant was perfectly elegant. Qianqian kicked her little feet in excitement, while Su Ming tucked in her napkin and the dishes began to arrive. Just as Junxing was about to cut the steak, a young man in a slightly worn suit walked down the aisle. The man glanced over, his eyes landing on Su Ming, and he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Su Ming. Surprise flashed across his face, quickly replaced by a playful, knowing smirk as he took a few steps closer. His gaze swept over Junxing and Qianqian, lingering on the child for a moment, before finally settling back on Su Ming. He noted that he'd heard she was married and asked, with a hint of curiosity, who exactly Junxing was. Su Ming's fingers tightened slightly. We learned that this man's name is Zhu Feng. He was the man her parents had desperately tried to set her up with years ago, and seeing him made her tense up. Her body went visibly rigid as she acknowledged him, her voice sounding a bit forced and unnatural. Zhu Feng remarked on the coincidence before turning to Junxing, looking him up and down with a critical eye. The scrutiny was obvious as he extended a hand, offering a polite but hollow greeting to Mr. Chun. He commented on the child being so grown as Junxing stood up to shake his hand, a tense moment, to be sure. Zhu Feng intentionally increased his grip, but Junxing didn't flinch, simply watching him with a calm, steady gaze. Zhu Feng then suggested they all sit together, turning back to someone following closely behind him. A woman with meticulously applied makeup was introduced as He Huiping, an old friend of Su Ming and her husband. Zhu Feng introduced her as his girlfriend, though he seemed to emphasize the words old friend and girlfriend quite pointedly. There was a certain weight to his tone, and we see Huiping's gaze quickly sweep over Su Ming with a sharp curiosity. Her eyes settled on Su Ming's outfit, a flicker of superiority crossing her face before she forced a bright, practiced smile. She addressed her as Sister Su and insisted they all sit together, while beneath the table, Su Ming reached for Junxing's hand. Junxing squeezed her hand back reassuringly, offering Huiping a calm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He remarked that she was being far too polite, noting that she actually looked quite a bit more mature than his own wife. Huiping's expression stiffened momentarily as Zhu Feng ordered several expensive dishes before turning his attention back to Junxing. He asked where Junxing was currently employed, offering to treat them, to which Junxing simply replied that he ran a small business. Zhu Feng remarked that small businesses offer great freedom before turning to the waiter with an air of practiced sophistication. He ordered a bottle of 2015 Manhwa dry white, clearly aiming to impress everyone at the table with his selection. After asking for it to be decanted, he turned to Su Ming, mentioning that he remembered she didn't used to drink much. He insisted, however, that this particular white wine was the perfect pairing for seafood and was truly a masterpiece. He suggested she try just a little, and Huiping was quick to chime in, playing her part in the performance. She praised Zhu Feng's refined taste, loudly wondering if the wine was expensive, while keeping her eyes fixed on Su Ming. Zhu Feng acted as though it were a trivial matter, claiming it was simply a suitable choice for the meal they were having. The wine arrived shortly after, and the waiter followed the proper etiquette by pouring a small amount into Zhu Feng's glass first. Zhu Feng swirled the liquid and took a deep breath of the aroma, a bit of a theatrical display, to be honest. He took a slow sip, savoring it for a long moment before finally nodding his approval to the waiting staff. The entire process felt incredibly forced, and just as the waiter prepared to pour for the rest of them, Junxing raised a hand to stop him. Junxing picked up the glass in front of Su Ming and calmly told the waiter that they would need a different one. He explained that this glass hadn't been chilled long enough, which would dull the manhwa's fruity notes and mineral character. He noted it was especially important for such a delicate body. The waiter, caught off guard, apologized and hurried to find a replacement. After taking the new glass and inspecting it with practiced care, Junxing finally allowed a small pour for a tasting. We see Zhu Feng's composed expression begin to crack, while Su Ming watched her husband in surprise as she lifted her glass. She took a cautious little sip, and Zhu Feng cleared his throat, trying to reclaim his position as the expert at the table. He remarked that Junxing was quite particular about his glassware, but insisted the true character of a manhwa lay elsewhere. He claimed the wine's beauty was found in the balance between the elegance of Puligna manhwa and the richness of Shisanya manhwa. Junxing simply smiled, noting the vintage was decent enough for what it was. However, he added that if they truly wanted to pair the wine with today's seafood, a Courtin Charlemagne from the neighboring estate, specifically the 2014 vintage, would have offered a much more complementary structure. To be honest, he wasn't wrong. Zhu Feng's face stiffened, and with a darkened expression, he abruptly changed the subject back to himself and Su Ming. He mentioned that over the last 2 years, he had started his own landscaping and garden design company. He specialized in providing services for major real estate projects, admitting the work was hard, but rewarding in its own way. He claimed the income was quite good, holding up 2 fingers with a flourish, and Huiping was quick to jump in. She insisted he was being far too modest about his 2 million in earnings, asking if they had heard of the Xingrong Group. She boasted that their company handled the landscaping for several of that group's high-end developments, before looking towards Su Ming. With a look of feigned concern, she suggested that if they ever wanted to buy a house, they should definitely talk to Zhu Feng. She claimed he was close with many developers and could certainly secure the lowest internal pricing for them. We see Su Ming press her lips together in silence, while Zhu Feng watched her, waving his hand with an air of forced generosity. Zhu Feng chimed in, telling Huiping not to be so blunt, though he agreed that Su Ming's old house was indeed due for an upgrade. He told them to speak up whenever they were ready, claiming his internal pricing could easily save them over 100,000. We see Su Ming's fingers twisting together under the table in discomfort, but Junxing gently reached out and covered her hand with his. He calmly declined, noting that if they wanted discounted properties, he had his own channels, a claim Zhu Feng clearly didn't believe. Zhu Feng insisted this was no time for pride, mentioning he'd heard their finances were, well, a bit tight lately. He argued that saving such a large sum was a practical matter, asking why they would sacrifice that just for the sake of appearances. Huiping immediately backed him up, boasting that Zhu Feng was so close with the developers that a single phone call was all it took. She suggested the saved money could go towards supplements for their child, pointedly mentioning the neighborhood where they currently lived. With a sigh, she claimed they were only looking out for them, while her gaze swept judgmentally over Su Ming's simple clothes. Su Ming's face flushed with embarrassment. She tried to speak, but Junxing's hand pressed down gently to keep her calm. Junxing took a sip of water as a spark of irritation flared within him. Today was meant to celebrate his daughter's new life. He had no interest in listening to this rehearsed performance and was about to dismiss them when a voice called out, "Mr. Chen?" The voice, sounding pleasantly surprised, came from behind them. We turned with them to see who it could be. Lu Xinrong was walking quickly toward them from the private rooms with a genuine smile, which caught Junxing a bit off guard. Junxing recalled seeing his photo with the owner on the Wall of Fame earlier, but he hadn't expected to actually run into Chairman Lu. Zhu Feng reacted as if he were on a spring, leaping up so fast his chair hit the floor with a loud, clumsy crash. His face instantly filled with a fawning, sycophantic grin as he bowed his back and extended both hands to greet the chairman. He called it a lucky encounter, introducing himself as Zhu Feng from Fengjing Landscaping, hoping to be recognized. He reminded the chairman that they had met briefly during the company's appreciation gala at the end of last year. As he asked if the chairman remembered him, he couldn't resist shooting a smug, triumphant glance back at Junxing and Su Ming. Lu Xinrong's brow furrowed slightly, as he clearly had no memory of this man, and his gaze quickly shifted past Zhu Feng. His eyes landed on Junxing, and out of simple politeness, he decided to acknowledge the interruption. Lu Xinrong reached out for a brief, formal handshake, his tone remaining entirely flat as he offered a simple hello. That single, fleeting touch was enough to make Zhu Feng's face flush with a sudden, intoxicated glow of pride. He straightened his back as if he'd just won a prize, but Lu Xinrong withdrew his hand almost instantly and turned toward Junxing. The chairman stepped right past the frozen Zhu Feng, extending his hand to Junxing with a warm smile, calling it a lucky encounter. He admitted that he had wanted to reach out since their last meeting, but hesitated for fear of disturbing Junxing's family time. Junxing stood to shake his hand, noting that meeting today was indeed a stroke of fate, and greeted him as Chairman Lu. We see Zhu Feng standing nearby with his eyes wide, looking very much like a man who had just been struck by lightning. The fawning smile on his face hadn't even had time to fade before it was overtaken by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. It was, to be honest, an incredibly ridiculous expression. Meanwhile, Huiping had no idea who Lu Xinrong actually was. She only saw her boyfriend being ignored while Junxing, a man she viewed as a mere fruit seller, was treated with respect. Watching Junxing chat easily with this distinguished man made her curl her lip in a display of petty annoyance. She let out a sharp, mocking comment, loud enough for everyone to hear, about how impressive it was for fruit sellers these days. She remarked that it was quite a novelty for such people to talk about real estate, a comment that instantly killed the mood. Lu Xinrong's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, piercing gaze that swept over Huiping with cold disapproval. He looked back at Junxing with an inquiring tilt of his head, and Junxing calmly let go of the chairman's hand. He explained they were just old acquaintances of his wife who were being quite helpful, apparently eager to offer developer discounts. Lu Xinrong was a sharp man who understood the subtext immediately, and a smile returned to his face, though this one was colder. He looked at Junxing with a newfound sense of calculated amusement, his expression carrying a distinct edge of irony. His voice rang out with sudden warmth as he patted Junxing's arm, telling him not to speak such nonsense. He insisted that given their relationship, there was no need to even mention something as trivial as a discount. His gaze then shifted toward the stunned Zhu Feng and Huiping, his professional smile remaining perfectly in place. With a tone of casual superiority, he addressed Junxing, his wife, and their little treasure, Qianqian. He looked at the little girl with genuine kindness before asking which development or specific unit they had their eyes on. With a grand, decisive wave of his hand, he declared that he would simply give them the apartment for free. The statement landed like a thunderclap, and we see the color drain instantly from Zhu Feng's face. His eyes nearly bulged out of his head as his body swayed, while Huiping stood there looking utterly bewildered. She looked at Lu Xinrong, then at Junxing, and finally at her boyfriend, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. She remained speechless, her mouth agape, as Lu Xinrong eventually led our group into a private dining room. Inside, 3 high-level executives looked up in surprise, but Lu Xinrong was in high spirits as he began introductions. He introduced Junxing as his benefactor, prompting the 3 executives to stand and nod politely. Their eyes, however, betrayed their confusion. This benefactor was quite young and had brought his wife and daughter along. Lu Xinrong personally poured tea for Junxing, thanking him for the crucial advice he had provided during their last encounter. By following Junxing's strategy, the Tsuehu project's profits had jumped by 30%, and the board was now all in. Junxing set down his teacup and calmly noted that while the subway extension was a fact, the city's future lay elsewhere. He told them the real focus for the next 5 years wouldn't be the East Side, a claim that shocked everyone present. The 3 executives spoke in unison, and the marketing director, Mr. Wang, furrowed his brow in clear skepticism. He asked for an explanation, noting that their detailed research showed that the land reserves in that area were prime. Mr. Zhou from the investment department added that with the subway's help, the area was an absolute gold mine. He pointed out that the municipal government's work report explicitly mentioned expanding the city's framework toward the east. The policy direction seemed clear, and while Vice President Zhang remained silent, his eyes were filled with obvious doubt. Lu Xinrong leaned forward, waiting for more, as Junxing met his gaze and acknowledged that their points were indeed logical. However, he noted they were missing a decisive variable, the anti-corruption campaign, and the room suddenly fell silent. We learned that the new mayor had been transferred from the temporary Nanjing New district, a detail that changed everything. That area had just experienced a major administrative shakeup, and his first move wouldn't be to ignite a fire there. Junxing tapped the table lightly, explaining that the eastern expansion involved far too many complex land transfers. Between demolition compensation and project bidding, the water was simply too deep during such a sensitive period. He was certain the mayor wouldn't take that risk. Instead, he would choose the path of least resistance. He pointed toward the southwest, suggesting the focus would be on old city renovation and riverside expansion. The property rights there were complex, meaning no one dared to interfere, yet it already had a solid urban foundation. With riverside resources and a slight policy shift, the value would skyrocket, whereas the East was a different story. He shook his head, describing the East as a pressure cooker that no sensible person would want to jump into right now. Anyone who did might find themselves trapped by the anti-corruption lid for years, unable to move a single stone. As his voice trailed off, a heavy silence descended upon the room, leaving everyone to process his words. We see the expressions of the three executives frozen on their faces, while Lu Xinrong's teacup remained suspended in midair. His gaze shifted from shock to sudden realization as he recalled a comment made by a certain leader at a recent dinner. That leader had casually mentioned that improving the old city was also a potential direction for the future. Junxing turned to meet Su Ming's gaze, finding her eyes wide with astonishment as she looked at him in a new light. Lu Xinrong muttered the word serious to himself before suddenly setting his teacup down with a heavy thud. Lu Xinrong stood up abruptly, walked around the table, and picked up the teapot to personally refill Junxing's cup. He remarked that considering only economics without politics is the mark of a reckless man, a mistake he wouldn't make again. He admitted that Junxing had just taught them a vital lesson, one that clearly left the three executives stunned. They watched in disbelief, as Lu Xinrong had never been this humble before, though Junxing simply insisted he was overstating things. Junxing gave a small smile, casually suggesting they shouldn't blame him if his offhand remarks turned out to be wrong. Lu Xinrong shook his head, noting that every word carried immense weight. No, calling it weighty was an understatement. He declared those words were worth billions before sitting back down, his eyes shining with a newfound intensity. He told Junxing that such a huge favor couldn't go unrewarded, promising to uphold the offer he had made earlier. He offered to give him any house he wanted for free, causing Su Ming to suddenly grip Junxing's hand under the table. Junxing shook his head, declining the gift and stating he would rather buy it, which prompted Lu to ask where he had in mind. Lu offered the lowest possible price on any choice, but Junxing smiled and asked for a stall at the Wanjiawi wholesale market. He also requested a small apartment in the nearby Wenxin Jiyuan complex, keeping his requirements surprisingly modest. He specified that 80 or 90 square meters would be enough, leaving everyone in the room completely bewildered. We see their confusion, as that area was just a low-end project built to make use of a remote, undesirable plot of land. It wasn't a profitable location at all, leading Lu Xinrong to frown and ask if Junxing was actually joking. He argued it was too isolated and offered a luxury riverside penthouse instead, but Junxing remained firm in his refusal. He explained that as a fruit merchant, the wholesale market was perfect for him, and a nearby home would be convenient. Lu Xinrong stared at him for a few seconds before suddenly laughing, his expression a mix of helplessness and genuine admiration. He agreed that if Junxing insisted on buying, he wouldn't force the gift, but he slammed his hand on the table with a new plan. He told Junxing to pick any stall he liked at the base cost of 100,000 and not a single penny more. Lu Xinrong jokingly threatened to get angry, insisting that 100,000 was practically a gift, so Junxing simply raised his glass and agreed. "Brother Lu, thank you," he said as their cups clinked, though he could feel Su Ming's gaze lingering intensely on his face. She looked at him and then at the three executives, who were still in a daze, her lips trembling as if she wanted to speak. Ultimately, she chose to remain silent, and after finalizing the plans with Lu Xinrong to view the shops the next day, they headed home. Su Ming went to the fruit stall first, already dreaming of upgrading their little stand into a wholesale supermarket and tidying up their inventory. She began organizing the various bits and pieces ahead of time, clearly excited by the sudden turn of their fortunes. Junsheng carried little Qianqian toward their apartment building, but just as they entered the hallway, they were blocked by Aunt Huang and her grandson. The woman looked at the child and asked, "Qianqian, remember when you were playing with Xiaobao? What did Grandma tell you?" She continued her lecture, telling the little girl that children must be obedient and listen to their elders. "If you don't listen to Grandma, you'll get sick. Do you remember that?" she added with a pointed look. Hearing those words, Junsheng felt a surge of protective anger rising deep within his chest. He knew better than anyone whether his daughter was well-behaved, and the implication that her illness was her own fault was absurd. To suggest she got sick because she was naughty was absolute nonsense, and he looked down to see Qianqian visibly shrinking back in fear. "Qianqian," he said, his voice ringing out clearly, "if anyone ever makes you feel uncomfortable outside, you come and tell Daddy." He promised to protect her and prepared to walk away, having heard quite enough from the meddling neighbor. "Don't be in such a hurry," the woman called out, chasing after them with a look of poorly hidden curiosity. She mentioned she had heard that Qianqian's medical bills had cost them a fortune, her eyes searching for a reaction. "Are you planning to sell your apartment then?" she asked, causing Junsheng to stop dead in his tracks. When he asked who told her that, she claimed the rumors were everywhere, adding that if they were selling, she was interested in buying. She reminded him they were old neighbors and told him not to set the price too high, already trying to negotiate a bargain. As she spoke, she reached into her grandson's rather filthy pocket and pulled out a piece of candy to shove toward Qianqian's mouth. "Here, have some candy," she insisted, but Junsheng quickly caught her wrist and snatched the treat away before she could succeed. He tossed it aside, told her the house wasn't for sale, and to stop listening to nonsense, then turned to head upstairs. Behind him, her curses rang out, calling him a spendthrift and accusing him of putting on airs for no reason. She muttered that he deserved to be penniless, and a little later, we see Su Ming returning home from her errands. Her face darkened the moment she heard Aunt Huang was involved, as the woman was a notorious gossip in the neighborhood. Our couple didn't think much of it, unaware that a loose tongue can stir up a storm, and by the following evening, while Junsheng was playing with Qianqian, Su Ming's phone rang, and her expression shifted after listening for just a few moments. "Mom, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "Selling the house? No, that's not happening at all." She hung up and looked at Junsheng with a deep frown, explaining that her mother had just called with some troubling news. It seemed Aunt Huang had accidentally run into them at the supermarket and claimed the couple was planning to sell their home. Just as Junsheng was about to respond, his own phone rang. It was a call from Lu Xinrong's secretary. They were calling to confirm the time for viewing the shops the next day, but he noticed Su Ming watching him hesitantly. When he asked what was wrong, she simply shook her head, though she couldn't help but mention her father's stubborn nature. If her father actually believed Aunt Huang's rumors, she was certain he would take some kind of drastic action very soon. Junsheng took her hand, assuring her that once the paperwork was finished tomorrow, everything regarding the house would be clear. She nodded, though her worry didn't quite fade, and what Junsheng didn't know was what was happening at that very moment. Back at the other house, Su Jingqi was rummaging through every drawer until he finally laid hands on the property deed. He gripped the dark red certificate with bloodshot eyes, convinced that his daughter was plotting something behind his back. "If she wants to play this game, fine," he muttered, while Gumanru stood by with tearful eyes, calling out to him. Gumanru hesitated, wondering if they should really do this to Ming Ming, but Su Jingqi cut her off sharply. He believed his daughter was being deluded, and if Chun Zuixing ever got his hands on this house, the two of them, well, they would truly have nowhere to live. He stuffed the property deed into his pocket, his teeth clenched in anger. He declared he would process the reverse mortgage for his retirement tomorrow, and once those papers were signed, this house would have nothing to do with them anymore, unless Zuixing left and Ming Ming agreed to a divorce. Otherwise, they could forget about living there. Gumanru opened her mouth to speak, but ultimately said nothing. Outside, the night grew heavy as the lights in the old apartment building flickered out one by one. The next morning at breakfast, Su Ming seemed quite happy, and we can sense her genuine excitement. She was clearly looking forward to seeing the shops today, while little Qianqian swung her legs and asked her mother, "Are we going to have a big fruit chop soon?" "That's right," Su Ming replied, her voice light and cheerful. She promised Qianqian she could have whatever she wanted. It was a peaceful scene, filled with the scent of porridge and eggs. But that peace didn't last long. Suddenly, a series of heavy, urgent bangs echoed against the door. When Su Ming went to open it, she found Su Jingqi and his wife standing there with grim, stony expressions. "Dad, Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked, only for him to snap back about interrupting their plans to sell the house. Su Jingqi marched inside, his eyes glaring directly at Zuixing, leaving Su Ming standing there in complete shock. With red-rimmed eyes, Gumanru pointed at Zuixing and asked if he was trying to sell the house to pay off debts. Zuixing set down his chopsticks and calmly tried to explain that they had it all wrong. To be honest, they weren't even listening. He assured them he owed no money and had no intention of selling the house, but he was told to shut his mouth. Su Jingqi interrupted him fiercely, asking if a single word out of his mouth was true before turning back to Su Ming. His voice rose as he demanded she get a divorce immediately, claiming Zuixing was drowning in 2 million in debt. He shouted that if the house was sold and she didn't get a divorce, she and little Qianqian would end up sleeping on the streets. Su Ming grew anxious, insisting that her parents were mistaken and asking who had been spreading such baseless rumors. Gumanru began to cry, saying they didn't need to hear it from anyone specific when the entire neighborhood was already talking about it. She told Su Ming that her heart ached for her, pleading with her daughter to just get the divorce and come back home. The parents promised to keep the house for her, provided they were the ones in control, but Su Ming refused to leave him. With a voice tinged with frustration, Su Ming told them they knew exactly how their own lives were going and didn't need interference. Su Jingqi snapped back, asking what she could possibly know and claiming she was clearly under some kind of spell. He stared her down, demanding a straight answer right then and there, emphasizing every word as he asked about the divorce. He gave her the ultimatum, leave him or stay. Su Ming remained silent, her lips pressed tight, refusing to give in. His chest heaved with anger as he declared he was taking the house back, leaving them to be rich or poor on their own. He told her that from now on, they had nothing to do with the Su family, and he would act as if he had no daughter. He announced he was there to reclaim the property, and after saying his piece, he grabbed Gumanru and turned to leave. Gumanru looked back with a trembling voice, asking Su Ming how she could have changed so much and become so stubborn. Su Ming shouted at their retreating backs, pointing out that it was her father who chose to sever their relationship. She argued that since he wanted the house back and she had agreed, she was actually being the obedient daughter he wanted. Gumanru's face turned pale at those words, accusing her of being completely deluded by that man, Zuashing. She declared that if Su Ming was willing to abandon her parents, then she would simply act as if she never gave birth to her. The door slammed shut with a heavy thud, and Su Ming collapsed into Zuashing's arms, her suppressed sobs finally breaking through. She trembled uncontrollably, wondering how they could say such cruel things, while Zuashing held her close to comfort her. He gently stroked her back as little Qianqian clung to her mother's leg, crying softly in the wake of the storm. As Su Ming finally began to calm down, little Qianqian whispered for her mother not to cry, while Zuashing gently wiped away her tears. He looked into her bloodshot eyes and then glanced around the cramped, dilapidated room they called home. Living here indefinitely simply wasn't right anymore. They truly needed a home of their own, but the path forward seemed uncertain. She looked up at him, and he squeezed her hand, telling her not to worry about the money before suggesting they go see the shop. She nodded and went to the bedroom, pulling out a light blue dress that he recognized as the best piece of clothing she had bought since their wedding. It was a dress she rarely wore, and seeing her hold up that old garment made his heart ache with a sharp pang of guilt. With over 3 million still sitting in his bank account, he realized it was high time he bought something decent for his wife and daughter. Once Su Ming had changed into the dress, she gave him a small smile and told him she was ready to go. They headed out to look at their big new venture, but just as they reached the roadside downstairs, a car horn honked twice beside them, and a black Mercedes window rolled down to reveal a familiar face. It was Lu Xinrong, smiling as he invited them to hop in, which caught Zuashing off guard for a moment before he smiled back. This Lu Xinrong had actually come to pick them up personally, without even bringing a driver along, a rare gesture, to be sure. As the car headed toward the southeast district, Lu Xinrong began to chat, explaining the history of the area to his young friend. He mentioned that the Wanjiawi project was originally built to use up leftover materials, situated in a spot that was neither the new city nor the old. He turned the car onto a slightly aged road, continuing his tour of the local geography. This area was known as a relocation zone, where many people from the old city center had been moved after their homes were demolished. The roads were wide and the buildings were new, but the amenities were lacking and the subway hadn't reached them yet. Zuashing looked out the window and remarked that once people settle down, their needs for daily life will naturally start to grow. Deep down, he knew the truth. Because of the mass relocation, this area was destined to become a hidden gold mine over the next few years. Wanjiawi was set to become one of the most vibrant hubs of Ninghai's grassroots economy, though few others realized it yet. As the first and largest comprehensive wholesale market to take shape in this area, it would soon become a massive magnet. Its storefronts might look humble now, but they would soon be impossible to acquire. It wouldn't just support 3 generations. It would be more than enough to keep their family of 3 comfortable for a lifetime. The car pulled to a stop outside the market, and Su Ming looked out at the vast, empty parking lot with a hint of doubt. Seeing the deserted entrance, she frowned slightly and whispered to Zuashing, asking if this place could really work, while Lu Xinrong spoke up with genuine sincerity, calling him brother. He mentioned he still had a few small shops on Binjiang Road with absolute prime locations and offered to set one up for him. Zuashing simply shook his head, noting that the consumer scene on Binjiang Road didn't fit their needs. This place was just right. He told them not to be fooled by the current silence, as it would eventually become incredibly popular, leaving Lu Xinrong smiling but puzzled. With a calm expression, Zuashing suggested that brother Lu shouldn't be in such a hurry to sell his shares in Wanjiawi. He advised him to buy out any small shareholders looking to cash out, because soon, this entire southeast district would consider Wanjiawi a golden treasure trove where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold. Lu Xinrong's gaze intensified as he asked if he was serious, and Zuashing met his eyes directly. He replied that whether it was true or not depended on whether Lu was willing to believe him, leaving the older man in silence. Lu Xinrong looked around the empty outskirts of the market, lost in thought, before finally suggesting they head inside to take a look. Regaining his cheerful demeanor, he led them inside, where the management staff saw him and came running over immediately. Chairman Lu instructed them to show the group the vacant storefronts, specifically pointing out the best locations available. The manager led the way eagerly, bringing them to a prime spot near the main entrance and addressing Chairman Lu. He pointed out a specific unit to Mr. Chun that was 50% larger than the standard shops. This was one of the largest storefronts in the entire market, boasting both a perfect location and ample space. The display potential was excellent, the kind any business owner dreams of, with a clear and transparent layout throughout the space. Lu Xinrong turned to look at our protagonist, asking if he was satisfied, while Su Ming's eyes lit up with clear approval. They all waited for his final decision, but Zueixing simply shook his head and stated that he didn't want this one. The manager was stunned, insisting that this was the best spot in the house, but Zueixing remained unmoved by the offer. His gaze shifted toward the deeper parts of the market as he suggested they go check the side entrance instead. The manager was visibly confused, noting that the foot traffic there was much lower, but he followed the order to lead the way. We see them arrive at the northwest side entrance, a quiet area near the freight channels and the edge of the parking lot. Most of the storefronts near this side door were empty, their glass windows covered in a thin layer of neglected dust. Zueixing's eyes eventually settled on an unremarkable unit that didn't even face the door directly, tucked slightly into a corner. It was positioned right next to a structural pillar, and with a firm finger, he pointed to it and declared it was the one. Su Ming couldn't help but speak up, looking at the desolate surroundings and the shop hidden away behind that massive pillar. She was completely bewildered, and even Lu Xinrong frowned, pointing out that the location was far too isolated for business. He noted that the lighting was poor and the pillar blocked the view, suggesting they look further ahead for something better. There was no need to keep looking, as Zueixing's tone was certain. However, Su Ming still wondered why he chose this specific spot. In a low voice, he told her it was because the feng shui here was exceptionally good, a classic explanation for the inexplicable. As she repeated the words in confusion, he pointed toward the structural pillar and began to explain his unique reasoning. In the world of feng shui, that pillar represented a stable mountain, allowing the shop to gather energy and harbor the wind. The energy would enter but wouldn't easily dissipate. While the other side was busy and loud, this spot offered a necessary stillness. It was a perfect balance of movement and quiet, leaving Su Ming dazed while Lu Xinrong could only laugh at the absurdity of it. Deciding not to argue any further, Lu Xinrong agreed that if his younger brother liked it, then that was the shop they would take. He turned to the manager and simply said this was the one, telling him to prepare the contract without even heading back to the office. Instead, he had the manager bring the paperwork directly to the car, right there on the spot. And so, Zueixing and Su Ming signed the lease agreement, a 30-year term with an option to renew. The total rent came to 100,000, a price that was essentially a gift, and Su Ming held the contract tight. She flashed her brightest smile of the day, asking Zueixing where they were headed next now that the shop was settled. Since the storefront was decided, he suggested they look for a house nearby and buy one if they found something suitable. Buying a house. Su Ming's eyes lit up once again as he confirmed that, yes, they were indeed going house hunting. Lu Xinrong chimed in, noting that if his younger brother wanted to buy in this area, he had plenty of options. He mentioned that the nearby Yuejing Heights and Southeast Pearl were both developed by their company's partners. He offered to arrange the lowest possible price for any unit Zueixing liked, but our protagonist simply shook his head. He told them those weren't necessary, suggesting they go take a look at Wenxin Garden instead. Lu Xinrong was taken aback, noting that Wenxin Garden was an older relocation housing project that had sold out long ago. Only second-hand units were circulating now, and Zueixing understood exactly what that implied regarding Lu's influence. It was much harder to directly influence the price of a second-hand house. He simply smiled, knowing exactly what he was doing. Whether the house was new or old didn't matter to him. The only thing that truly mattered was the right location. With a single phone call from Lu Xinrong, a white business van arrived in less than 15 minutes. The door slid open, and out stepped a man in his 40s, sporting a slightly prominent belly and a wide grin. He came running over, asking Chairman Lu why he had come in person, clearly eager to please. He extended his hands for a long, enthusiastic shake before turning to the group and introducing himself as Zhou Fulai. As the owner of Fulai Real Estate, he promised to handle everything Lu requested, earning a simple, calm nod from the chairman. Lu Xinrong introduced the group, telling old Zhou that Zueixing was like a father to him and wanted to see houses in Wenxin Garden. When asked if there were any suitable units, Zhou Fulai patted his chest confidently and assured them that, of course, there were. Since Chairman Lu had personally made the request, Zhou insisted on waiving the agency fee just to strike up a friendship. There were 4 units available in Wenxin Garden, so they began their tour, though the first 3 were quite ordinary. Finally, they reached the last unit on the top floor, and as the door swung open, they were greeted by a flood of warm sunlight. It was a rough-cast apartment with concrete floors and white lime walls, yet it felt remarkably spacious and clean. Su Ming walked to the far end of the living room and let out a soft gasp upon finding a terrace over 60 square meters. Zhou Fulai leaned in to explain to the woman he assumed was Mrs. Chun that the terrace was technically a public area. However, given the layout, this was the only unit on the top floor, making the space quite exclusive. He pointed out that since outsiders couldn't access it, sealing the entrance would essentially turn it into their own private space. Imagine having a private garden in the city. Su Ming said nothing, simply standing in the sun and staring at the empty lot. Zueixing walked over and began to describe how they could enclose the area, perhaps adding a large flower rack over there. He envisioned a pond on one side, hydrangeas in the middle, and a rattan table tucked away in the southeast corner. He pictured them sitting in 2 chairs on summer evenings, drinking tea, eating watermelon, and watching the stars together. Su Ming turned to look at him without a word, though her eyes began to redden with quiet emotion. The house itself was 120 square meters, but with the terrace, the usable space reached a generous 180. Zueixing looked at her and softly asked if she liked it, but she didn't offer an answer right away. She simply turned back to the view, gazing at it for a long time before finally giving a gentle, decisive nod. Lu Xinrong immediately chimed in, declaring the deal done and telling Zueixing not to worry about the details. With a broad wave of his hand, he reminded them that his company had developed this entire project, so he would handle everything. The blueprints were all there, showing how many others had enclosed their terraces, opening doors from the living room to add spiral staircases. He mentioned adding a structure on top with materials already in the warehouse, which prompted Su Ming to ask a practical question. She wanted to know how much it would cost, which only made Lu Xinrong break into a hearty laugh. He told her not to even mention money, as a complete renovation was something he could easily handle as a favor. Zueixing realized the man was determined to build a lasting friendship, so he decided not to be overly polite and simply agreed. After thanking Brother Lu, Zueixing turned to Zhou Fulai just as the agent was about to finalize the paperwork for that single unit. He calmly announced that he would take all 4 units, leaving Zhou Fulai momentarily stunned and speechless. Su Ming whipped her head around in total disbelief, and even Lu Xinrong was caught off guard by the sudden move. Lu Xinrong asked if he felt the space was too small, offering a 300-square-meter villa he owned elsewhere instead. Zueixing smiled and waved off the offer, explaining to Brother Lu that it wasn't about the size at all. He genuinely liked the location, noting that it was within walking distance of the Wanjiaoi market just outside the window. With a kindergarten nearby for the future and the shops so close, it was perfectly convenient for Ming Ming to manage the business. Su Ming tugged at his sleeve and whispered urgently, pointing out that there was really no need to buy all 4 apartments. Though they had over 3 million in the account, he squeezed her hand and told her not to worry, as this investment wouldn't lose money. Despite her lingering concerns, he turned back to Zhou Fulai and requested that the contracts for all 4 units be prepared immediately. The total for all 4 came to just over 2 million, leaving them with more than $1 million in the bank. It was enough to launch the shop and cover expenses. The signing went smoothly, and the move went even faster thanks to Lu Xinrong. A small truck and 3 young men arrived within half an hour, and they were finished moving before noon. Since the top floor needed renovations, they moved into one of the 5th-floor units which the previous owner had barely used. After a quick cleaning and hanging new curtains, the place was spotless, and Su Ming began arranging the plants she had kept for years. As the greenery was set upon the windowsills, little Qianqian kicked off her shoes and began racing across the fresh floorboards. She darted from one room to another like a joyful little sparrow, calling out for her mother and father. She looked up with wide eyes, asking if this room was finally hers and if they were really staying. We see Su Ming sitting on the new sofa that Lu Xinrong had just sent over as a gift. He claimed it was a warehouse sample, though it was clearly brand new with the plastic wrap still intact. Zueixing watched his daughter running around, his gaze becoming somewhat distant as he reflected on how much had changed. Su Ming sat in the room with a dazed expression, her mind drifting back to just yesterday. Only 24 hours ago, they were squeezed into a dark, damp corner, still reeling from a fierce argument with his parents. Now, she sat in a spacious, sunlit home, with a shop and 4 apartments registered in both their names. The top-floor unit with the terrace was still waiting to be transformed into their very own sky garden. It all felt like a dream, the sunlight streaming through the window and reflecting off the moisture in her eyes. Seeing his wife so moved, Zueixing felt that every penny of those 2 million yuan had been well spent. 2 million for 4 properties. He knew better than anyone just how valuable this investment truly was. In just 1 year, the educational landscape of Ninghai would experience a massive, seismic shift. A high-ranking official from the capital, originally from Ninghai, was about to retire from a very important position. The old gentleman had been reserved his entire life, but he had one final wish before stepping down. He personally proposed the idea of leaving a prestigious school behind on the very land where he was born. This wasn't just a name on a building or a simple donation. It was a plan to bring the capital's best resources here. The elite North China Elementary was coming to Ninghai, and the entire educational map was about to be redrawn. And as it turned out, the specific location chosen for this new branch was right in their new neighborhood. Right there, on the empty plot of land next to their new home, the North China Elementary branch was about to rise. When the first round of enrollment began, the entire city would be fighting for a spot within the school district's boundaries. As it happened, the red line for the district perfectly encircled their entire neighborhood, and overnight, everything changed. This relocation housing project, which everyone had once looked down upon, suddenly transformed into Ninghai's most coveted location. It became a top-tier school district property, with prices set to skyrocket like a literal rocket ship. The original residents who had accepted these houses during the relocation were about to find themselves accidentally wealthy. Some would sell a single unit to pay for their son's down payment in Shanghai, while others traded their old lives for gold. Elderly couples would soon be traveling the world on their newfound riches. During those 2 years, it was all anyone talked about. The entire city of Ninghai looked at this neighborhood with envy, their eyes turning green with jealousy. There were those who cursed themselves for not buying in sooner, but Zuashing was already holding 4 properties. His plan was simple: wait for the prices to peak, then sell 3 of them at the perfect moment. By keeping the last one, he wasn't just securing their future, he was ensuring they would never have to worry about money again. Even if Meng Meng decided to never work a day in her life, she would be able to live in absolute comfort. Of course, with his knowledge and capital, he could have easily bought up the surrounding neighborhoods to make even more. But he felt there was no need. After being given a second chance at life, he was beginning to realize something important. He understood now that there is no end to the pursuit of wealth. One can never truly earn it all. In his previous life, he had spent every waking moment building a billion-dollar empire from absolutely nothing. And yet, what was the point? This time around, he told himself that having enough was plenty. His daughter's laughter, the look in his wife's eyes, and the quiet moments of a family sharing a meal together, these were the real prizes. These were the things he truly cherished. Meanwhile, we see Su Hai sitting alone in his car. He sat there for nearly 20 minutes, his phone growing hot in his palm, before he finally forced himself to start the car. His father had sounded so furious on the phone that Su Hai knew if he didn't show up, there might be no home to return to. After navigating through several winding alleys, he parked beneath the familiar old apartment building and took a deep, steadying breath. He climbed the stairs and knocked on the door. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. Still, there was only silence. He hurried back downstairs to the fruit stall at the mouth of the alley, but it was empty. The stall had been cleared out completely. Even that old electronic scale of theirs was nowhere to be seen. The woman selling vegetables next door poked her head out and recognized him immediately, calling out to young Su. When he asked about his sister, she confirmed his fears. His sister and the others had already moved out. They left around noon, the woman explained loudly, mentioning a large truck and several young men who came to help. Everything was cleared out in a flash. She admitted she was surprised, considering they had lived there for over 10 years. Suhai's head began to spin. He stammered, trying to process the news, asking where on earth they could have gone. The woman shook her head, assuming his sister would have told him. Suhai didn't have the heart to answer that. He stood before the vacant fruit stall, clutching his phone, unable to move for a long, quiet moment. We only learned these details later, piecing them together from the scattered fragments Su Ming mentioned during a phone call. That evening, Zuashing's phone rang. He picked it up, expecting a normal conversation, but the tone quickly shifted. He listened to a few sentences, his expression hardening as he realized who was on the other end of the line. His face changed completely. Without saying a word, he simply handed the phone over to me to listen. On the other end, Su Zhengqi's voice came through, sounding full of energy and utterly self-righteous as he addressed Zuashing. He told him to listen closely. That house was allocated by his old work unit, and the property rights belonged solely to him. He announced he had already invested it into a senior housing project, and the paperwork would be finalized the very next day. He declared that unless Zuashing divorced Meng Meng, they shouldn't even dream of living in that house anymore. Zuashing gripped the phone, remaining silent for a few seconds before finally addressing him as father. He calmly informed him that they had already moved out, a revelation that met with a stunned silence on the other end. They had left at noon, and the house was now empty, meaning he was free to reclaim it whenever he wished. There was another long pause before the line went dead. To be honest, there wasn't much left to say. Zuashing handed the phone back to Su Ming, whose eyes were rimmed with red as he looked back. He didn't cry, though his voice trembled as he asked if they had truly invested the house already. He lowered his head, clutching the phone tightly, and lapsed into a long, heavy silence. Finally, he looked up and forced a small, fragile smile, deciding it didn't matter anymore. Since they weren't going back anyway, Zuashing simply nodded and pulled him into a comforting embrace. We see the new fruit shop open after renovations, though business remained somewhat lukewarm during that first month. Watching the empty storefront, Su Ming would occasionally let a flicker of anxiety cross his face. Zuashing, however, wasn't worried. They had savings, and since they owned the shop, there was no rent to pay. The penthouse was still being renovated, and he reminded himself that life is meant to be lived, not rushed. A month later, Lu Xingrong called to announce that the work was finally finished. We follow them as they go to inspect the results, and the moment they push open the door, Su Ming stands frozen in place. The wall between the living room and the terrace is gone. Lu Xingrong had actually installed a massive glass folding door that stretched from the ceiling to the floor. With the doors fully retracted, sunlight pours in from the terrace, bathing the entire room in a golden glow. The terrace itself is transformed, with the concrete replaced by wood decking and flower beds built into the corners. Climbing roses and blue plumbago had been planted, and though the trellises were up, the vines hadn't quite covered them yet. Still, bits of green were already beginning to climb, and in the southeast corner sat a round rattan table. 2 chairs were set there, and the table even held a rustic vase filled with a few stems of hydrangea. A glass dome covered half the terrace, letting the sunlight through while keeping the rain out as Su Ming slowly walked inside. He stared for a long time before covering his mouth, his eyes welling up with tears. Suddenly, Qian came screaming into the room. The little girl had originally been downstairs. She had been with Lu Xingrong's assistant looking at apple trees, only to realize her parents had vanished. She scrambled upstairs as fast as her short legs could carry her, freezing in place the moment the door opened. Then, she dashed into the living room, spun in a circle, and charged out onto the terrace. She spun again, spotting the apple trees, and let out a gasp of wonder at every single thing she saw. She exclaimed how beautiful it was, and as we watched the two of them, the memory of billion-dollar contracts fades. The massive mergers and the moments under the spotlight of success all seemed to pale in comparison to this. In fact, they didn't even amount to a fraction of the joy found in this single moment. And as it often goes, good things began to arrive in quick succession. 2 months later, business finally shifted. The fruit wholesale shop suddenly exploded in popularity, all thanks to Su Ming's new livestream. The idea had actually come from Zuixing, who had suggested it quite some time ago. He had spent a great deal of time explaining the potential of the platform to him. They went back and forth on the details, discussing how best to present their daily life and their produce. He shared everything he knew, guiding him through the process until they were ready to begin. But above all, his primary focus remained the well-being of his child and their new life together. And so, we see the beginning of a new chapter for our protagonist. He wasn't using any fancy equipment or professional setups for his new venture. It was just him, standing there in the middle of the market. He was simply being himself, which, to be honest, was more than enough. There were no strange filters or dramatic lighting effects, just a single warm fill light. It shone over the fruit stall, with the familiar Wanjiawi market stalls serving as his backdrop. Seasonal fruits were neatly stacked on wooden shelves, marked with prices in Qian's crooked, handwritten script. During the first week, the live stream averaged only a few viewers, but Su Ming didn't mind the silence. He would simply smile at the camera while organizing stock, mentioning how sweet the strawberries were today. By the second week, while scrolling through his phone one evening, he noticed something troubling. A blueberry farm in a neighboring province was struggling with unsellable stock, the farmers sighing in despair. After watching the video several times, Su Ming called his supplier the next morning and ordered 500 pounds. He didn't try to exploit the situation for views. He simply put the blueberries on the shelf and mentioned them in passing. That night, hundreds of people suddenly flooded into the live stream, and the comments began flying by. Viewers praised his honesty and began placing orders immediately to support such a conscientious merchant. Su Ming was completely stunned, his face turning red as he scrambled to reply to everyone at once. By the next day, the platform's algorithm kicked in, and the traffic surged like an open floodgate. On the third day, the orders didn't just trickle in, they arrived page after page, faster than he could read. The order printer buzzed from morning until night without a single moment of rest. It wasn't just online sales that exploded. The physical shop at Wanjiawi was suddenly busier than ever. We learned that roadwork was scheduled for the next 8 months, and with the main entrance blocked, no cars could get in. The massive crowd that usually swarmed the main street shops suddenly pivoted, rushing toward the north side gate instead. And as luck would have it, that was exactly where his and Su Ming's shop stood, with trucks now lining up in a row. It was beautiful chaos, unloading in the front, loading in the back, and the moment mangoes hit the shelves, wholesalers were ready. They were already waving their order slips, shouting for the boss to bring out 5 more boxes of yellow mangoes. Others clamored to know if there were any Shine Muscat grapes left, or if they could take 10 cases of cherries. Some even tried to haggle for a bulk discount. By the end of the day, he and Su Ming were completely overwhelmed. They were so busy they barely had a moment to breathe, let alone eat, when they finally made it home. Su Ming collapsed onto the sofa, without even the strength left to brush the hair from her eyes. The next morning, he reached out to Lu Xingrong to hire 5 new staff members, which finally gave them some relief. We see that in his previous life, this was the exact reason the North Gate had become the market's main artery. What used to be the quietest, most forgotten corner had been transformed into a golden location by the sheer surge of traffic. At the time, even feng shui masters would stop by to point at the pillar near the North Gate with great authority. They called it a dragon pillar that anchored the energy, claiming the shops nearby were perfectly positioned to hoard wealth. It all sounded a bit mystical, to be honest, but he was the one finally reaping the rewards of this lucky spot. However, even he hadn't anticipated just how explosive Su Ming's live streaming career would actually become. A natural beauty, no makeup, supporting local farmers. It was the perfect storm of wholesome content the platform craved. Su Ming had hit every single trending tag the algorithm wanted to promote, and the traffic surged like a broken dam. Occasionally, during a rare quiet moment, she would sit by the shelves and simply stare off into space in disbelief. He sat down to check the books again today. Last month, the combined sales from the shop and the stream were staggering. The numbers were staggering, 1.37 million in sales, with a net profit of 210,000. His expression turned dazed. Sometimes, when he woke up in the morning and stared at the ceiling, he wondered if this was all just a dream and if he would wake up back in that cramped, dilapidated apartment building. He imagined Qian sleeping by the wall while he waited for her to come home, but he couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. She reached out and squeezed his hand, telling him it wasn't a dream, and even if it were, it was a dream they had earned themselves. He looked up, his eyes slightly red, and realized he needed to shift Su Ming's focus away from the heavy emotions of the past. He turned his face toward her and gently suggested that the most important thing right now wasn't actually making more money. He reminded her that Xianxian had a hospital follow-up next month and that her kindergarten had already started assigning homework. Su Ming fell silent for a long moment, asking if he meant that she was spending too little time with their daughter. He looked into her eyes and explained that they weren't short on money anymore, they were short on time. What they lacked was the time to watch her grow up. She took a deep breath, admitting she knew he was right. But she confessed that she felt unable to stop, fearing that if she slowed down for even a second, all of this success might simply vanish. He smiled and assured her it wouldn't, but her brows suddenly furrowed with worry. She spoke with sudden intensity, remembering that Xianxian was due to start primary school next year. The teaching quality at the nearest public primary school was mediocre at best, which was a concern for any parent. The good schools in the city required either living in a specific district or paying massive school selection fees. Even the small, old apartments in the city center school districts cost $40,000 to $50,000 per square meter. A tiny 60-square-meter unit would start at over $3 million. She began speaking faster and faster, as if driven by a new anxiety. She felt as though she were being pushed forward by an invisible force, insisting she had to earn even more money immediately. Watching her get so worked up left him somewhere between a laugh and a sigh, so he told Su Ming not to worry. He told her that their daughter was blessed and didn't need to worry, which caused Su Ming to pause in confusion. She clearly didn't understand what he meant, but he wasn't in any rush to explain the situation regarding the primary school. It wasn't the right time to speak yet. He knew that when the official news finally broke, the timing would be perfect. Half of Ninghai would go absolutely mad, but for now, the fruit wholesale supermarket business continued to grow. Like a snowball rolling downhill, it just kept getting bigger, and once the company was registered, he chose the name himself. He called it Mengxing Fruit Industry, and when Su Ming saw those two characters side by side on the license, she smiled. Her lips curved upward as things finally felt official, and he suggested to his wife that they should increase the staff wages. She nodded and raised the pay scale by a tier, which, naturally, made everything in the shop run much more smoothly. Finally, the two of them didn't have to be tied to the store every day, especially since the young girls picked up the live streaming quickly. Su Ming only appeared at specific times now, but every time she went online, the comment section would absolutely explode. The label of Fruit Goddess had somehow stuck to her, with viewers constantly praising how beautiful she looked. That afternoon, Su Ming's phone rang, and after hanging up, she told him about the call she had received. The management committee from their old market had notified her to come and collect their return security deposit. When he asked how much it was, she told him it was $2,000, and he couldn't help but chuckle. He noted that it wasn't even half a day's earnings now, but she insisted they couldn't just let the committee keep it. She gave him a playful look and began changing her shoes. 20 minutes later, we find her back at the old market. Su Ming stood at the entrance of that familiar alley, seeing that their small, broken fruit stall already had a new owner. The new storefront was bright and shiny. She watched it for a few seconds, shook her head, and turned toward the office. These were the details she shared with him later, including how Director Zhou acted the moment she entered the office. The director was so warm he seemed like a different person, and after finishing the paperwork, he insisted on chatting with her. When he asked where they were living now, Su Ming casually mentioned they were at Wenxin Garden, right next to Wanjiawi. Director Zhou's eyes instantly went wide as saucers. Wenxin Garden? You're living in Wenxin Garden. Su Ming was stunned and asked what was wrong, but instead of answering, Director Zhou turned around and pulled out a document. He slapped a copy of an official red-header document down in front of her. It had an incredibly long title. Su Ming's eyes scanned it quickly, catching keywords like North China Fuxiao Ninghai Branch and School District Zoning Selection. Her gaze dropped further until it hit that one specific line. Wenxin Garden was officially included in the school's enrollment zone. There was smaller text below showing the release date was 3 days ago. She didn't quite grasp the meaning at first. As Su Ming struggled to process it, Director Zhou continued by explaining that her entire neighborhood was now a prime school district. It was now part of the North China Fuxiao District, a prestigious school from the capital, the best in all of Ninghai. Nobody used to give those old, broken-down houses in Wenxin Garden a second look, but things had clearly changed. He asked her to guess the current price per square meter, but Su Ming just opened her mouth without making a sound. Director Zhou held up 2 fingers and told her it was 130,000, and people were still fighting over them. Assuming Su Ming was only renting, his face was filled with a look of genuine pity for her situation. He told her it would have been great if they'd bought a place there early. Renting was just helping the landlord pay their mortgage. He noted that the owners were now making a fortune, especially considering that price of 130,000 per meter. A simple 100-meter apartment was now worth over 10 million. Su Ming just stood there, frozen by that number. Wenxin Garden, at that price, the very same complex where her husband now owned 4 separate apartments. She later told him that her legs went weak in that moment, and she had to steady herself against the table to sit down. Director Zhou was startled, asking if she was all right or if she felt sick, as her face had turned completely pale. Su Ming simply shook her head and tried to speak, her voice trembling as she called out to him. She asked him to repeat the price of Wenxin Garden. Did he really just say 130,000? Su Ming didn't say another word. She simply sat there in a daze, staring blankly at the document on the desk. She remained motionless for a long moment before finally picking up her phone to call Jixing. When the phone began to vibrate, Jixing was at the shop checking inventory, seeing his wife's name flash on the screen. He picked up, but there was only silence on the other end until he softly called out her name. She asked him about Wenxin Garden and why things had suddenly become so chaotic, leaving him momentarily stunned. She explained that the North China Fuxiao branch was right next door and the school district zoning had been finalized. At 130,000 per meter, Jixing leaned against a shelf, feeling a genuine sense of surprise. In his past life, this news hadn't broken for another year. This time, it was over 6 months early. He told her to come home so they could visit an agent, but she hesitated before asking one more thing. She wanted to know if, back when he bought those 4 apartments, he had somehow known this would happen. Jixing just chuckled, telling her that such a thing would have been impossible. He joked that if he'd known, he would have bought the whole complex instead of running a fruit shop. The other end of the line went quiet for a few seconds before she gave a soft reply and hung up. As she hurried back, another visitor arrived first. A black Mercedes pulled up right in front of the shop. Lu Xingrong marched inside, immediately asking if he'd heard the news about the Wenxin Garden School District. Jixing set down his inventory list and admitted he'd only just found out himself. Lu explained he'd come straight from the airport to find him, leaning in close to whisper a question. He asked for the honest truth. Did Jixing have some kind of inside track on this new policy beforehand? Jixing gave a slow, relaxed smile, noting that the whole school district situation was certainly something else. Jixing pointed out that if he could predict the future, he wouldn't be in the fruit business, while Lu Xingrong stared at him for several long seconds. Finally, Lu let out a dark chuckle, remarking that while many people are lucky, he had never seen anyone quite like his young friend. To be so consistently accurate was unheard of, but Jixing simply smiled and chose not to respond. When Su Ming returned, her face was still flushed with excitement, and the three of them headed straight for the real estate agency. Upon arrival, we see that something is clearly wrong. A massive crowd has gathered, nearly bursting through the front doors. Inside, the chaos was even worse, with people shouting over one another to ask if there were any listings left in Wenxin Garden. They were offering full cash payments for any floor plan available when Zhou Fulai finally managed to squeeze his way out of the crowd. His forehead was drenched in sweat, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw Jixing, and he hurried over to greet him. The other customers watched in stunned silence, wondering why the agency owner was treating this man with such immense reverence. It was as if he were greeting his own father, prompting Jixing to smile and comment on how business seemed to be booming. Zhou Fulai bowed and scraped, crediting Jixing for his good fortune, before leading them into a small, private meeting room. His eyes sparkled with anticipation as he asked if Jixing had come there today specifically to sell his properties. He wanted to know exactly which units in Wenxin Garden were on the table, while Su Ming pursed her lips and mentioned the 5th floor unit. She added the 3rd floor unit to the list, deciding they would keep the penthouse for themselves and hold on to the last one for now. Zhou Fulai nodded repeatedly and began running the numbers, his pen scratching rapidly across the paper as the figures emerged. He pushed the paper toward Jixing, explaining that the 98 square meter unit on the 5th floor was a prime asset. A conservative estimate put it at 12.5 million, while the 95 square meter unit on the 3rd floor was close behind. That one was worth roughly 12.3 million, bringing the total for both apartments to a staggering 24.8 million. We noticed Su Ming's fingers tremble slightly at the mention of such a sum, but Jixing simply gave a calm nod of approval. He agreed to proceed with those prices, and as Zhou Fulai nodded in excitement, something else suddenly occurred to the agent. Jixing smiled and asked if Zhou Fulai intended to waive the agency fee this time, or if it was finally time to pay up. Zhou Fulai froze for a moment, a complex expression crossing his face as he looked at the young man before him. He recalled how Jixing had promised that the agent would earn his commission back on the next deal. At the time, he had dismissed it as mere polite talk, never imagining that Jixing would actually return so soon. His gaze was intense as he stared at Jixing, and suddenly, the focus of the entire room shifted toward him. Even Su Ming turned to look at him with a soft expression, and as Jixing smiled back, her cheeks flushed crimson. He joked that his good fortune was all thanks to his beautiful and kind-hearted wife, causing Su Ming's face to redden even further. She gave him a playful, gentle swat on the arm, just as his phone began to vibrate in his pocket. 24.8 million had been deposited. He took a quick glance at the screen before casually tucking the phone away. Su Ming, however, couldn't stop staring at her own screen, reading that long string of digits over and over again. She even used her finger to count the zeros several times before finally looking up at Jixing in a daze. She whispered his name, realizing with a start that she was now officially a multimillionaire. Jixing nodded in confirmation, yet she looked utterly confused, admitting that she didn't feel any different at all. To her, they were just numbers on a screen, while the physical houses remained exactly where they had always been. The fruit shop was still busy, and life seemed the same, so she struggled to grasp her new status. Meanwhile, Lu Xingrong watched on. He let out a hearty laugh, telling her that a millionaire needs to start living like one to truly feel the reality of it. He argued that this was the only way to get a truly authentic experience. "Listen to me," he urged, offering some classic brotherly advice. He mentioned that his company had just launched a new set of detached villas over in the Tsuhu district. The environment was beautiful, and the privacy was top tier, exactly what a man of Jixing's new standing required. He offered to reserve the very best unit, complete with a yard and garage, as a personal token of his gratitude. His offer was sincere, but Jixing knew exactly what he was planning, especially now that the news about the Wenxin school district was out. The value of Lu's own properties and his shares in Wanjiawi were soaring even faster than Jixing's. This single wave of profit was massive. He was earning no less than if he had developed 2 entire complexes, making him even more eager to stay on Jixing's good side. But Jixing shook his head. He thanked Lu for the kind gesture but politely declined the new house, while beside him, Su Ming nodded her head in vigorous agreement. She insisted she hadn't had nearly enough time in their current sunroom, noting that the roses on the terrace had only just begun to bloom. She explained how she loved checking on them every morning and felt it would be a shame to leave, speaking with a certain gentle warmth. There was a genuine, almost girlish excitement in her voice as she spoke about their modest home. Watching her, Jixing felt his resolve harden. After all, he had lived in plenty of villas in his previous life. He remembered those vast, empty mansions where one could walk for hours and hear nothing but the echo of their own footsteps. To him, a family of 3 sharing tea and watching the stars under a glass dome was far superior to any cold luxury estate. Seeing that they were both unmoved, Lu Xingrong didn't push the matter, though he wasn't quite finished with his suggestions yet. He quickly pivoted to a new idea, suggesting that if they wouldn't change houses, they surely needed to consider a new car. He argued that with the scale of their current business, having a proper vehicle was no longer just a luxury, but a necessity. After all, one can't exactly pick up high-end clients in a delivery truck. He paused for a moment to let that sink in. He added with a grin that as the fruit goddess, her fans simply wouldn't allow her to be seen taking the bus anymore. That last comment managed to make Su Ming laugh, and she shot a quick, questioning glance toward Jixing. Seeing the slight softening in her expression, Jixing thought it over for a moment before finally agreeing to the idea. He suggested they visit a car show the following week, and half an hour later, we see them returning to Wanjiawi. Before the car even came to a complete stop, Jixing sensed something was wrong. A crowd had gathered in front of the shop. They weren't there to shop, but to watch the drama as several men blocked the entrance, standing with their hands on their hips amidst a cloud of cigarette smoke. The air was thick with a sense of impending trouble. His heart sank as he pushed the car door open and hurried toward the shop. Pushing through the crowd, we see the chaos inside. The live streaming stand lay toppled on the floor, its phone screen shattered into pieces. The fruit baskets, which were usually arranged with such care, had been overturned, leaving fruit rolling across the floor in every direction. Several young female employees were huddled in the corner, their faces pale with fear, while someone else occupied the live streaming chair. In the spot where Su Ming usually sat, there was now a middle-aged man with a buzz cut and a thick neck. A gold chain as thick as a thumb hung around his neck as he sat with legs crossed, mindlessly rolling 2 walnut shells in his hand. He narrowed his eyes to size Jixing up without even bothering to stand, asking if he was the boss of this establishment. Jixing scanned the damage, his voice remaining remarkably steady as he asked what business they had there. The man simply scoffed. He slammed the walnuts onto the table and introduced himself as Yong, or as he preferred to be called, Brother Yong. He claimed to be from a business firm in the east of the city that was currently looking to expand its reach. He stood up and walked right over to Jixing, looking him up and down with a predatory sort of curiosity. He noted that the location was excellent, being right at the north gate and already set up for live streaming. Business must be booming, he remarked, and when Jixing didn't respond, he continued by offering what he called a fair price. He suggested Jixing take a small sum of money and simply find another place to start over from scratch. He declared that he wanted this storefront for himself, punctuating the statement by patting Jixing firmly on the shoulder. He told Jixing to show him some respect and move out today. Jixing looked down at the hand resting on his shoulder. He looked back up and addressed him calmly, stating clearly that the shop was absolutely not for sale. Yong stared him down, suggesting that perhaps Jixing hadn't heard him correctly the first time. He asked again if Jixing was going to accept the respect he was being offered, or if things were going to get difficult. Jixing let out a cold, dry laugh just as the car door behind him opened once again. Lu Xingrong strides over, demanding to know who's causing trouble, and Brother Yong turns to see who it is. Yong narrows his eyes for a moment before his face instantly breaks into a forced, oily smile. He greets him as Director Lu, wondering aloud what on earth brings a man like him to a place like this. He asks if this little shop is under Lu's protection, as Lu Xingrong walks to Jixing's side with a cold sneer. Protection? Lu scoffs, noting that this entire Wanjia development was built and owned by him. He explains that he gives his storefronts to whoever he pleases, taking a menacing step toward the intruder. He asks who Young thinks he is, playing gangster on his turf, while Young's expression shifts through several shades of panic. Young's jaw tightens as he struggles with his temper, but in the end, he decides to swallow his pride. He tells director Lu not to say that, claiming he was only there to discuss a business deal. He tries to play it off as a simple negotiation, but Lu Xingrong just points at the toppled live streaming stand. He gestures to the fruit scattered across the floor, asking if this is what passes for a business meeting these days. Young gives a dry, hollow laugh and offers no defense, turning his attention back toward Jixing. With a gaze that can only be described as sinister, he tells Jixing that he's lucky this time. He declares that because director Lu is present, he'll show Jixing some respect and let the matter drop. Reaching the door, he pauses to look back, suggesting that Jixing should think very carefully about his future. He wonders aloud if Jixing can really rely on others to protect him forever before waving his men away. The group follows him out, vanishing into the crowd as a heavy silence finally settles over the shop. The tension breaks as several young employees burst into tears, and Su Ming comes rushing through the door. She throws her arms around Jixing, asking if he's all right. He gently pats her back and reassures her. As they watch the thugs leave, Lu Xingrong turns to Jixing and addresses him as a younger brother. Lu Xingrong warns that Director Young specifically targets promising businesses, keeping a gang of thugs on his payroll for just such occasions. He notes that while Young left today as a personal favor, a man like that won't swallow his pride for long. Jixing cuts him off with a quiet thank you, choosing not to say much more about the looming threat to his future. Instead, we see him kneel down to pick up the scattered fruit one by one, carefully placing them back into the basket. The following day, the peace is shattered when the police station calls, asking if they are speaking with Chen Zuixing. The officer explains that Sun Jian, the shop's driver, was involved in a fight and is currently in the hospital. Jixing is stunned, unable to imagine the mild-mannered old son fighting anyone, but the officer insists he come down immediately. At the hospital, he and Su Ming rush to the ward and push open the door to find a grim scene. Old Sun is lying in the hospital bed, his head wrapped in thick gauze and his eyes bruised a deep, painful purple. His face is so swollen his eyes are mere slits, and a woman sits in the chair beside him, likely his wife. Her eyes are red from crying, while two police officers stand by the window, one taking notes and the other watching closely. When Old Sun spots them, he weakly calls out to Boss Chun, trying to acknowledge his employer's arrival. He struggles to sit up, but Jixing quickly steps forward and gently presses him back down, telling him not to move. When asked what happened, Old Sun opens his mouth to speak, but the words seem to fail him. Beside him, his wife's tears begin to flow again, her voice choked with emotion as she tries to defend him. She pleads with Boss Chun, insisting that her husband is an honest man who would never go looking for trouble. Jixing assures her that he knows exactly what kind of man Old Sun is, looking down at his injured friend with concern. He tells the older man to take his time and explain the situation whenever he feels ready. Old Sun takes a ragged breath and begins to recount how he went to pick up a shipment of dragon fruit early that morning. The truck was loaded and he had just pulled out of the market gates when a group of men suddenly rushed out from the roadside. They were carrying clubs and stones, and without a single word, they began raining blows down upon the truck. Some of them climbed into the back, grabbing the freshly loaded crates of dragon fruit and smashing them onto the pavement. Old Sun, a former soldier, jumped out and managed to take down 2 of them, but he was simply outnumbered. No matter how well he could fight, he couldn't hold off 7 or 8 men as they swarmed him from behind. After taking a heavy blow, he watched through a haze as they shattered the windows and slashed the truck's tires. The next thing he knew, he was waking up in this hospital bed. As he finished his story, he gritted his teeth in frustration. His jaw was set tight with anger. A moment later, Jixing stepped out of the ward with the 2 police officers. Hoping for some clarity on the matter, he offered a cigarette to the older officer, who accepted it quietly. The officer placed it in his mouth without lighting it and asked if the victim worked at Jixing's shop. Jixing confirmed he was a driver and a veteran who never caused trouble. The officer nodded, acknowledging the situation. He explained that the gang had fled quickly. By the time the police arrived, there was nothing left but ruined fruit. The truck's license plate had been covered with mud, and while cameras caught their silhouettes, their faces remained hidden. When Jixing asked what could be done, the officer looked at him, noting that the report was filed and the case opened. However, he admitted that unless there was a major organized crime crackdown, these cases are notoriously difficult to solve. Jixing understood the reality of the situation. Returning to the ward, he met Su Ming as she was stepping out. She had given Old Sun's wife some money, telling her to focus on his recovery and not to worry about the shop's losses. She assured them his job would be waiting and his salary would be paid in full while he recovered from his injuries. Old Sun's wife hurried after them, catching Su Ming's hand in a gesture of profound gratitude. She was so moved she could hardly speak. As they walked toward the hospital exit, Su Ming asked what the police had said. He told her the case was official, but catching the culprits would be a far more difficult task. Su Ming furrowed her brow, wondering if they should perhaps ask Lu Xinrong for help with the situation. Chen Zuixing simply shook his head, knowing that while the law has its ways, the shadows have their own rules. He told her not to worry, assuring her that he would handle the matter himself. After a quick call to Gu Weidong, a black business van pulled up to the shop the following afternoon. The driver stepped out and opened the door with deep respect, while Su Ming watched from a distance. She felt a flicker of unease, but without offering much of an explanation, he simply climbed inside. The van wound through a maze of streets before stopping at the entrance of a very deep, ancient alleyway. Old residential buildings with peeling paint lined both sides, leading to a small noodle shop at the very end. The sign was tiny, and the characters had long since faded. Inside, there were only 5 or 6 tables. We see a lone figure sitting at the furthest table, Gu Weidong, hunched over a bowl of noodles. He gestured toward the stool beside him, asking if he wanted to eat. Chen Zuixing glanced at the bowl. The color was dull, and the noodles were unevenly cut. He declined, prompting Gu Weidong to look up. He remarked on how blunt the young man was, to which Chen Zuixing replied, "Why eat something that tastes bad?" Gu Weidong paused and then laughed, admitting he wasn't sure what to make of Chen Zuixing just yet. He wondered aloud if it was a matter of supreme confidence or just a very strong sense of self. Setting his chopsticks down, he agreed that the food was indeed terrible, which was a fair point, really. But a long time ago, this very dish had saved his life. Chen Zuixing listened as he spoke of harder times. Back then, his parents were targeted for their overseas connections, leaving him and his sister with no one. They nearly starved until an old neighbor began secretly bringing them a bowl of these noodles every day. He poked at the noodles, noting they were made with elm bark flour, a bitter reminder of a different world. It was terrible, but it kept the hunger away. Later, when I became successful, I went back to find that old neighbor. The person was long gone, but I still come here for a bowl from time to time, just to remind myself. He wanted to remember exactly where he had crawled out from. Chen Zuixing looked at the bowl and remained silent for a few seconds. He decided to speak plainly, suggesting that eating good food was actually the best way to honor the past. Gu Weidong looked up, questioning if eating simple, bitter food every day wasn't the true way to remember one's roots. Chen Zuixing shook his head, calling that mere self-indulgent sentimentality. To truly honor one's roots, he argued, one should eat the best, wear the best, and live the best life possible, which, to be honest, makes a certain kind of sense. He felt they should show that child who nearly starved that they had truly survived and thrived. They were living better than anyone now. Gu Weidong stared at him for several long seconds, processing this. He admitted there was logic in that. Wiping his mouth, his expression returned to its usual composed state. He got down to business, explaining that Lu Yong was just a small player, but the man behind him was the real issue. That man was Lai Laosan of the Yangtze Company, a name that carried a significant amount of weight in the underworld. Lai Laosan had been a street thug in his early years before eventually cleaning up his image and going legitimate. He had even managed to worm his way into political circles, a fact Gu Weidong mentioned with clear disdain. Chen Zuixing wondered why someone who had already made it to the top would still act so recklessly and arrogantly. Gu Weidong leaned back, explaining that the man was merely a blade in someone else's hand. It wasn't that he wanted to be arrogant. If he wasn't, his masters would simply replace him with a sharper knife. Chen Zuixing realized the man hadn't truly reached safety yet. Gu Weidong smiled, promising to handle the matter personally. Chen Zuixing offered his thanks, but Gu Weidong told him not to be so quick. His daughter's birthday was next week. He was hosting a small gathering and invited Chen Zuixing to bring his own daughter along. We see him considering the offer. Observing that the father-daughter relationship was going well, a rare trace of softness appeared on Gu Weidong's face. He explained that after finding Nuanyuan thanks to the information provided, he had spent a great deal of effort staying by her side. Lately, he had pushed aside all outside business just to play with her at home every day. He paused for a moment. The girl had grown up without a father and longed for a family. Now, finally, she had one. However, she lacked friends, and he wanted to introduce her to children her own age. He asked how old Chen Zuixing's daughter was. Chen Zuixing replied she was 5, and since Nuanyuan was 6, they would likely get along perfectly. Gu Weidong watched him closely. He extended an invitation for Chen Zuixing to bring his wife and child the following weekend, and Chen Zuixing nodded in agreement. We returned to the house, where Su Ming was out on the terrace watering the moonflowers. Chen Zuixing explained the entire situation to her. After listening to the story, she froze. The watering can in her hand stopped mid-air as she repeated the name, Gu Weidong. She asked if this was the same friend he had mentioned before, and he confirmed that it was. It was clear that Su Ming was becoming visibly nervous at the prospect. She began to fret, wondering what their house was like and what she should possibly wear to such an event. She worried about what Qianqian should wear and if they needed a gift. Chen Zuixing couldn't help but smile at her concern. He gently told her not to be so anxious, but she simply took a deep, shaky breath. She admitted that she had simply never been in a social situation quite like this one before. From the few times he had mentioned Gu Weidong, she had formed a very specific impression of the man. She felt he sounded like someone from a truly prestigious, elite family. Chen Zuixing took a moment to consider this. He admitted that if one counted the family patriarch, they were indeed a prestigious lineage. Su Ming's face turned pale at the thought. But then he changed his tone, noting that Gu Weidong himself was actually the least successful member of that entire family. He joked that Gu Weidong was just a misfit like himself, earning a sharp glare from Su Ming as he pulled her close. He told her not to worry, suggesting they buy new clothes for her and Qianqian tomorrow before visiting a car show. He wanted them to arrive in style next week, insisting that Gu Weidong's family was actually quite ordinary. He even teased that they were worse off than their own family, which finally made her laugh and playfully swat him. The next day, we find them at Ninghai's most exclusive boutique, where Chun Zuixing picked out a dress for her. It was a cream-colored dress, and she took it into the fitting room. A few minutes later, the door opened. When Su Ming stepped out, Chun Zuixing was momentarily stunned. The dress fit her perfectly. The cream color made her skin glow, and with her hair down, she looked at him with a shy, downward glance. In that moment, he was suddenly reminded of all the famous models and celebrities he had seen in his past life. Yet none of them had ever made his heart race quite like this. She softly asked him if she looked all right. He didn't answer immediately, simply staring at her, while the shop assistant nearby offered a quiet compliment. The assistant told her the dress was made for her, and Su Ming offered a small, polite smile in return. She turned to the mirror, but as she glanced at the price tag, the smile on her face instantly froze. She turned back to her husband, her eyes filled with genuine panic as she whispered that it cost 6,800. Chun Zuixing ignored the price, handing his card to the assistant and pointing toward another rack. He requested that she try on another dress and the skirt next to it as well. Su Ming grabbed his arm, lowering her voice to protest the cost, but he simply didn't listen to her. He gave the assistant a nod to proceed, and the woman's eyes lit up as she realized she had a serious buyer. She hurried to the racks, and a few minutes later, the fitting room door opened once again. This time, she emerged in a navy blue velvet gown with a neckline that was perfectly elegant. The waistline was cut with such precision, and Chun Zuixing immediately insisted she try on yet another skirt. Next, he had her try a light gray knitted suit, followed by a simple black dress. To be honest, the variety was staggering. Every single piece looked stunning, not because the clothes were special, but because she made them look that way. He told the assistant to wrap them all up, and after the card was swiped, she handed it back with both hands. The assistant offered to pack everything for the couple, but just then, little Qianqian tugged on his hand. She whispered that she needed to use the restroom, and he looked down at her with a gentle nod. He told her he would take her, then turned to Su Ming, asking her to wait there and keep an eye on their things. He promised to be back in a moment after taking Qianqian to the restroom, and Su Ming gave him a soft nod. We see him leading Qianqian toward the back of the mall, unaware of what was about to happen in his absence. Not long after he left, two young girls passed by the shop entrance, and one of them happened to glance inside. Her footsteps suddenly stopped as she called out to her sister, and Su Ming turned around to see who it was. She was momentarily stunned to see Xiaoya, who was actually her younger cousin, Lu Xiaoya. Xiaoya rushed inside and began scanning her from head to toe, clearly surprised by what she saw. She exclaimed that she thought she had seen wrong, while Su Ming could only offer a small, awkward smile. When asked what she was doing there, Xiaoya explained she was meeting a classmate for dinner, her eyes still fixed on her cousin. Her gaze lingered on the expensive dress Su Ming hadn't even had time to change out of yet. Feeling a bit self-conscious, Su Ming tugged at the hem of the skirt and claimed she was just looking around. The other girl stepped inside as well, looking at Su Ming with a sense of curiosity that was hard to hide. Xiaoya quickly introduced her cousin to her classmate, trying to make sense of the situation herself. Su Ming gave the girl a polite nod, even as she felt the weight of her cousin's questioning gaze. Xiaoya told her she would call her later as she pulled her classmate out of the shop and toward the exit. As they rounded the corner, the classmate immediately leaned in, glancing back toward where Su Ming was standing. She kept her eyes fixed on her for a moment, clearly processing what she had just seen. The classmate grabbed Xiaoya's arm and whispered that her cousin must be incredibly wealthy. Xiaoya was stunned, insisting that couldn't be right, but her friend pointed out the prices in that shop. Even the simplest item there cost thousands, and the classmate couldn't help but look back one more time. She mentioned seeing a massive pile of clothes on the counter, all of which seemed to belong to Su Ming. Xiaoya's pace slowed as she wondered if that could actually be true. To be honest, it didn't fit her cousin's image at all. When Chun Zuixing heard about the encounter, he didn't give it much thought. 2 days later, we find them at the car show. Their goal was clear, a business van. On the way, Su Ming tried to manage his expectations, calling him husband softly. She suggested they shouldn't buy anything too expensive, perhaps something around 200,000 would be enough. He simply nodded. It didn't matter to him. Having driven every luxury car imaginable in his past life, a car was now just a tool. As they followed the crowd into the exhibition hall and passed the Volkswagen booth, little Qianqian suddenly stopped. She pointed at a specific car with pure excitement, calling out for her father to look. It was a Beetle, boasting a retro design and a soft pink hue that stood out among the cold, gray machines. It looked like a fairy tale character that had wandered into a world of metal. Qianqian tugged his hand, calling it adorable. She declared the car was perfect for her mother and herself, and he looked down, asking if she truly liked it. The little girl nodded vigorously. He turned to Su Ming, who remained silent, her eyes locked onto the vehicle. Her gaze was incredibly soft as she whispered a question about the price. It was a look he knew all too well. She clearly loved it but feared the cost, already doing the math in her head. He simply waved over a sales assistant. The sales assistant greeted them warmly, explaining that this high-end beetle was priced just over 300,000 with a special car show discount. Su Ming gently tugged on his sleeve, whispering that it was far too expensive, but Chen Zuixing simply ignored her protest. He turned his attention back to the guide, asking if the car was truly as costly as it seemed, though his mind was already made up. Despite her repeated whispers that the price was too high, he remained focused on the sales assistant, ready to proceed. He asked if they could pay in full and take the car immediately, and the assistant confirmed that the display model was available. Su Ming's grip on his sleeve tightened as she realized he was serious about driving it away right then and there. He turned to her, noting that it was rare for both her and the child to like something so much, leaving her momentarily speechless. The sales assistant watched the scene unfold from the side, her eyes filled with a touch of genuine envy. Searching for a reason to decline, Su Ming finally asked how she could possibly meet clients in a car like this. She argued that she couldn't pick people up in a beetle, to which he calmly suggested they simply buy a business van as well. He spoke as if it were the most natural thing in the world, explaining that he would drive the van for the clients. This car, he insisted, was a gift specifically for her and little Qianqian, causing Su Ming's eyes to redden with emotion. He told her the matter was settled. He had already decided on this car for her and their daughter. He then invited her to choose the business van herself, regardless of the brand or the price, to make things fair. She gave a soft nod and led Qianqian toward the other booths while he stayed behind to handle the paperwork. Half an hour later, just as he finished the formalities and prepared to find them, his phone began to ring. It was Su Ming, and her voice sounded noticeably strained as she called out to him. She urgently asked where he was, telling him to get to booth number 6 as quickly as possible. When he asked what was wrong, she told him that someone had pushed Qianqian and begged him to hurry over. Those last few words were laced with anger and anxiety, and he hung up the phone, rushing toward them immediately. When we arrive at the scene, a crowd has already gathered, and pushing through, we see Su Ming crouching on the ground. She is holding little Qianqian tightly, her face flushed with a deep, burning anger as she glares at the person opposite them. The child's shoulders are trembling in her arms, while standing across from them is a woman in her 30s. She is dressed in a sharp black suit with a work badge pinned to her chest, identifying her as the booth manager. With her arms crossed and several security guards flanking her, she looks entirely unmoved by the situation. As Chen Zuixing approaches, Su Ming looks up with relief and immediately shifts the child into his protective arms. She then lunges forward, demanding to know why the woman pushed a 4-year-old child as if they were the same age. The woman merely scoffs, coolly advising Su Ming to keep her emotions under control, which, naturally, is easier said than done. She begins to list her points, stating first that this is their booth and they have every right to protect the exhibits. Secondly, she points out the fence, claiming it was the daughter who chose to crawl inside on her own. She then holds up 3 fingers, waving them slightly to emphasize her final point. She claims she only gave a gentle nudge to block the child, and that Qianqian simply lost her balance and fell. She asks what any of this has to do with her, noting that all this shouting is quite unnecessary. Since it's damaging the booth's image, she calmly threatens to have security escort them out of the building. Su Ming tries to protest, but the woman cuts her off before she can even finish a sentence. She tells them that if they feel wronged, they are perfectly welcome to file a formal complaint against booth number 6. Her name is Lin Na, and she says she'll be waiting, though she adds a rather condescending warning. She remarks that they see these kinds of complaints all the time, her gaze sweeping dismissively over Su Ming's face. Her eyes then land on Qianqian and Chen Zuixing's arms, and she lets out a small, mocking chuckle. She says bumps and bruises are normal for children, suggesting they just go home and stop making such a scene. She straightens her suit, suggesting that if they're looking for a payout, her legal team is more than ready for them. With an air of immense arrogance, she reminds them that this is a high-end booth, not a playground. They serve high-net-worth clients, she explains, and different levels of wealth naturally command different levels of respect. The value of the service one receives depends entirely on their assets, and if they actually met those standards, things would be different. She leans down slightly, getting closer to them as she lowers her voice to a sharp, icy whisper. She tells them that if they were wealthy enough, she'd get on her knees and lick their shoes herself, which is quite the image. But then comes the sting. She looks them up and down and asks if they truly think they're worthy of that. After hearing Su Ming's explanation, we begin to understand. Little Qianqian saw that Great Moon Shadow car and thought it was perfect for her father. She wanted a closer look, but the safety ropes were set at an adult's height, far above a toddler's eye level. The red cord was right over Qianqian's head, so the poor child didn't even notice it was there as she walked forward. That was when Lin Na stepped in and shoved the little girl to the ground. Seeing this, Chen Zuixing steps forward. He pulls Su Ming close and places Qianqian back into her mother's protective arms before turning his gaze toward Lin Na. His voice is remarkably calm as he addresses her, confirming if she is indeed Manager Lin and recalling her earlier words. He agrees that different net worths should enjoy different levels of service, a statement that makes Lin Na's lips curl into a smirk. She clearly thinks he's about to back down, but he ignores her, turning his attention toward the booth instead. The other staff members stand there looking utterly lost as he surveys the 5 cars lined up on the platform. He recalls Lin Na mentioning that the other 4 vehicles were still available for purchase. He points a finger at those 4 luxury cars and simply states that he'll take all of them. The words hang in the air. Lin Na freezes in shock, and the rest of the staff are equally stunned by the sudden turn. He repeats himself, telling them he'll pay in full for all 4 and to bring the paperwork. Yet, for a moment, nobody moves. He looks at them, noticing their lingering doubt, and calmly pulls a bank card from his pocket. He places it on the counter and then produces the receipt from the Beetle he just purchased at the Volkswagen booth. He slaps the receipt down on the table, making it clear that this is proof of his recent spending. We see a young girl with a ponytail hesitate for a moment before she finally decides to step forward. She picks up the receipt, and her eyes instantly widen as she instinctively covers her mouth in shock. When she looks up at him, her entire gaze has shifted. Meanwhile, Su Ming is far too stunned to remain angry. She rushes over and grabs his arm, asking if he is truly serious about buying these cars. He tells her that even if they buy, it won't be from this woman, gently patting her hand to reassure her. As the paperwork is being finalized, he suddenly leans down and removes one of the high heels from Su Ming's foot. He tosses the shoe directly in front of Lin Na, who can only stare at it as it hits the floor. He asks manager Lin if he has finally met the standards required for her high-net-worth client services. Her lips tremble, but no words come out, all while a crowd of onlookers begins to gather around them. People are whispering and holding up their phones to record the scene, yet he simply watches her silence. He shakes his head, noting that it seems her company's commitment to service is quite lacking after all. Turning back to the girl with the ponytail who was processing the sale, he tells her he's canceling the order. The girl is caught completely off guard, stammering out a confused "sir" as she tries to process the change. She looks between them, utterly lost as to who is who and what exactly is happening in this moment. The young assistant is frozen, while Lin Na's face turns a ghostly shade of white, and who could blame her? During the auto show, the company had promised unconditional cancellations for the first 2 days to encourage sales. Even in the following days, the penalty was minimal, which any reasonable person would take advantage of now. Under normal circumstances, no one would be so bored as to buy a car just to return it immediately. But in this moment, that very regulation had become a death sentence for Lin Na's career. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out from behind the gathering crowd, asking what he is doing there. Lu Xinrong pushes through the onlookers and strides toward him, and he turns to greet her as Brother Lu. She asks why he's here, her eyes moving from the shoe on the floor to the frozen figure of Lin Na. She asks what happened, and after he explains the situation briefly, Lu Xinrong's expression darkens significantly. She turns her gaze toward the vehicles, her eyes lingering on the off-road SUV with a look of realization. She pauses for a moment, then pulls out her phone and begins scrolling through her photos. She holds the screen up to him, showing a photo of that exact same SUV from the very same angle. She reveals that this is actually the car she ordered, leaving him momentarily surprised by the coincidence. She explains it was meant as a gift for him, since he had previously refused her offer of a new house. She wanted to get him a proper car instead, having reserved this specific one for delivery the following day. Her gaze turns cold as she looks at Lin Na, demanding to know if they really just processed a return. Lin Na's face loses every last drop of color as she stammers out that she didn't know who she was dealing with. Lu Xinrong ignores her, waving a hand dismissively and declaring that she no longer wants the car either. She pulls out her phone and makes a call, telling a man named Old Zhang about the SUV at booth number 6. She tells him to cancel her order immediately. Yes, right this very second, without delay. Lin Na stands there completely paralyzed, realizing the magnitude of the disaster unfolding before her eyes. As Lin Na remains frozen in shock, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit comes rushing over to the scene. His forehead is covered in sweat as he anxiously asks Lu Xinrong what on earth has happened. Lu Xinrong looks at the man and remarks that his manager is certainly impressive, especially since she pushed a little girl just for wanting to see a car. President Zheng's face turns a shade of green as he hears this, and he slowly turns his gaze toward Lin Na. His eyes are filled with a cold fury. Lin Na tries to stammer out an explanation, but he cuts her off before she can even start. He declares that as of this very moment, she is no longer an employee of the company. Lin Na's legs give way beneath her. She collapses onto the floor in despair as we leave booth number 6 behind, moving on from the scene of the disaster. The unpleasantness is quickly forgotten as Lu Xinrong walks alongside the group, chatting warmly as they move through the exhibition. When they reach the rest area, she suddenly stops and turns to him, calling him her younger brother in a tone of genuine affection. She insists that since the trouble was technically her fault, she absolutely must give them a car today as a gift. She tells them not to argue, though he is momentarily stunned and tries to tell her that it really isn't necessary. She remains firm, claiming she'll take it as an insult if he refuses, before turning her attention towards Su Ming. She tells her that since her husband won't give her any face, Su Ming will have to be the one to accept the gesture. Su Ming is caught completely off guard by being put on the spot like this, looking a bit overwhelmed by the sudden attention. She glances over at him, unsure of how to respond to such a bold and generous offer from their new friend. He gives a small, subtle nod of approval, and she explains that they were originally looking for a business van. She mentions a budget of around 200,000, which makes Lu Xinrong's eyes light up with immediate confidence. She tells them to leave it all to her, claiming that business vans happen to be her particular area of expertise. She promises to pick out something they'll love and starts walking, only to stop after a few steps and look back at them. She asks why they're just standing there and tells them to come along. He and Su Ming share a look of amused resignation. With no other choice, he picks up little Qian and follows as Lu Xinrong leads them with practiced ease toward another section. They arrive at the Mercedes booth, where a sleek, silver business van sits in the center, flanked by a long-legged model. As the model poses for photos, Lu Xinrong walks over, not even glancing at her as she points directly at the vehicle. She declares that this is the one, before waving over a staff member and telling them to bring the paperwork. The long-legged model is visibly stunned, her practiced poses coming to a complete and awkward halt. A staff member comes jogging over to greet them, asking if they are absolutely certain about choosing this specific car. Lu Xinrong confirms it with a sharp nod, immediately turning back to Su Ming to begin her persuasive pitch. She tells her younger sister-in-law to trust her, insisting that this car will perfectly meet every single one of her needs. It is a Mercedes, after all, a big brand that carries a certain level of prestige whenever one drives it out. She emphasizes the brand's reputation and the prestige it brings, noting that as a business van, the space is immense. She explains it's perfect for clients or family alike, speaking with such authority that he can't help but glance at the car. He looks at the logo on the display stand and finds himself unable to suppress a smile as he addresses Lu Xinrong. He asks if she actually knows the price, but she simply blinks and claims it must be around 200,000. She reminds him that was Su Ming's budget, but he points to the logo, noting this is actually a Mercedes-AMG. It isn't 200,000 at all, it is closer to 2 million. Lu Xinrong's expression freezes for a split second, while Su Ming is visibly startled by the mention of 2 million. She exclaims that it's far too expensive and insists they cannot possibly accept such a lavish and valuable gift. Lu Xinrong recovers her composure with impressive speed, suddenly deciding to play the part of the confused benefactor. She asks if he really said 2 million, wondering aloud if she had simply misheard the price earlier. Seeing that neither of them is buying the act, she decides to drop the pretense and resort to a bit of playful stubbornness. She admits she did it on purpose, claiming she simply couldn't bring herself to give a gift worth only 200,000. She insists on this one, declaring that if they don't accept it, she simply won't leave the exhibition today. As he speaks, he simply plops down nearby, and we see him looking like a complete and utter rogue. He suddenly smiles, realizing that Lu Xinrong has made quite a fortune following his investment tips. But she was never the type to just take. Instead, she was always looking for a way to pay him back. This is someone worth knowing, he thinks, glancing at Su Ming, who is still busy trying to decline the gift. He walks over and pats her shoulder, telling her to just accept it, which leaves her looking up in surprise. He gives a firm nod, and the moment Lu Xinrong sees it, she practically springs out of her chair. As if terrified he might change his mind, she immediately waves over the staff to pay the full amount. She demands the paperwork be started right now, and just like that, the weekend arrives. We see him driving that Mercedes-AMG, taking Su Ming and Qian along for the ride. They are heading to Gu Weidong's daughter's birthday party, located in a very quiet and exclusive villa district. Gu Weidong is personally waiting at the entrance, and as they step out of the car, he hurries forward to greet them. He warmly welcomes Brother Chung and his wife, ushering them inside with a wide, hospitable smile. He pulls a little girl wearing a white princess dress toward him, introducing her as Nuanyuan. He tells her to greet the aunt and uncle, though the girl, while delicate, seems to have a rather shy gaze. In a timid, soft voice, she offers a polite greeting to both of them. Before any formal introductions can even happen, Qian's eyes light up and she steps forward on her own. She takes Nuanyuan's hand, introducing herself as Qian and asking if her name is Nuanyuan. She suggests they go play, and soon the two little girls are whispering to each other as they head off. They run into the yard, though Nuanyuan pauses to look at Gu Weidong, who gives her a reassuring nod. Only then does she let out a soft giggle, while beside them, Su Ming's expression looks a bit strained. She whispers to him, asking why Qian has suddenly become so incredibly outgoing. He just smiles, noting that it's a good thing she's becoming more lively and social. Gu Weidong, on the other hand, is practically clapping his hands with pure joy. He explains that ever since Nuanyuan was brought back, she has been far too introverted and solitary. She never wanted to play with anyone, so seeing her bond with a girl her age is a relief. A flicker of confusion crosses Su Ming's eyes as she glances at him, but he only offers a faint smile. He doesn't pry, as it's a private matter, but Gu Weidong is perceptive enough to speak up first. He mentions that Brother Chung knows the situation. The child is back, but her mother still refuses to forgive him. He gives a small nod of comfort, understanding that some wounds simply take time to heal. He tells him to take it slow, because these things can't be rushed, they must happen naturally. Gu Weidong looks visibly excited by this, saying that hearing those words makes him feel much more at ease. Su Ming watches this exchange from the side, a hint of genuine surprise flashing in her eyes. She wonders why he listened so intently to her husband's advice before heading off to check on the children. As she walks toward the yard, Gu Weidong takes the opportunity to pull him aside. He suggests they head up to the study on the second floor to sit and talk for a while. When they push the door open, he pauses, seeing a white-haired, elderly man sitting inside. The man is Elder Gu, and he is currently preoccupied with slowly and methodically sipping his tea. Gu Weidong looks a bit sheepish, admitting his father was the one who truly wanted this meeting. He explains he didn't mention it beforehand for fear he might decline, so he steps forward to offer a greeting. He politely greets the old gentleman, and in response, Elder Gu finally sets down his teacup. The old man stands up and gives a respectful nod, inviting our protagonist, Chun, to take a seat. He personally pours a cup of tea and hands it over with both hands, a gesture of significant respect. He explains that since Chun helped bring his granddaughter back, he feels a deep sense of gratitude. The old man insists that, no matter what, he must offer this tea as a personal thank you. Chun accepts the cup with both hands, politely telling the elder that he is being far too kind. He admits that his help for Brother Gu wasn't entirely selfless, which makes Elder Gu nod in understanding. The elder notes that he knows it was all for his daughter, pointing toward Gu Weidong as he speaks. After all, Weidong acted for his own daughter as well, making the arrangement a win for both sides. He pauses, his gaze becoming sharp and focused as he admits there is more to this meeting. It turns out the old man had his own reasons for wanting to meet Chun face to face. Chun understands the implication immediately and sets down his teacup to give his full attention. He invites the elder to speak, and the old man mentions he heard something interesting from his son. Apparently, Chun is quite skilled in the art of divining fortune and navigating hidden dangers. Because of this reputation, the elder finds himself wanting to ask for a small favor. He asks if Chun would be willing to perform a reading for him as well. Chun realizes he can't really refuse, especially since he already knows a bit about the Gu family's history. The Gu family is unique compared to other clans, as their primary influence actually lies overseas. Years ago, when the domestic economy opened up and needed investment, Elder Gu saw his chance. He brought in capital and technology, using connections he'd built with founding elders during his studies. This allowed the Gu family to establish a domestic foothold and even expand into the political sphere. This kind of background is a double-edged sword. It makes it difficult to truly belong, as they are often viewed as outsiders. On the other hand, it grants them a unique status, keeping them free from the bitter rivalries that plague other prominent families. When other clans look to expand overseas, they often need the Gu family's support, so everyone shows the old man a great deal of respect. However, there was one particular incident that caused the Gu family to offend one of the top-tier families in the country. Years ago, the Gu family donated a collection of cultural relics to a museum, but a few years later, one of those items suddenly reappeared. It turned up at an auction, and the old man, assuming the museum had stolen and sold its own collection, was absolutely furious. He insisted on a full investigation, never imagining the relic had actually been borrowed by a very high-ranking official. By pushing for the truth, he offended the wrong people, and the consequences fell heavily on Gu Weidong's eldest brother, Gu Weihong. As these past events flash through Chen's mind, we see him pause to consider the weight of the family's history. He looks toward Elder Gu and gives a respectful nod, asking what exactly the old man wishes to have divined. The elder pauses for a moment before answering that he wants to test the family's fortune to see what lies ahead. Specifically, he seeks to know the future of the Gu family. After a moment of silence, Chen asks the elder to write a single character. The old man picks up a pen and writes the word ding on a piece of paper. Chen studies the stroke of the pen carefully. He looks from the paper back to the old man, and deep down, he already knows the answer. Some things, however, cannot be said plainly, but a subtle hint is often enough. He picks up the pen and writes a short poem. 20 autumns of dust have settled upon the peak. Why return to the light only to wander in shadows? The floating clouds blocking the sun must eventually scatter. Just watch as the river water flows steadily to the east. Elder Gu looks at the poem, his brow furrowing slightly as he reads. He looks up at Chun, and for a brief second, a flicker of disappointment crosses his eyes, though he hides it quickly. With a faint, polite nod, he offers his thanks to Chen Xiaoyong for the reading. He folds the slip of paper and quietly instructs Gu Weidong to prepare a proper gift of gratitude. He asks Gu Weidong to thank Chen Xiaoyong on his behalf, but Chen simply stands up and waves his hand dismissively. The elder is being far too polite. Chen thinks a single character is hardly worth a gift, after all. With that, he turns to take his leave, and as he walks out of the study, he is well aware of the situation. The old man likely thinks he is just being cryptic for effect, but it doesn't matter. Some things are better left unsaid. A subtle hint is enough. The next morning, Su Ming heads off to the fruit supermarket at the Wanjiao assembly. Chen takes charge of dropping Qian off at kindergarten, but she hasn't been there long before his phone rings. It's his wife, sounding urgent, telling him to come quickly because the shop has been surrounded once again. After rushing to drop Qian at the neighboring school, he turns the car around and speeds toward the market. When he arrives, we see that something is definitely off, as a massive crowd has gathered around the fruit shop. He pushes through the thick layers of people and stops dead in his tracks, staring at the scene before their door. There, kneeling in a neat row, is a group of men led by none other than Brother Young himself. This was the same Brother Young who, just a week ago, had been acting like he owned the place with such arrogance. Now, he is kneeling stiffly at the entrance, his head hanging low and his face covered in dark, painful bruises. Behind him kneel 4 or 5 of his lackeys, all battered and swollen, with 2 of them even sporting arm slings. The entire row of men suddenly shouts in unison that they were wrong, their voices echoing through the market. They begin slamming their foreheads against the floor tiles without the slightest hesitation, over and over again. Standing nearby are 2 familiar faces, Gu Weidong's driver and his bodyguard, watching with cold, expressionless faces. The crowd of onlookers is in an absolute frenzy, wondering aloud how the fearsome Brother Young ended up on his knees. They whisper about the shop owner's wife, wondering what kind of powerful background she must have to command such a sight. She looks like such a young, ordinary woman, yet it seems she is far more formidable than anyone could have imagined. Shin finds the situation a bit absurd, as everyone assumes his wife is the one with the power while she stands there, utterly terrified. He gently pats her hand to reassure her before turning around and heading outside to find the driver. When he asks what exactly is going on, the driver maintains a very respectful tone, addressing him simply as Mr. Chun. The boss gave the order, the driver explains. These men are to kowtow and apologize until both Chun and his wife are satisfied. When asked how many times they've hit the floor, the driver admits he hasn't counted, but they won't stop until told otherwise. Chun walks over to Brother Young and squats down, and as the man looks up, his face is drenched in a thick layer of sweat. The skin on his forehead is broken, with blood mixing with sweat as it trickles down. Well, Brother Young, we meet again. Chun looks him in the eye and asks if he was the one who ordered the truck to be smashed. He continues, asking if it was his men who threw the dragon fruit and beat the driver, questions to which they both know the answer. He asks what should be done, suggesting perhaps a hand should be left behind, which causes the man's face to turn a ghostly white. The man, whose name is actually Dong Dong, begins slamming his head against the ground again, desperately crying out that he was wrong. He begs for mercy, admitting he failed to recognize who he was dealing with and promising to compensate for everything. When Shin asks if he means money, the man nods frantically, listing the truck, the fruit, and the medical expenses. He offers to pay double or even triple, but Shin simply waves his hand to dismiss the desperate offer. He tells him the money isn't necessary, asking instead if there are other merchants in the Wanjia assembly paying him protection fees. The man opens his mouth to hesitate, but when pressed for a clear answer, he admits there are, and Shin orders him to return every cent. Furthermore, he declares that none of the man's crew are ever allowed back into this market, a demand the man accepts with frantic nodding. He stammers out his understanding, promising that he will begin the refunds immediately. He goes so far as to swear that if any of his people ever dare to set foot in the Wanjiao assembly again, he will personally cut off his own hand. Satisfied, Shin stands up and walks away without giving him another glance. Suddenly, a burst of cheers erupts from the surrounding crowd as the realization sets in. They realize there will be no more protection fees, praising the boss lady for her sense of justice. In their eyes, she is the hero who finally got rid of those thugs for good. To be honest, the crowd is beyond impressed that she managed to drive those cowards out. Brother Young had been a tyrant for years, and now everyone swears to only buy fruit from her shop. We see Chin standing there, completely stunned by the direction the praise is taking. After all, he was the one who negotiated, forced the refunds, and kicked the gang out. Yet, for some reason, everyone is thanking his wife, Su Ming, as he looks back at her. She is still sitting behind the cash register, the look of terror not yet fully faded from her face. He decides to let it go. If they want a boss lady, then she can have the title. Besides, at the end of the day, the boss lady still belongs to the boss. Since Gu Weidong settled the matter so quickly, Chin decides it's time to give him another subtle hint. Once the call connects, he starts with a thank you, acknowledging Gu's help with the Young situation. Gu Weidong dismisses it as a small matter, noting that third brother Lai has been warned to back off. Chin pauses for a moment before bringing up the character he had divined for Gu's father. He explains that because it involves cultural relics, he couldn't say too much without revealing heaven's secrets. However, he offers a piece of advice. A relaxed heart is a blessing in itself. He suggests that some things shouldn't be dwelled upon, prompting a 2-second silence from Gu Weidong. Gu says he understands and will pass the message to his father before hanging up the phone. And just like that, we see the shopkeeper turning his attention back to the business at hand. After hanging up the phone, Chin feels like he has managed to catch 2 fish with a single hook. He tells himself that whatever happens next, he shouldn't regret his choices. After all, this path was the right one to take. The atmosphere in the shop remains upbeat, and we see that the boss lady is handling the newfound attention quite well. It seems the situation has settled, and they have certainly earned a great deal of respect from the neighborhood. Everything is unfolding exactly as predicted. The old city demolition and the riverfront development are the talk of the town as he puts his phone away. He continues eating his dinner, noticing out of the corner of his eye that Su Ming is watching him with a knowing look. She is clearly remembering that day as well, so he catches her gaze and gives her a playful wink, catching her off guard. She smiles softly and lowers her head to finish her meal, but the quiet moment is suddenly interrupted from outside. The screech of tires echoes through the air as a black Mercedes pulls up directly in front of the shop and the door flies open. Lu Xingrong practically leaps out of the car, rushing inside with wide, hurried strides while calling out to Chun. With sweat still beaded on his forehead, he looks frantic, prompting Chun to calmly ask what has happened. He drops into the seat opposite Chun, sounding desperate as he insists that he needs help this time. He asks if Chun has seen the news regarding the Southwest District planning, to which Chun admits he just saw it. Lu slams his hand on the table, exclaiming that every single prediction Chun made has come true. Everything he said that day was spot on, especially with the new mayor taking office and making immediate changes. The first major projects are indeed the old city renovation and the development of the riverfront area. He takes a deep breath, admitting to Chun that the pressure he feels now is immense. Chun taps the table thoughtfully, wondering why being right about the market would cause him so much stress. Lu rubs his hands together anxiously, explaining that it is precisely because the predictions were right that the pressure is on. The Yuanjing Group is now the center of attention, and the old city renovation project has become a high-stakes battlefield. He sighs, noting that it isn't as easy as it looks. Demolition, relocation, cultural relics, and angry merchants are all part of the job. If even a single detail goes wrong, the people watching his every move would practically eat him alive. Lowering his voice, Lu explains that a while back, he used other plots of land to trade with several companies. He managed to acquire a lot of land in the Southwest District, and back then, everyone laughed and called him a fool. Now, those same people are green with envy, just waiting for him to make a single mistake so they can pounce. Chun listens quietly without interrupting as Lu reveals that the new mayor has already reached out to him personally. Lu Xingrong continues, explaining that mayor when asked him for a specific, concrete plan for the development. He promised to deliver something satisfactory as soon as possible, then leans forward, pleading for Chen's help. He insists that this time, Chen must step in, but Chen simply taps the table and calls him Brother Lu. He points out that the Yuanjing Group has plenty of senior executives and no shortage of talented people. A project like this requires mobilizing the entire company's resources, and as an outsider, it wouldn't be right for him to interfere. Lu scoffs at the idea of it being inconvenient and immediately offers Chen the position of CEO. He offers an annual salary of 10 million, but Chen just shakes his head, explaining that he is far too used to his freedom. Since the CEO role is out, Lu's mind starts racing, searching for another way to secure Chen's expertise. He suggests that Chen could serve as an executive director, acting with the authority of a CEO for this specific project. Once the Southwest District mess is settled, Chen would be free to come and go as he pleases without any interference. Chen just laughs, pointing out that he doesn't even hold any shares in the company, so being a director is impossible. With a sly grin, Lu mentions that he recently acquired a significant number of shares in Wanjiawi. He proposes that Chen take those shares and then perform a stock swap with the Yuanjing Group. It's a clever solution, and we see that Chen is beginning to seriously consider the implications of such a deal. This offer is certainly intriguing. Acquiring shares in Wanjiawi would change everything for Chen. He wouldn't just be a merchant anymore, he would be a shareholder, and that is a massive distinction. After a moment of reflection, Chen holds up 2 fingers, stating he has 2 specific conditions. First, he insists on buying the Wanjiawi shares at the full market price, accepting the favor but paying his way. Lu tries to protest, but Chen raises a hand to stop him, moving immediately to his second point. Looking Lu straight in the eye, Chen demands total authority over the Southwest District's planning and development. He wants to choose the team and manage the process, meaning everyone at Yuanjing, including Lu, must follow his lead. Lu freezes for a second before breaking into a wide, genuinely delighted grin. He likes this boldness. He reaches out his hand, agreeing to the terms, and just like that, the deal is sealed. 3 days later, the stock swap is finalized, and by the 4th day, a special shareholders meeting is called. We see that Chen and Su Ming have officially become new shareholders of the Yuanjing Group. On the morning of the meeting, Su Ming spends nearly 20 minutes in front of the mirror in a navy blue suit. With her hair pinned up, she looks strikingly professional, leaving Chen momentarily stunned by her transformation. She looks every bit the powerful executive, and as the meeting concludes, Chen is officially named the CEO. Su Ming watches the entire proceeding quietly from the back row while the management team waits expectantly. Lu suggests it's time to go meet the staff, and he turns to invite Su Ming to join them as well. He reminds her that she is a shareholder now and should listen in, prompting her to look at Chen for approval. Seeing the spark of anticipation in her eyes, Chen nods and agrees that they should all go together. The conference room is packed with executives, some offering familiar nods while others look on with doubt. The strangers in the room watch with scrutiny and even a hint of disdain, especially those seated on the left. A man in his 50s from the state-owned asset chain watches with clear hostility as Lu whispers a warning to Chen. That is Hu Quan, the general manager of Yuanjing, and with Chun in charge, his own power has just been cut short. After announcing the appointment, Liu adds with heavy emphasis that from now on, his own opinions are secondary. If there is any disagreement, Chin's word will be final, a statement that sends a wave of shocked murmurs through the room. Hu Quan's expression sours as Chun stands to give a brief introduction. The applause is thin, and Hu doesn't move a muscle. Just as Chun prepares to sit back down, Hu speaks up, noting that Chun hasn't even reached the age of 30 yet. He points out that in the entire history of Yuanjing, there has never been a CEO quite this young. Another executive chimes in, highlighting Chin's undergraduate degree and his lack of a professional background in the field. The real estate industry has high barriers to entry, and they openly doubt if Chun is truly up to the task. A high-ranking executive in glasses joins in, mentioning that the Southwest District project involves complex demolition and renovation. The plans are hundreds of pages long, and they wonder if Chun has the confidence to actually handle the weight of it all. At that moment, Hu Quan stands up and stares Chin down, claiming he has one very specific question for the new CEO. The Southwest renovation includes 3 historic buildings from the late Qing and early Republican era that must be protected. During construction, the underground pipelines and foundation excavation are so delicate that the slightest mistake could be fatal. One wrong move would cause a collapse, and despite studying it for a month, they want to see if Chun has a solution. Every eye in the room turns toward Chun, while Su Ming nervously twists her ring, sensing the trap they've set. This is a blatant challenge. If he can't provide a solid answer now, no one in this room will ever truly follow him. Chun looks down at the blueprints, where the locations of the 3 historic buildings are clearly marked out. The surrounding pipelines and foundations are all detailed. Hu Quan certainly did his homework, to be fair. Chun looks up with a faint smile, deciding it's time to show Su Ming exactly what her husband is made of. Chun acknowledges that Hu Quan has asked a good question, and as he sets the blueprints back on the table, he prepares a countermove. Before answering, he decides to ask a question of his own, noting that the current plan is already on its 6th version. He mentions the $30 million budget for the continuous wall, a detail that causes Hu Quan to freeze for a split second. Hu confirms the figure is roughly 30 million, but Chin's tone shifts as he asks if Hu is aware of a fatal flaw in the plan. Hu's expression changes instantly as he demands to know exactly what kind of flaw Chin is talking about. Chun pushes the blueprints forward, explaining that the foundations of these late Qing and early Republican buildings are incredibly shallow. They are no more than 2 meters deep, yet the team is planning to drive a continuous wall 12 meters into the earth. This would pierce right through the foundation, which would inevitably alter the underground water veins beneath the site. The soil would erode, meaning this isn't a plan for protection, it is a recipe for accelerated destruction. As Hu's face turns pale, he suddenly stands up and accuses Chun of slander, his composure finally snapping. He argues that his cousin has been in construction for over a decade, so there is no reason he shouldn't be allowed to bid. Chin simply watches him, saying nothing, waiting for the man to finish his outburst before he speaks again. He calmly asks why Hu is getting so emotional, especially since Chun hadn't even mentioned any problems with the companies yet. Turning to the CFO, Chin asks Mr. Li to bring over the financial reports for these 3 specific companies from the last 2 years. Liu Xinrong nods in agreement and gives the order to retrieve them, sensing the tide is turning. When the 3 reports are placed in front of him, Chin picks them up, though he doesn't bother to open them just yet. He simply holds them while staring directly at Hu Quan, noting that the man has been with Yuanjing for 17 years now. He offers Hu 2 choices: resign immediately, and Chun will act as if none of this ever happened. If he does, the reports stay closed. If not, Chun opens them, and Hu will have to face legal proceedings instead of a CEO. The meeting room falls into a deathly silence as everyone waits, watching Hu Quan stand there, paralyzed by the choice. Hu Quan leans his weight onto the table, his hands trembling as 1 second, then 2, then 3 pass in agonizing silence before he slowly bows his head. He finally mutters that he resigns, and as Chin sets the financial reports aside, he watches the former executive walk out with a heavy, defeated gait. Chun scans the room, but no one else dares to meet his eyes, and so, with the air cleared, the meeting continues. The first fire of a new official's term had been lit, and by burning Hu Quan, the news of Chin's ruthlessness spreads through Yuanjing by nightfall. The effect is immediate and undeniable. Over the next few days, every new policy is implemented with incredible smoothness. Every department is suddenly eager to cooperate, providing data and personnel without a single person daring to cause a delay. After working his team around the clock for an entire week, Chin finally produces the results he was looking for on a quiet Friday afternoon. He gathers the team and goes through the final plan from start to finish, and when he concludes, the meeting room falls silent for a few beats. We see one person start to clap, then another, until the applause swells into a unified roar of approval from the exhausted staff. Chin looks around at the faces of those who stayed up all night with him and tells them they should all go out for a meal tomorrow. Yet, no one moves. Instead, an engineer rubs his hands together and asks if Chun could explain the plan just one more time. He admits he didn't quite grasp the layout of the underground pipe gallery, but he could tell it was something truly brilliant. It seems the team has worked themselves into a daze, but Chen realizes that from this day forward, the people of Yuanjing truly respect him. When Chen presents the finished proposal to Lu Xinrong, the older man flips through a few pages and stands up abruptly, calling him a genius. He exclaims that if this project succeeds, his entire life's work will have been worth it. He paces around his office in a state of high excitement, but after 2 laps, he suddenly stops in his tracks. The joy on his face fades into a mask of worry, and Chun, sensing the shift, tells him to speak his mind plainly. Lu sits back down, nervously rubbing his hands as he asks the first major question. Will the city government actually approve this? He fears that Mayor 1, being new to his position, might lack the courage to back such a bold move, but Chun only smiles. Chun suggests they simply do some ideological work, promising to accompany Lu to the meeting if necessary, which finally puts the man's mind at ease. Lu's brow furrows once more as he points out the second problem. The budget is 3 times higher than originally planned. He worries they will need massive loans, but Chin interrupts him before he can spiral, noting that while the budget has risen, the long-term profits will be 6 to 8 times higher than the original estimate, a fact Chin knows all too well. Lu gives a bitter laugh, asking about the initial investment and the banks, only for Chin to tell him they won't need banks at all. Chin asks if he truly lacks the 100 million needed for the first phase of startup capital, which leaves Lu stunned. Lu Xinrong thinks he must have misheard, noting that based on the current scale, the initial phase couldn't possibly cost less than 800 million. Chin simply offers a small smile, promising to show him later what a true capital proposal actually looks like. We move to the afternoon, where a small conference room at the city government building has been prepared for a high-level meeting. Mayor Wen has arrived, bringing along the heads of the construction, planning, and finance bureaus to hear the report. As they prepare to start, we see Lu Xinrong sitting next to Chun, looking just a little bit nervous as the mayor gives the signal. Mayor Wen nods, and Chun opens the files, speaking for 40 minutes straight without losing a single beat of momentum. By the 20-minute mark, the pen in Mayor Wen's hand has stopped moving as he leans back against his chair. He stares intently at the projection and then at Chun, his eyes unblinking, while the bureau chiefs begin to exchange glances. There is shock, disbelief, and a touch of confusion as they wonder who this man could possibly be, and then the presentation ends. Chun presses the final key, and the room falls so silent that one could hear a pin drop for 5 long seconds. Finally, Mayor Wen picks up his teacup and invites the others to ask any questions they might have, anything at all. Director Zhou is the first to speak, questioning how they can dig 3 levels of underground space in the old city district. He worries about protecting the old buildings and the risk of subsidence, but Chin calmly opens the corresponding page of the plan. He explains it isn't a total excavation, but a modular layout where commercial areas, parking, and utilities are handled separately. Everything will be connected using V-shaped shield tunneling technology, a solution that seems to anticipate every possible concern. Chin explains that the foundations of the surface buildings will be reinforced in advance, with 12 monitoring points placed under every single historic structure. As the data is uploaded in real time, Director Wu pushes up his glasses, clearly searching for a flaw in the logic. He asks about the 7 functional sectors of the Binjiang expansion, questioning the reasoning behind such a fluid layout. He worries about redundant construction, but Chin simply offers a small smile, noting that the positioning of each zone is entirely unique. After Chin finishes explaining the strategy for all 7 sectors in one breath, Director Wu is left with nothing more to say. Finally, Director Zhang of the Finance Bureau opens his notebook, stating he has only one question: how much will the city have to pay? He asks about the necessary guarantees, but Chin smiles again, assuring Director Zhang that this money won't need to come from the city at all. Not only will it cost the city nothing, he explains, but it will actually generate significant revenue for the municipal treasury. Director Zhang's eyes light up instantly, and Mayor Wen puts down his pen to ask a question of his own. Large-scale demolition is always the hardest part of the job, so he asks how Chun can guarantee it will be finished on time without any accidents. Chun looks at him for a few seconds before calmly stating that, at the very beginning, no demolition will be required at all. Mayor Wen is visibly stunned by this claim, repeating the words back in disbelief, but Chin simply confirms it is true. No demolition? In the conference room, every single person present is left in a state of complete shock. Lu Xinrong looks at Chun with a face full of bewilderment, desperately trying to signal him with his eyes, while the mayor stares him down. Mayor Wen asks how one can possibly renovate an old city without tearing anything down, and Chun just gives a knowing smile. The answer is a housing exchange, which leaves Director Zhou Mei repeating the phrase in total confusion. Chun explains that they will simply switch the order. First, they expand Binjiang, and only then do they renovate the old city. Construction will begin on the Binjiang new area first, focusing on high-end residential, commercial, and office buildings. Once these are built to the highest standards, the city can introduce a policy for civil servants and government employees. Residents and businesses from the Southwest Old District will be given priority in the housing exchange, Chin notes, pausing for the idea to sink in. The order of the housing exchange would be decided by a lottery, where those selected could trade their old homes for brand new ones. The exchange would be based on square footage, and any price difference would be calculated at cost, far below the market rate. The conference room fell silent for several seconds until Director Wu widened his eyes, asking if Chen truly meant what he thought. Chen nodded, confirming that the goal was to make them move voluntarily. It wasn't about the city forcing a demolition. It was about making them want to switch, considering the vast difference between the decaying old district and the new Binjiang area. With a new environment and better facilities at a low cost, he posed a simple question: who wouldn't want to make that trade? Director Zheng asked about those who refused to move, but Chen noted that once the willing left, the rest would be easier to negotiate with. He smiled, explaining that with fewer people, demands become simpler, making the eventual demolition much easier to handle. The difficulty would drop by 80%, leaving Director Zhou Mei speechless until she finally managed to ask about the civil servants. Chen confirmed they would benefit too, as having officials lead the way would give the general public the motivation they needed. He stated firmly that the first batch of people to move would certainly be them, before scanning the room one last time. No one spoke. They all simply stared at him as if he were some kind of monster, or perhaps a genius. He understood the unspoken question in their eyes. Could a plan really be played out this way? Then, Mayor Wen stood up. The mayor promised to study the proposal and respond quickly, even personally escorting Chen and his team all the way to their car. Before they left, he shook Chen's hand once more, reaching out with his other hand in a gesture of unexpected gravity. He gave Chen's shoulder 2 heavy pats. He didn't say a word, but the meaning behind the gesture was perfectly clear. The plan was approved quickly, and as the Vision Group teams reorganized, construction began across the city with meticulous precision. Chen found himself working around the clock, constantly reviewing blueprints, attending meetings, and coordinating resources. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan, but he never expected that this very project would be the one to expose a secret. It was about to puncture the largest Ponzi scheme in the entire history of Ninghai. It seems his father had been expecting monthly interest payments, and for the first few months, the money actually arrived. The old man was quite pleased with the arrangement, until a few days ago, when someone, whoever they may be, ruined everything. That someone had introduced a lottery-based housing exchange plan, giving priority to civil servants and residents of the old district. Upon hearing this, his father panicked. His old house was tied up as collateral in a private project, making an exchange impossible. He and several others went to find the retired official in charge to withdraw, and were told there was no problem at any time. However, when they returned 2 days later, the man had vanished, his home was empty, and his phone was disconnected. The project office was also locked tight, and at that point, everyone realized the gravity of the situation. A crowd gathered to call the police, and knowing his father's temper, the shock of losing his money was simply too much. He fainted on the spot. After hearing the news, Chen remained silent for a few seconds, processing the disaster. He promised to head over immediately, and after hanging up, he leaned back and rubbed his nose, wondering how to handle this. The very plan he had designed for Mayor Wen, targeting city officials and the southwestern old district, had worked a bit too well. Once the news of the priority exchange was released, the public response had been nothing short of extraordinary. What was meant as a benefit for officials was now drawing in every resident and merchant from the old district. These people weren't fools. They desperately wanted to trade their homes, which meant they needed their property titles back. They all rushed at once to reclaim the properties they had pledged to that retired official, hoping to join the exchange. But in a Ponzi scheme, the greatest fear is a sudden run on funds, especially when the money has long since been embezzled. With no money left to pay them back, it was only natural that the official would flee. Chun rubbed his temples in frustration. His intention was merely to move the project forward, yet he had accidentally punctured a massive fraud in the process. Unfortunately, he had also managed to bury his own father-in-law in the fallout. He quickly organized his files and gave his team instructions. He told them to keep working while he headed out to the hospital. We see him arrive shortly after, ready to face the mess. As we arrive at the hospital, we see a massive crowd gathered around the entrance, shouting that someone is about to jump from the roof. He looks up and can just barely make out a silhouette on the top floor, arms waving frantically against the sky. His phone rings again, and Su Ming's voice is trembling with a sharp, desperate urgency. She explains that the shock was too much for him to process. He simply can't understand it, and now he wants to end it all. A cold realization hits him. The man up there is his father-in-law. He quickly asks her exactly where she is. She tells him she's behind the building on the east side, and he pushes through the crowd without a second thought. He sprints to the back of the building, where police tape has already been strung up between fire trucks and patrol cars. The area is filled with emergency vehicles, and we see the firefighters frantically inflating a massive air cushion on the ground. Su Ming is standing nearby, her face deathly pale. The moment she sees him, she bursts into tears, her eyes red and swollen. She sobs that they took their eyes off him for just a second before he bolted from the ward. 1 million yuan gone. The money and the house are both lost, and the mental toll of such a blow was simply more than he could bear. He has lost all hope. Looking up, Chen sees that the figure has already climbed over the safety railing. The man stands on the very edge, while nearby, Suhai has collapsed onto the ground and his mother-in-law is being held up by 2 officers. She is too weak with grief to even stand. Shin turns to a young policewoman to ask for a status report, identifying himself as family. He is the son-in-law. The officer frowns, explaining that the man is extremely agitated and, to make matters worse, he's armed with a knife. The railing is heavily rusted and looks like it could give way at any moment, making it impossible for their team to get close. He can see them coming. A negotiator went up, but the results were far from ideal, and just as she says this, a gasp ripples through the crowd. He looks up sharply as Su Zhengqi fully climbs over the railing, leaving nothing between him and the long drop below. He is standing on a tiny, narrow ledge. Suhai screams for his father, and the mother-in-law's eyes roll back as she loses consciousness. As she collapses, Su Ming's legs give out as well, but Chun is there to catch her before she hits the pavement. Sui Sheng, she gasps, clutching his arm as the tears continue to stream down her face uncontrollably. After helping her to a nearby seat, Chin turns to leave, but the policewoman immediately stops him, asking what he thinks he's doing. He tells her he's going up to talk to him, but she refuses, insisting it's far too dangerous for a civilian. He simply tells her he has a plan, bypasses her, and sprints toward the stairs, reaching the rooftop in a single breath. The wind on the rooftop is fierce. We see the negotiator standing 10 meters back, hands raised in a gesture of peace. The negotiator pleads with Su, telling him that money can be earned back, but a life, once lost, is gone forever. Su Jingqi stands on the far side of the railing with his back turned, brandishing a knife and screaming for everyone to stay away. He threatens to jump the moment anyone gets closer. Chen walks up and calmly taps the negotiator on the shoulder. He identifies himself as family and tells the professional to step aside, leaving the man momentarily stunned. As the negotiator retreats, Chen takes 2 steps forward and stops, calling out to his father-in-law. Jingqi's entire body shudders at the voice. He slowly turns his head, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He stares at Chen, his voice trembling as he asks if he's there to gloat. Chen's response is blunt. He says he's there to watch him jump. The older man freezes in complete disbelief. Chen takes another step forward, asking if he isn't going to jump after all, and says he'll just stand there and watch the fall. Zhengqi begins to shake violently, pointing the knife at Chen and shouting that his current ruin is all Chen's fault. Chen nods calmly, agreeing that it's his fault, mockingly asking if he was the one who forced the investment. He asks if he was the one who made him mortgage the house or trust that old swindler. Zhengqi opens his mouth, but no words come out. Taking another step, Chen points out that the $1,000,000 is gone, and now he's throwing his life away too. He asks if jumping will somehow bring the money back, leaving Zhengqi's lips quivering in a state of total despair. The old man stammers that it was his life savings, but Chen cuts him off, asking what that actually changes now. He asks what will happen to his wife and son, reminding him that his daughter is right downstairs, waiting for him to fall. Chen asks if Zhengqi has considered how his son will live after watching his own father jump, and the hand holding the knife trembles. He reminds him that he always wanted him to divorce his daughter, and as he slowly approaches, he says the opportunity has finally arrived. Pointing to the blade, Chen tells him that since he's already holding the knife, he should stab him once before he decides to jump. He tells him to take his revenge, and as Zhengqi glares at him, Chen spreads his arms and dares his father-in-law to do it. He suggests that since Zhengqi is ending it anyway, he should take Chen with him, prompting the old man to stammer in disbelief. Zhengqi suddenly swings the knife, triggering screams from the crowd below, but Chen doesn't flinch, staring directly into the man's eyes. He tells him to strike now and then jump, so they can have company on the road to the afterlife, which is a dark thought, indeed. The knife stops midair, the man's arm shaking violently, as Chun takes another step until he is only seconds away from him. Below them, the orange rescue cushion has been deployed, looking like nothing more than a tiny bandage from this height. Lowering his voice, Chen tells him that his daughter is right down there, and asks him to listen to her calling out for him. The faint sound of Su Ming's crying drifts up through the wind, causing Zhengqi's arm to tremble even more uncontrollably. Tears begin to roll down the old man's face as Chen asks him what will happen after he's gone. He asks what he should tell little Qianqian when she asks where her grandfather went. Should he say he was swindled out of his money? He notes that the girl is only 5 and would be scarred for life, and slowly, the knife in Zhengqi's hand begins to drop. In that exact moment, the rusted railing lets out a sharp creak and snaps, causing the old man's body to lose its balance. Without a moment's hesitation, Chen lunges forward, his left hand grabbing the wrist that still holds the knife. His right arm wraps tightly around the man's waist, and with all his strength, Chen throws his weight backward away from the edge. Both of them tumble over the broken railing as the wind howls and a wave of screams rises from the crowd below. Then comes a dull thud, and everything goes black, until, after an unknown amount of time, Chen finally opens his eyes. We see the orange rescue cushion beneath them, and right beside him, Zhengqi is lying on his back, still breathing. Chen stares up at the sky with wide eyes, lying perfectly still until someone reaches down to help him up. The rescuer asks if he is hurt, but Chen doesn't answer. He simply looks down at his own left arm. Blood is streaming down his limb from a deep gash. The knife hadn't been fully lowered when they fell. Suddenly, Su Ming breaks through the police line and runs over, collapsing onto the rescue cushion in a panic. Seeing the blood on his arm, she begins to tremble violently, asking him why he would be so foolish. She repeats the question, her hands hovering in the air, wanting to touch him but terrified of causing more pain. Large tears begin to fall as she asks if he has any idea what she felt just moments ago. She tries to describe the horror of watching him fall from the roof, but the words simply won't come out. She throws her arms around him and sobs loudly, asking what would become of her and the child without him. Chun raises his uninjured right hand to gently pat her back, telling her it's just a flesh wound, but she keeps crying. Her sobbing only grows more intense as medical staff rush over and insist on placing Chun on a stretcher. Before being carried away, he glances back to see Zhengqi being helped into a sitting position by the rescuers. The old man is as limp as a pile of mud, staring blankly toward them, though he isn't looking at Chun. His gaze is fixed on his daughter, who is still kneeling on the cushion, clutching Chun and weeping uncontrollably. At the surgical clinic, the doctor uses forceps to examine the wound and concludes that the damage isn't too severe. The blade missed the tendons, so after 7 or 8 stitches and 2 weeks of rest, he should be fine. Su Ming stands by his side with red eyes, her hand twitching slightly every time the needle pierces his skin. She asks if it hurts, but he assures her it doesn't, testing his arm once the bandaging is complete. Su Ming refuses to leave his side until Su Hai enters the room and tells her that her mother needs her. She gives Chun a lingering look, and he gently tells her to go, promising that he will wait for her right there. As she leaves the room, Su Hai takes a seat directly across from Chen Zuisheng. She thanks him for what happened today, admitting she had been watching in vain, before pausing for a few seconds. She then asks where they are living now, and when he mentions the garden villa, she stares at him in disbelief. She tells him to stop bragging, claiming she'd sooner believe he lived in a public park, but she stops mid-sentence. Her gaze falls upon the gauze wrapped around his arm, and she swallows the rest of her words as he watches her. He tells her that since her sister chose this life, it shouldn't matter to her even if they were living in a park. Choked up by his bluntness, she stands to leave, but turns back to deliver a message from their mother. She warns him that since the house and money are gone, they can't go back now, so they must fend for themselves. Chen simply nods, telling her they never intended to return anyway, and asks her to tell their parents something important. He explains that while the Ponzi scheme money is likely gone, the house hasn't grown legs and run away. Once the case is settled, they should be able to return. After this talk, he spends the rest of the day resting at home. The next morning, we see him return to the office as usual, holding a project meeting to keep everything on schedule. After the meeting, Lu Xinrong pulls him into his private office, calling him brother with a look of concern. He notes that they need to consider the initial investment, as they only have about 200 million available. Since the first phase requires 800 million to 1 billion, he asks if they should apply for a bank loan. He suggests that if they do take a loan, it would be best to have Mayor Wen put in a good word, but Chen refuses. Shaking his head, Chen pulls a piece of paper from his bag and slides it across the desk, asking to open an account. When he specifies domestic and international futures accounts, Lu's eyes widen in shock at the mention of futures trading. Lu warns him about the massive risks involved, asking what they'll do if they lose it all, but Chen remains calm. He tells him not to worry, as they won't lose. They don't need a mayor when they have the market, which, naturally, is a bold claim. He tells Lu to handle the rest, requesting that all the accounts be fully set up within 3 days. Over the following week, we see him practically living at the office, managing project affairs during the day. At night, he monitors the international markets, sometimes until 4 in the morning, much to Su Mingxin's distress. On the very first night, she arrives carrying a thermal flask, finding him staring intently at the screens. She places the flask on his desk, telling him it's pork rib soup and to drink it before continuing. As he looks up at her, a small head suddenly peeks out from behind her. It's little Qianqian calling for her father. She explains that her mother said he was injured but still working, so she came to supervise him. Qianqian runs over to his side, and with a smile, he agrees to let her be his supervisor. Su Ming sits down nearby, frowning as she looks at the chaotic mess of colorful lines on the screen. When she asks if he can actually understand them, he simply smiles, noting that her husband has many talents. They stay until 10:30 that night, and from then on, they return every day with a new meal. Lu Xinrong stops going home to sleep as well, having a room prepared next door to stay close by. He follows the market alongside Chun every night, asking questions whenever he finds himself confused by the data. He asks if there's any movement yet, and when Chun says no, he simply continues to wait until the 3rd night. Lu then calls the administrative manager, arranging for 2 shifts of staff and offering triple pay for the night shift. He wants to ensure Chun is fully supported. 20 minutes later, fresh coffee and snacks are delivered to the room. Leaning back on the sofa, Lu grumbles that even as chairman, he's never enjoyed this level of service. Chun ignores the comment, focused on the screen, even when the CFO, Mr. Li, comes to find him later. With a heavy heart, Li warns him that 200 million is certainly not a small sum of money. He cautions that with such high leverage and volatility, a single mistake could wipe out their entire capital overnight. The company is currently pushing forward with the Southwest District project, and if this capital is lost, the project's progress will be severely affected and their credit standing with the banks will crumble. Lee makes a very valid point, but Chin simply smiles, already well aware of these potential risks. He tells them they simply don't understand his methods yet, and to just watch and see. Lu Xinrong remains silent for a few seconds before waving a hand, deciding they will do as Chin says. Mr. Lee takes a deep breath, nods, and turns to leave. We then fast forward to the 6th night. The lines on the screen finally begin to move. Chin stares at the numbers, his fingers poised over the keyboard. He taps the keys lightly. Lu Xinrong leans in, asking if it's starting, and Chin notes it's coming soon. Lu nods, feeling the weight of the wait. After all these days, the moment has finally arrived. As the market shifts, Chin focuses on the screen and begins typing, while Lu leans over to ask for an update. Chin tells him not to rush as he opens the interface and starts placing short orders, 10 million, then 20 million. He lays out the positions in batches for 50 million. Lu watches the jumping numbers, his throat tightening with nerves. On the first day, it doesn't drop. On the second, it rebounds, leaving the short orders in the red. Lu can no longer sit still and paces the room as the atmosphere becomes incredibly heavy. Then comes the 3rd night. While Chin stares at the market, Lu rests on the sofa with his eyes closed until a young girl enters with a tray. She neatly arranges the coffee and snacks. Lu is startled awake, glancing at her to ask who she is. She explains she is a new hire from the administrative department named Su Yingying. Lu pauses, noting that Yingying sounds like winning twice, a good omen in his eyes. Chin can't help but smile. When people are stressed, they'll turn almost anything into a spiritual anchor. He looks at Su Yingying and tells her that from this moment on, she is his secretary, leaving her utterly stunned. She was chosen for the role, and naturally, she was eager to make a good impression. The atmosphere in the office was tense, filled with the weight of the high stakes involved. It was an important moment, and he knew he had to speak with the leadership directly. The security of the entire operation was now the primary concern for everyone involved. At this point, it was clear that the current course of action needed to be interrupted. The room felt like a lecture hall, with everyone waiting for the next directive to fall. He knew that if there were hidden risks, a decision had to be made immediately. The engineering manager stood up, stating that the 2nd phase of the project was about to begin. He argued that the cement needed to be ordered now while the prices were still manageable. In 2 weeks, prices might soar. Lu Xinrong looked at Chun, who simply shook his head. Chin told them to wait 3 more days, but the manager worried about the construction schedule. Delays meant increased costs, higher material prices, and more money spent on labor. Chin repeated his demand to wait. The manager opened his mouth, looking toward Lu Xinrong. Lu waved his hand, telling them to listen to Chun before dismissing the meeting. That night, the market fluctuated within a narrow range, and Lu leaned back on the sofa. His eyelids grew heavy until he fell fast asleep, while Chun kept staring at the screen. Chun felt a bit sleepy himself, but then the door opened, and Su Yingying entered with a tray. The moment the door opened, the numbers on the screen suddenly jumped with a massive drop. The line crashed right through the support level, and Chin's eyes lit up with excitement. It was finally happening. He glanced at Su Yingying, wondering if she truly was a lucky charm. The moment the door opened, the market moved. Lu Xinrong was startled awake, rubbing her eyes as she sat up to ask what was happening. Chin told her to come and see, and she practically sprang off the sofa with a sudden burst of energy. We see her rush to the computer, where the numbers on the screen are flickering with frantic intensity. One red line after another crashed downward, and the balance in the account began to double before their eyes. 200 million became 400, then 5. Lu Xinrong could only stare, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her mouth hung open, unable to utter a single word, as she subconsciously reached for the coffee nearby. She took a sip and winced from the heat, but her gaze never left the screen as she asked in a trembling voice if they should close the position now. Thinking it was enough, Chin simply asked her what she was talking about. He opened the trading interface and explained that they weren't closing. In fact, they were doubling down. Her face twitched at the thought. She was already satisfied with 500 million, but Chin clicked the mouse and increased their position by another 20%. Her hands were shaking as she watched him work. By the time the market closed, the profit had dipped slightly. 450 million remained, but the stakes were now much higher. Chin pulled out his phone to message Su Ming. He told her to transfer the 20 million from his card to the futures account, and she quickly confirmed it was done. She warned him to be careful, but he just smiled and set the phone aside. The following day, Lu Xinrong was distracted all day long, barely enduring the wait until 8, 9, and finally 10 o'clock at night. Before the market even officially opened, the prices began to react, gapping down significantly during the pre-market auction. Then the price plummeted. Lu Xinrong stared at the screen, looking as though she had been frozen to her chair. She didn't move an inch. Chin opened the account to find the profit had reached 1.7 billion. She swallowed hard and spoke. She asked if he was still refusing to close the position, wondering just how high or low he expected it to go. Chin looked at the screen and mentioned a wealth beyond her imagination. Her legs went weak, and she nearly slid right off her chair. She braced herself against the table to steady her body, asking with a trembling voice if Chun was actually being serious. He assured her he was. She slowly sank back into her chair, leaning on the table in a stunned, heavy silence. We see her eyes fixed on the screen as the price neared zero in the dead of night, and Chun began covering his positions. He closed a portion of the short orders to lock in the profits, leaving the rest to wait for the final, decisive drop. At 3:17 in the morning, the price finally touched zero, and Lu Xinrong suddenly bolted upright in her seat. Chen's fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision as he closed out the very last batch of short orders. The numbers on the screen froze at 2.3 billion. Lu Xinrong collapsed back into her chair, gasping for air in pure shock. He then opened the other account, where Su Ming's 20 million had miraculously transformed into over 300 million. But the night wasn't over yet. At 3:20 a.m., the price continued its impossible descent into the unknown. It finally settled at negative $37.63, a number Lu Xinrong could barely comprehend. She slowly turned her head toward Chun, looking at him as if he were some kind of supernatural monster. She jokingly asked if she should bow down to him right then and there. Chun just laughed while she remained dazed. 2.3 billion, the scale of it was staggering. She suddenly grabbed his arm, her energy returning in a flash. She wondered aloud why she was even bothering with real estate when they could clearly conquer the futures market instead. After a night without a wink of sleep, we reach 9 o'clock, and the domestic futures market finally opens for business. With the global markets having plummeted overnight, a morning crash was inevitable, exactly the opportunity Chen had been waiting for. He opened the trading interface and began placing orders, thinking of the materials needed for Luo Wangang's various projects. Hot-rolled coils, glass, cement, anything the construction projects required, he prepared to buy in bulk. He set the prices at absurdly low levels. Meanwhile, in his other account, he had already finished closing his shorts. Near the $0 mark, he had flipped his position to buy crude oil long, while the price still lingered below $10. It was currently cheaper than bottled water, but Chen knew that before long, the conflict in the north would change everything. That war would eventually push oil prices up to a staggering $130. Buying now was essentially printing money. He didn't let Lu Xinrong's account sit idle either, taking 1 billion out of the total profit to begin his next move. Bit by bit, he started building long positions in crude oil, copper, and rubber, diversifying his bets across the board. He bought a little of everything. By 9:30, the first batch of orders was filled, followed by more at 10 o'clock. By 11, the third batch was complete. As we see the transaction records flickering across the screen, the scale is immense. A faint smile played on Chen's lips as he decided it was enough. Later, at 2 in the afternoon, the management meeting began. He walked into the conference room to find everyone already gathered, with Lu Xinrong sitting at the head, her face glowing with excitement. She greeted him warmly, insisting he take a seat, while Chen sat down and took a quick look around the room. The financial director, the engineering manager, the marketing director, and several vice presidents were all present and waiting. Lu Xinrong cleared her throat and got straight to the point, announcing that the funding for the first phase was finally secured. As the others exchanged confused glances, she pointed toward Chun and asked them to guess just how much he had made. She held up 2 fingers, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the reveal as she prepared to drop a bombshell on the staff. From a principal of just 200 million, he had brought in 2.3 billion, an almost impossible return on investment. The room erupted in a chaotic buzz of disbelief. 2,300 million in a single night was simply unheard of. Director Li, the head of finance, stood up so abruptly his chair went flying back as he stared at Chun in pure shock. His mouth hung open, but no words would come out. Chun simply waved a hand, telling the director to stay calm. He urged everyone to sit, explaining modestly that the market had simply presented an opportunity and he happened to be there. Lu Xinrong burst into a loud, unrefined laugh, asking the room if they had been following the news lately. She reminded them that just yesterday, the price of crude oil had actually plummeted into negative territory. She asked the room who else could possibly stumble into such a golden opportunity by pure luck. She admitted she certainly didn't have that kind of luck, but it didn't matter because Mr. Chen did. He was the one who could catch lightning in a bottle, and that was more than enough for her. Lu Xinrong stood up, leaning her hands on the table, and declared that the funding for the first phase was finally settled. Even the second phase was no longer just a dream. They could now go all out on the Southwest project. As thunderous applause filled the room, Lu Xinrong waited for the noise to die down before dropping another bombshell. She announced that everyone in the company, right down to the cleaning staff, would receive an 8,000 yuan bonus. Furthermore, overtime pay for recent shifts would be doubled. Later, around 4 in the afternoon, the mood shifted. Su Ming walked in carrying a thermos of soup for Chun, but her expression seemed a bit strange. When he asked what was wrong, she hesitated, explaining that she thought she had just seen someone. She told him she thought she saw her brother, Su Hai, which naturally caught Chen's attention. She had spotted him in the lobby, and just as the elevator doors were closing, she saw a man who looked exactly like him. It seemed he had seen her too, but he didn't come inside. Chen simply suggested there was a logical explanation. He figured the man was likely there for business, as many companies had been dropping off proposals lately. Chen placed a quick call to the marketing department to have them check the visitor logs, and a few minutes later, the phone rang. The manager confirmed that a Mr. Su had indeed visited, though his company hadn't secured any contracts yet. The manager asked if Chen wanted to make any special arrangements for him, given the potential connection. Chen smiled and said that if there was a suitable project, they could throw a little work his way. He noted the company had a slight connection to their shareholders, but insisted they follow the normal process without special treatment. After he hung up, Su Ming looked at him, realizing he had helped them out simply because it was an easy gesture. But as we often see in these stories, Chen had no idea that this casual arrangement would backfire. Instead of helping, he had inadvertently set the stage for a great deal of trouble. Returning home that evening, he stepped through the door to find Su Ming sitting on the sofa, her eyes red. She had clearly been crying, and his heart tightened as he asked what happened, but she only shook her head. Little Qian ran over to hug her, announcing that Mommy had cried, so Chen knelt down to ask the girl for the truth. He asked what had occurred, and Qian's little face puffed up in a display of pure indignation. She explained that during dinner, Grandpa had hit her mother and called her shameless. A surge of anger flared within Chen. That old man had recently threatened to jump off a hospital roof. Chen was the one who had saved him, and now the man had turned around to strike his wife. He took a deep breath to suppress his rage and took Su Ming by the shoulders to face him. He promised she could tell him anything, vowing never to let anyone bully her again, which only brought more tears. She threw herself into his arms and held him tightly, begging him not to ask any more questions. She pleaded with Zuixing, desperate for him to let the matter drop right then and there. She claimed she couldn't bring herself to say it, so he simply held her and patted her back until she calmed down. He then turned to Qian to ask if her uncle had been there, and upon hearing he was, Chen reached for his phone. He called Suhai directly and demanded to know what had happened today, catching the man off guard. After a brief pause, Suhai's tone shifted sharply, asking how Chen could even have the nerve to ask that. He told Chen Zuixing that he was truly something else, accusing him of pushing his own wife into a pit of fire. He criticized him for acting like nothing was wrong, causing Chen to tighten his grip on the phone. Chen demanded he make himself clear, and Suhai agreed, starting with what had happened to his sister. He accused Zuixing of pushing Su Ming to be Lu Xingrong's mistress just to secure his own wealth, mentioning photos taken by Xiaoya's classmates. Apparently, at a car show, Lu Xingrong had bought his wife a Mercedes worth over $1 million, a grand gesture, to be sure. Suhai added that he had seen his sister at the Yuanjing group himself, carrying a thermal container in her hand. She had been using the CEO's private elevator, and Suhai demanded to know what Zuixing was really up to. He asked if Zuixing had any shame at all, and the young man remained silent as the pieces finally began to fall into place. We see now the true weight of the humiliation she endured at that dinner table, under the judgmental gazes of her own relatives. They had bombarded her with sarcastic remarks until her father, in front of everyone, had reached out and slapped her. All of this happened because of a car, an elevator, and a series of baseless assumptions, and deep down, Zuixing felt a sharp pang of guilt. A new wave of fury washed over him as he looked at Su Ming, sitting on the sofa with her head bowed and shoulders trembling. He took a deep breath and spoke slowly, asking Suhai about the recent contracts his company had secured from the Yuanjing group. He noted that those deals were likely credited to Suhai's performance, which caused a brief, stunned silence on the other end of the line. Suhai asked what he meant, and Zuixing coldly informed him that those contracts were about to vanish, along with any help for the Su family. He explained that he had planned to ask Lu Cheng to speed up the return of their stolen house, but that was no longer the case. Now, they could wait at least 3 years. Suhai could only shout Zuixing's name in shock as the power dynamic shifted. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the coffee table, prompting Su Ming to look up at him with tear-filled eyes. With her face still stained by tears, he walked over and pulled her into a protective embrace. He comforted her, promising that everything would be fine as long as he was there, and little Qian quickly ran over as well. The little girl hugged both of their legs, and so the night passed until the following morning arrived. The marketing director called early to report that manager Su from that same company had returned once again. Zuixing gave a cold laugh, wondering why the man was back after he had personally put a stop to everything the night before. Zuixing told the director to inform Suhai that he had offended a major shareholder, leaving him to figure out the rest on his own. If he couldn't understand that, his company would never secure another contract in Ninghai. With that, Zuixing hung up and returned to his files. We can only imagine the look on Suhai's face upon hearing those words, especially for someone in the local real estate marketing business. To inexplicably offend a shareholder of the Yuanjing group was no small matter. In this industry, it was practically a death sentence. Later that afternoon, the marketing director called again to report that Mr. Chun, the company's CEO, had arrived alongside manager Su. They were practically begging for an audience, but Zuixing simply used the excuse of a meeting to avoid seeing them. He smiled to himself, deciding to let them wait in suspense. To be honest, they deserved a bit of uncertainty after their recent behavior. On the following day, the moment Zuisheng sat down at his desk, the marketing director's call came through once again. It seemed manager Su and their CEO, Mr. Yang, had returned yet again, desperate for a moment of his time. Checking his watch, he saw it was only 9:30. After being ignored for 2 hours yesterday, they were back at the first light of day. They were clearly terrified, so he instructed the director to lead them to the large conference room, the one reserved for major meetings. The director was surprised, noting that the industrial suppliers meeting was scheduled there, but Zuisheng insisted they join that very session. After hanging up, he began organizing the documents for the Southwest District Project, a massive undertaking involving the city's urban reconstruction. The scale of the old city's renovation and the expansion of the industrial zone was simply too vast for one entity to handle alone. From steel and cement to advertising and exhibitions, the project required a massive network of partners to succeed. He needed to gather all the suppliers to lay down the rules clearly, and by 10 o'clock sharp, the meeting was ready to begin. As he pushed open the doors to the conference room, he found it packed with people, his eyes scanning the crowded space. He immediately spotted Su Hai and Mr. Yang. Having arrived late, they were forced to squeeze into 2 small chairs against the wall. They looked entirely out of place, making it impossible not to notice them, and soon Su Hai's gaze landed directly on Zuisheng. His expression froze instantly, his mouth hanging open and his eyes wide with shock, as if he had been turned to stone. He stood there frozen, but Zuisheng ignored him completely, walking straight up to the podium to address the room. "Allow me to introduce myself," he began calmly. "My name is Chun Zuisheng, the new CEO of the Yuanjing Group." We see some people whispering while others exchange meaningful glances as he explains why he has gathered them all today. It was all about the Southwest District Project, the old city renovation and the industrial zone expansion, a massive undertaking. He told them he didn't need to explain the scale. Everyone in that room would be involved for the next 3 years. They would all get a piece of the pie from this project, but he made it clear there was one non-negotiable condition. His voice dropped an octave, warning every supplier that they must follow a unified deployment and act as one. Material standards, construction schedules, and inspection processes would all follow the master plan strictly. Whoever failed to keep up would be out, he declared, his eyes scanning the room to ensure the message landed. Yuanjing Group would take the lead, but there would be plenty of profit left over for the rest of them. However, he reminded them firmly that he would be the one deciding exactly how that profit was distributed. The room fell silent for a few seconds before someone finally spoke up, promising that they would certainly cooperate. Others chimed in, telling him to give the orders, and they would follow, though their voices were hushed with respect. Excitement was written all over their faces. Later, Zuisheng had been back in his office for less than 10 minutes. That was when Su Yingying called to inform him that a Mr. Yang and manager Su were asking for an audience. He told her to let them in, and as the door opened, Mr. Yang entered with a face full of forced smiles. The man extended his hand the moment he stepped inside, greeting him warmly as Mr. Chun. He claimed that the last time they met at the company, he already knew Zuisheng was someone truly extraordinary. He marveled at how quickly Zuisheng had risen to become the CEO of Yuanjing, a turn of events he hadn't expected. He praised him for being so young and successful, and Zuisheng simply took his hand and gave it a brief shake. Zuisheng noted that Mr. Yang was being far too polite, while Su Haijin stood awkwardly behind him at the door. The man seemed unsure whether to enter or retreat, but Zuisheng didn't even spare him a single glance. He asked Su Yingying to prepare tea for Mr. Yang, and she stiffly complied, bringing a cup over to the guest. She placed it before Mr. Yang, leaving Su Hai standing there as his face flushed with a mixture of red and white. There was no tea for him, of course. Mr. Yang, being a shrewd observer, immediately sensed the tension. He could tell something was wrong between them, but knowing they were relatives, he felt it best not to speak openly. Zuisheng decided to be direct, asking Mr. Yang if he had come specifically to secure a part of the project. The man blinked in surprise as Zuisheng pointed straight at Su Hai, stating that if his issues weren't resolved, they wouldn't be receiving any projects at all. At this, Su Hai's expression shifted instantly into one of shock. As Su Hai began to react, Mr. Yang quickly grabbed his arm, trying to keep the younger man calm. He urged him to speak reasonably, suggesting that if he had done something wrong, he should simply apologize. He told him to say sorry to Mr. Chun and be done with it, which left Su Hai feeling a heavy weight in his chest. His face turned a deep, bruised purple as Mr. Yang looked between the two men, sensing the shifting atmosphere. The businessman stood up, suggesting that perhaps he should wait outside while the two of them had a private chat. He pushed the door open and left, leaving only Zuisheng and Su Hai alone in the quiet office. Zuisheng leaned back in his chair, watching him intently before asking if he knew which shareholder he had offended. Su Hai froze. Zuisheng clarified that he wasn't talking about himself. To be honest, he didn't care about the personal slights. The person he had truly offended was Zuisheng's wife and Su Hai's own sister, Su Ming. He revealed the cold truth. She was now officially one of the shareholders of the entire Yuanjing Group. Su Hai's eyes nearly popped out of his head in disbelief, stammering that it was impossible, but Zuisheng only scoffed. Zuisheng reminded him that when he mentioned living in a garden villa, Su Hai didn't believe him, nor did he believe that his sister was a shareholder. But now he asked him what exactly he thought he saw back in that large conference room earlier. And more importantly, as he stood there in that very moment, what did he think he was looking at now? We see Suhai's throat tighten as he struggles to swallow, just as Zuixing reaches for the desk phone. He offered to call Chairman Liu right then and there to let him explain the situation personally. Perhaps the chairman could clarify exactly who had attended the last shareholders' meeting of the Yuanjing Group. At those words, Suhai finally seemed to deflate entirely, standing before Zuixing in a daze. He looked, to be perfectly honest, like a piece of wood that had been struck by a bolt of lightning. Later that evening, after little Qianqian had fallen asleep, Su Ming finished her bath and climbed into bed, clutching the quilt tightly. She pressed herself close to him, and as Zuixing reached out to hold her, she spoke in a soft, hesitant whisper. She thanked him quietly, though when he asked her what she was thanking him for, she didn't immediately explain. Instead, she simply leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. She remarked that sometimes it all felt like a dream, the way their lives had transformed so completely. Qianqian was healthy, the business was thriving, and they had a beautiful home. Then, she paused for a moment. She admitted that thinking back to the time they got married still made her feel a bit of a lingering ache. The wedding had been so meager, none of his family had come, and the atmosphere had been heavy with unspoken tension. With her parents' cold attitude, they hadn't even had a proper ceremony to mark the beginning of their life together. She buried her face in his chest and fell silent, while Zuixing held her, offering no words, only his presence. Deep down, he felt a stir of emotion. When they had married, he hadn't yet returned to this life, and his former self had been a wreck. That man had been a gambler who didn't care for the wedding, leaving Su Ming to face her family's disapproval all on her own. Hearing her say this, Zuixing realized he should give her a proper wedding, as if he were marrying her for the very first time. As he felt the warmth of her leaning against his chest, a quiet sense of excitement began to stir deep within his heart. Never one to delay, he decided to act immediately. The next morning, while Su Ming was still asleep, he rose quite early. He kissed her forehead and headed straight for Ninghai's oldest jewelry store, a place renowned for its bespoke custom work. After the manager listened to his specific requirements, he reached behind the counter and brought out a small, elegant box. The manager told Zuixing that he was in luck, as they had just recently acquired a truly remarkable stone. It was a 5-carat diamond of exceptional quality, boasting perfect proportions, a master-level cut, and incredible brilliance. The manager reiterated that for a family like his, such a diamond, with its perfect fire and clarity, was the ideal choice. Inside the box sat a loose diamond. Under the store lights, it looked as pure and clear as a single, frozen drop of water. The material was exquisite, but they hadn't found a customer worthy of it yet, until now, if he was interested. He offered to start the forge and process it on-site immediately. When Zuixing asked how long, the answer was 3 hours. Zuixing nodded for them to begin, and just 2 hours later, a perfectly round-cut diamond was ready for him. Placed upon a piece of black velvet, every single facet of the stone reflected tiny, dancing fragments of light. It felt as though he were holding a captured star in his hand. By the time he returned home, Su Ming had just woken up. We see her wandering through the living room in her pajamas, while little Qianqian is sprawled on the sofa, busy drawing. He walked over to her, dropped down on one knee, and slowly opened the velvet ring box to reveal the diamond. Su Ming stood there completely frozen as he told her that their previous wedding simply didn't count. He declared that this time, it was he, Zuixing, who truly wanted to marry her. She could only cover her mouth in shock. Tears welled up and spilled over instantly, leaving her unable to speak. She could only nod her head over and over again. Qianqian jumped down from the sofa and rushed over, crying out that Mommy was weeping and reaching for her father. The little girl accused him of bullying her mother, but Su Ming just laughed through her tears, explaining it wasn't bullying at all. She found herself unable to say another word and simply held him tight as Zuixing slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit.